we've been waiting for this. I'm waiting for this for 10 years. No, I'm just kidding. But we've been waiting for a while for this Destiny Ben Shapiro conversation. I'm pretty excited. It's about January 6th. I don't necessarily care about that too much. But you know what? Oh, it's about a lot more than that. It's on Lex Fridman's podcast, by the way. They talk about politics. January 6th, Israel, Ukraine, and wokeism. Woke. You like that one? So let's get this going. I don't know if I'm going to be able to increase the speed because they both talk insanely quickly. So let's get this party started.
Something has to happen with Iran. There has to be some diplomatic bilateral communication there.
No, what has to happen is the containment of Iran.
History moves in one direction, right?
Because one direction is underrated, guys.
Because of time?
Communism, Nazism, all of that was a regression from what was happening at, for example, the beginning of the 19th century and the 20th century.
In what way?
Do you think that today Donald Trump knows that he lost the election?
Absolutely.
So
He has to know that he lost the election at this point. They're actually not talking that fast. I'm surprised.
I don't.
This is one of the areas where we get into this. I don't understand if there's like brain breaking happening.
You don't you don't believe that Trump knows that he lost the election? That's weird. If he doesn't, then is he fit to be president? I mean, not that I don't know if Biden even knows what day it is, but I'm just saying.
Or what's going on. I don't know what world we can ever live in where we say that Trump is less divisive for the country than Biden.
Joe Biden literally used the Occupational Safety and Hazard Administration to try to cram down vax mandates on 80 million Americans.
Just to be clear, like whether you like Trump or not, or Biden or not, or whoever, but Trump is obviously more divisive. That's why people who voted for Biden or Trump liked him, because he was divisive. He was kind of crazy. They're like, I like that he just says things. He says what he's feeling, and he doesn't care about what other people have to say. Right? If you're in that boat, then you acknowledge that he's divisive, right? So just to be clear, Trump is objectively more divisive than Biden. That doesn't necessarily make him bad just on that alone. I personally think it counts against him. But yeah, he's more divisive. I think it's something to keep in mind.
It's insane.
What about supercalifragilistic? And then you're
what about pneumomicroscopic?
Or the science terms.
Yeah, exactly.
Or what about the 7,000 letter thing that's from part of biochem?
I got my education in the Soviet Union, so we just did math.
That's why you're a useful person.
Does body count matter?
What a question. I can't wait for that to be answered. The Lex
Following is a
Fridman
debate
podcast.
between Ben Shapiro and Destiny.
I'm excited, dude. I like both of them, honestly. You know what I mean? We got that. I like both of them. I agree more with, obviously, Destiny, typically. But I like Ben's decorum. And I like that he doesn't use slurs. Okay? I like that a lot, Destiny. All right? Well, I like the guy.
Each arguably representing the right and the left of American politics, respectively. They are two of the most influential and skilled political debaters in the world. This debate has been a long time coming. For many years.
I am certainly doing that.
2.5 hours, and we could have easily gone for many more. And I'm sure we will.
They should just make their own like monthly podcast where they just get together and do something crazy. That's what they should do.
It is only round one.
Ooh.
This is the Lex Fridman podcast.
By the way, round one is better than Dave and Buster's, just so you know.
To support it, please check out our sponsors in the description. And now, dear friends, here's Ben Shapiro and Destiny.
Let's do it, baby.
Ben, you're a conservative. Destiny, you're a liberal. Can you each describe what key values underpin your philosophy on politics and maybe life in the context of this left-right political spectrum? You want to go first?
Yeah. So
Hey, God, guns, and big boobies, baby. That's what I'm about.
I think that we have a huge country full of a lot of people, a lot of individual talents, capabilities. And I think that the goal of government, broadly speaking, should be to try to ensure that everybody's able to achieve as much as possible. So on the liberal level, that usually means some people might need a little bit of a boost when it comes to things like education. They might need a little bit of a boost when it comes to providing certain necessities like housing or food or clothing. But broadly speaking,
yeah, I mean, I believe in providing those in like a reasonable way that still encourages people to not be too lazy. I mean, obviously, with the inventions of technology, advent? I don't know. That's calendar. With the invention of new technologies, though, people are getting lazier. Like, what am I doing right now? I'm sitting on a computer playing Vampire Survivors while I watch a debate, but I'm making money. So people, even though you might think I'm lazy, you think I'm, people tend to have a more favorable attitude towards me than other people who make less money. It's just like the weird thing. People tend to have that. So, like, I understand laziness is like, well, I'm kind of fine with it as long as productivity is still hitting a good amount, so yeah.
I mean, I'm still a liberal, not a communist or socialist. I don't believe in the, total command economy, total communist takeover of all of the, economy. But I think that broadly speaking, the government should kind of like kick in and help people when they need it.
And that government can and should be big.
Not necessarily. I noticed it when
I guess it's as big as it has to be. I don't know if it should necessarily be big.
liberals talk about government, or especially taxes. It seems like they talk about it for taxes' sake or bigness sake. So people talk about taxes sometimes as like a punishment, like tax the rich. I think taxing the rich is fine insofar as it funds the programs that we want to fund. But
Sure,
Democrats have a really big problem demonizing success or wealth, and I don't think that's a bad thing. I don't think it's a bad thing to be wealthy, to be a billionaire or whatever, as long as we're funding what we need.
Do Democrats demonize success? I don't know if I necessarily agree with that. I mean, maybe like some little annoying progressives, but do Democrats do that? I don't know.
Fund.
Ben, what do you think it means to be a conservative? What's the philosophy that underlies your political view?
So first of all, I'm glad that Destiny, you're already coming out as Republican. That's exciting. I mean, we hold a lot in common in terms
What do you mean? How? Because of the
of
because he believes that rich people should still be able to be rich but taxed more. There's no way.
the basic idea that people ought to have as much opportunity as possible, and also insofar as the government should do the minimum amount necessary to interfere in people's lives.
Interesting interpretation on that one. Yeah, I agree with that, but it's an interesting thing saying the government should do the minimum that it has to interfere in people's lives. I agree with that, but what I would set as the minimum is going to be different than another person. Like if I'm seeing a entire community ravished by poverty, the government should be taking care of that and implementing some kind of program to help them. So that doesn't really align with typically conservative like values. We just have a different definition of what you'd consider minimum
In order to pursue certain functions, particularly at the local level. So a lot of governmental discussions on a pragmatic level end up being discussions about where government ought to be involved, but also at what level government ought to be involved. And I have an incredibly subsidiary view of government. I think that local governments, because you have higher levels of homogeneity and consent, are capable of doing more things. And as you abstract up the chain, it becomes more and more impractical and more divisive to do more things. In my view, government is
That's interesting. I mean, I get what he's saying.
basically there to preserve certain key liberties.
It's kind of, I feel like that's more of an American politics issue. Because we are a very culturally diverse country. So, not just when it comes to race, but just different culture. Like Southern white people are different than Northern white people. Obviously, they're stinkier. So
those key liberties pre-exist the government insofar as they are more important than what priorities the government has. The job of government is to maintain, for example, national defense, protection of property rights, protection of religious freedom. These are the key focuses of government.
What about gay freedom?
As generally expressed in the Bill of Rights and the Constitution.
I'm just being a little cheeky because I know he supported the abolishment of gay marriage, which is against the government.
And I agree with the general philosophy.
Last year, at least state choice, which is still against the Constitution.
The Bill of Rights and the Constitution. Now, that doesn't mean, by the way, that you can't do more on a governmental level, again, as you get closer to the ground, which, by the way, is also embedded in the Constitution. People forget the Constitution was originally applied to the federal government, not to local and state governments. But if I'm going to define conservatism, it would actually be a little broader than that, because I think to understand how people interact with government, you have to go to kind of core values. And so for me, there are a couple of premises. One, human beings have a nature. That nature is neither good nor bad. We have aspects of goodness and we have aspects of badness. Human beings are sinful, we have temptations. And what that means is that we have
Destiny, you sinful person being in a polyamorous relationship.
Be careful not to incentivize the bad, and that we should incentivize the good. Human beings do have agency and are capable of making decisions in the vast majority of circumstances. And it is better for society if we act as though they do. Second,
I agree
the
with that.
basic idea of human nature, there is an idea, in my view, that all human beings have equal value before the law. I'm a religious person, so I'd say equal value before God, but I think that's also sort of a tenet of Western civilization, being non-religious or religious, that every individual has equivalent value in sort of cosmic terms. But that does not necessarily mean that every person...
Yeah, like equal inherent value, and then their skill set and whatnot would, dictate something differently, I guess. That's not necessarily how it works out nowadays, but
is equally equipped to do everything equally well. And so it's not the job of government
Blossom super chatted $2. Day one of not donating to Papa Gut.
Well, you did a good job on day one.
Every imbalance of life. The quest for cosmic justice, as Thomas Sowell suggests, is something that government is generally incapable of doing, and more often than not botches and makes things worse. So
maybe. I wonder how.
Those are a few key tenets.
Because here's the thing: anytime you do anything, there's going to be a negative impact. It doesn't matter what you do. What they say, no good deed goes unpunished. You're never going to be able to 100% make everything better. So when you implement a new program, there's going to be negatives, but the question isn't like, are there negatives? The question is do those negatives outweigh the positives, or do the positives outweigh the negatives?
And that tends to materialize in a variety of ways.
Like, I know Thomas Sowell talks a lot about affirmative action. I enjoy Thomas Sowell. He's a smart guy. He talks about affirmative action and about how there's some potential negatives there right? Like the potential negatives are having a negative impact on like white people or things of that nature. But when you look at it, we used to have a structure that didn't allow black people into anything. You create affirmative action. It was better that some white people maybe getting passed over was better than no black people getting any chance at all. So, you know, there's a few different factors there, but sure.
The easiest way to sum that up would the traditional kind of three legs of the conservative stool, although now obviously there's a very fragmented conservative movement in the United States, would be a socially conservative view in which family is the chief institution of society, like the little platoons of society, as Edmund Burke suggested, in which free market and property rights are extraordinarily valuable and necessary.
I agree with that.
Every individual has the ability to be creative with their property and to freely alienate that property. And finally, I tend toward a hawkish foreign policy that suggests that the world is not filled with wonderful people who all agree with us and think like us. And those people will pursue adversarial interests if we do not protect our own interests.
Yeah, I agree with that as well.
Can I ask you a question on that?
If we're not the world leaders, baby, then who's gonna be? China? No, thank you. Russia? No, thank you. At least, you know, we're not perfect, but at least we get to actually vote for our presidents.
It's okay, it's okay. I'm excited for this conversation because I consider you to be really intelligent.
Wow, you want to fuck them, you little stinky boy?
But I feel like sometimes there are ways that conservatives talk about certain issues.
Angie Toasty super chatted $1.99. Sitting cozy here with COVID and watching the gut.
Hey, poggers, dude. Hopefully you make it through. I'm assuming that he's going to go on and talk about how, like basically the friendliness of some conservatives, where they say they'll say things in a very friendly way, but when they elaborate, they're not so friendly.
That seem to defy logic and reason, I guess.
I'm lying.
So here, and I'm sure you feel the same way about. I feel the same way about progressives, but even some liberals for sure. Before I ask this question, it's going to relate to education. We can agree, broadly speaking, that statistics are real and that not everybody could do everything. So for a grounded example,
Taylor Knight became a member.
Hey, thank you so much for the small guy, brother.
My life was pretty bad. I got into streaming and I turned my life around, and that was really cool, but I can't expect everybody to do what I did.
Sure,
right?
I agree with that.
Like everybody being able to join the NBA or to be like a streamer.
Well, of course.
I could join the NBA. I could do it. I could be black.
Sure.
Okay. So I used to be a lot more libertarian.
I'd probably do decently in the WNBA after a couple of years of training, you know?
When I was 21. And one of the things that dramatically changed kind of my view on government manipulation of things in the, I guess, in society came when it came time to deal with my son and the school that he went to. And one of the things that I noticed was when it came time to send my son to school, I could do private education, or I could do public. Personally, I did 12 years of Catholic private education. However, the public schools in Nebraska, depending on where you lived, were very, very, very good. And I opted for a certain district. I bought a house there. I moved there. And then my son was able to go to those schools.
Yeah, I mean, Ben believes in school choice, which is a terrible idea. I'm sure I'll elaborate later, but
and he's been going through. It's
just unrealistic. You can't just say, hey, pick your own school. How are they going to get there? Like, what happens when school gets overburdened because everybody chooses that school, et cetera, et cetera. School choice is not a good idea. Just make every school better, you know?
Those schools. And
it's more complicated than just making the school better. There's, you know, if you're in a shitty area, the people there aren't exactly the greatest. They may not even necessarily be going to school. So there's tons of problems there.
Difference of availability of like technology. These kids are taking home iPads in like first grade. They've got like huge computer labs and everything. Do you think that there is some type of, I don't want to say injustice or unfairness, because I'm not even looking at it that way, just pragmatically, that there might be children that are in certain schools that if they just had better funding or
I feel like we skipped a little bit here. What the fuck?
More access to technologies or things available to them, that those kids would become more productive members of society.
Absolutely. Yeah. I think we should push for that.
And with like a little bit of a help, they could actually achieve more and do better for all of society.
So I think that on the list of priorities, when it comes to education, the availability of technology is actually fairly low on the list of priorities.
Sure. The two things I've heard are food availability and I think air conditioning, I think, are the two biggest ones that I hear. But
sure.
Well, I mean, the biggest thing in terms of education itself, not just the physical facilities that we're talking about, would actually be two-parent family household.
Oh, come on. All right, so actually I kind of agree with everything. First of all, AC, very important. I know it sounds silly, but if you can actually having temperature-controlled rooms is just going to make you more productive. It's a fact. I don't know what else to tell you. Food is also very important. Food helps you grow. I know it sounds silly, but I mean, proper nutrition is going to help you grow. I agree with the two-parent household thing too. Like I was saying, there are, and this is all going to depend on the individual, there are school districts that aren't as good as others, but they're not the worst, but the kids just don't care. They're not getting disciplined at home. They have a shit culture. I'm not specifically speaking about any race or anything like that. I'm just saying, what did I do that for? I'm just saying in general. And it's something that needs to be fixed. How? I have no idea. I don't know. You can't just create a two-parent household. In my opinion, it's more complicated than that. I came from a single mom, so you don't need a two-parent household, but strong family does help. You know? But to me, instead of necessarily going for school enhancement first, which I'm not saying is a bad thing to fund schools, I think that you should try to deal with the class issue first. Because my logic is like, hey, instead of funding the school, like here's the thing. Let's say you fund a school and you make an amazing school. I feel like a lot of the kids probably wouldn't get through it because of family, et cetera, et cetera. But there will be some kids that get through it. They're going to get through it. They're going to have better opportunity, better education. And guess what? They're going to move. They're going to leave like Bingletown, Ohio. I don't know. They're going to go somewhere else. And they're going to, they're just going to move somewhere else. They're going to get a good job somewhere else. It doesn't help Bingletown. It's helping Bingletown would be, how do you provide opportunities to that specific area? How do you make more robust economic infrastructure? That's why I'm a UBI or negative income tax kind of guy. Putting money into communities, having more money to circulate the system. That means that more people will be able to have access to more jobs. That means that other companies, like bigger companies like Walmart's and all these other things, will come into those areas because they know that there's going to be money to be had. You're going to have more money to potentially spend on mom and pop shops. That's where I come from. And then once you get the people the jobs, that creates a more stable household. I would argue less stressful lives create more balanced relationships, higher chance of having a 2-parent household, and then actually getting your kids to engage in school, less stress for the teachers, et cetera, et cetera. So for me, I feel like dealing with the actual middle class, I'm more into fixing that problem over, and I'm not against putting more money into the schools, but I'm more into, getting the issue fixed of people not having, money first. And then I feel like everything else will fall into line. That kind of makes sense to me. The individuals, those people can decide to increase their taxes so that they can have better schools, they get a better this, blah, 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 et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. So,
sure.
Communities that have fathers in them is actually the number one decisive, according to Roland Fryer and many studies done on this particular topic.
Mm-hmm.
And
sure.
The idea
so how do you do that, though?
That
practically, without just saying God.
Money alone, that investment of resources is the top priority in schooling, is belied by the fact that LAUSD, which is where I went to school when I was younger, they pour an enormous amount of money into LAUSD. We're talking about tens of thousands of dollars very often per student, and it does not result in better schooling outcomes.
I just doubt that. That's just not true. I mean, there's probably a diminishing returns, but there's no way that putting more money into students isn't going to increase the success of their outcomes.
And so when you say, if we could give every kid an iPad, would you give every kid an iPad? The question is not, if I had a replicator machine from Star Trek, would I give everybody an enormous amount of stuff? Sure, I would. Every resource is finite. Every resource is limited. And you have to prioritize what are the outcomes that you seek in terms of the means with which you are seeking them. And so, again, I think that the question is I quibble with the premise of the question, which is that, again, the chief injustice when it comes to education on the list of injustices is lack of availability to technology, or that it's a funding problem. I just don't think that's the case.
Sure. And I can half agree with you there, but I don't think any amount of changes in the schools will create 2-parent households. Right, we can't bring it.
I totally agree with you. So that's why I think that the fundamental educational problem is not, in fact, a schooling problem. I think that it pre-exists that.
Sure, but then I feel like this is kind of the.
Well, I want to know what Ben Shapiro. This is the thing. I want to know what Ben's. I want to know what Ben's solution is. That's what I want to hear.
Conservative merry-go-round, where it's like, what can we do to help with schools? So 2 of the things that I've seen, I think, that are usually brought up in research is, one is air conditioning, that children in hotter environments just don't learn as well.
Yeah, true.
And then the second one is access to food. So like kids that are given like a breakfast or a lunch that's provided at school, like increases educational outcomes. Now I agree that neither of these things might be determinative in like, well, 20% of kids were graduating, now 80% of kids are graduating, or these kids are all going, from with their GEDs into the workforce, and now these kids are all suddenly becoming engineers. But in terms of where we can help, do you think there should be like some minimum threshold or minimum baseline of like, at the very least, every school should have a non-leaky gym, or every school should have, if children can't afford lunch or breakfast, like some sort of food provided, or every school should have these like baseline things?
So again, I'm going to quibble with the premise of the question, because I think that when it comes to, for example, food insecurity, school food programs, again, you can always pour money into any program and at the margins create change. I mean, there's no doubt that pouring money onto anything will create change in a marginal way. The question is, how large is the margin and how big is the movement? Right. So the delta is what I'm looking at. And so I think that you're starting at a second order question, which is, what if we ignore what I would think are the big primary questions of education, namely family structure, value of education at home, how much you have parents who are capable or willing to help with homework, what are the incentive structures we can set up for a system?
Yeah, I mean, like, again, capability of being able to help has to do with your own level of intelligence, but also how much you're working. How much do your parents, if you have a 2-parent household, is one person working 60 hours while the other person works 40 hours? What if we only made it so both parents were able to financially only work a 40-hour job? Or what if they could have, afford a tutor? Or what if, these are a lot of questions that are money-centric and actually getting a decent job-centric. I'd argue that most people who have decent jobs that are a couple, they're going to have good outcomes for their kids because they have more time to spend with their kid.
Society that actually facilitate that. How local communities take ownership of their schools.
It doesn't pop up. I went to school in the LA school district, and it's the low in. Wait, what? And it's the low is school student and ruin everything. What the fuck are you talking about? What?
It's a big one, right? All of these issues we're ignoring in favor of, say, air conditioning or lunch programs. And so in a vacuum, if you say air conditioning and lunch programs, sounds great in a vacuum. In terms of prioritization of values and cost structure, are those the things that I think are going to move the needle in a major way in terms of public policy? I do not. And in fact, I think that many of them end up being disproportionate wastes of money. I mean, I've talked before, pretty controversially,
Air conditioning is a waste of money.
about the fact that an enormous amount of school lunch programs are thrown out. Like an enormous amount of that food ends up in the garbage can.
Oh, is that true? That's interesting.
Is there a better way to do that?
Why does it end up in the garbage can? And how? Like, what is the school lunch? Aren't the school lunch programs like peanut butter and jelly? Just make sure your kids can eat?
If there is a better way to do it, then I'm perfectly willing to hear about that better way to do it. But it seems to me that one of the big flaws in the way that many people of the left approach government is, what if we hit every gnat with a hammer? And my question is, what?
I agree with the concept of we have limited resources, we can only do so much. I do agree with that. So I would wonder what his argument is as to like what does he think, other than vaguely saying we need better parents? Like, how do you achieve this goal?
But if the gnat isn't even the problem, what if there is a much bigger substructure problem that needs to be solved in order to, if you're shifting deck chairs on the Titanic, sure, you can make the Titanic slightly more balanced.
I think we need less fat people, and let those fat people give money and food to the poor kids,
Because the deck chairs are slightly better oriented. But the real question is the water that's seeping into the Titanic, right?
Yeah, and I agree with you 100%. But again, I feel like we're on the conservative merry-go-round then of never wanting to address
as any conservative merry-go-round. I can give you 10 ways.
Well, sure, but so here would be the merry-go-round. I would say that like there's a minimum funding for schools that I think would help children, and then we go, well, the thing that would help them the most is two-parent households. And I go, okay, well, two-parent households actually aren't the problem. The issue is access to things like birth control, so that people don't have children early on. And it's like, but the issue isn't actually birth control. The issue is actually you need a certain amount of money to move out early and to get married, and then to have a two-parent household. So it's actually like economic opportunity.
No,
well, it's not.
No, just two-parent household.
That's what I'm saying. Like, how do we get there? Like, what? This is the thing. As like, I agree with Ben, but like, how do you get there? Because it is this kind of idealist perspective. How do you have better two-parent households? Because the answer is going to be, wow, we need more God. I already know that. I watch enough Ben to know that, right?
That's
but like, what are the precursors?
Don't fuck people before you're married and have babies.
Sure,
done.
That's great. We can say.
Yeah. How do you achieve that? It's nice to say, just don't do this. You want to know how you get people to be smarter when it comes to sex? Comprehensive sexual health education. Conservatives aren't really a big fan of that. Better education. Conservatives aren't really implementing anything that's necessarily trying to have better education. It's one of those things where, like, ideally, sure, more religion, more God, keep it in your pants, be a virgin till marriage. These things would help considerably. It's not going to happen. Sorry. I'm not, like, it's just not going to happen. I don't know what to tell you. So how do we work within like the reality of the world? That's what you need to focus on.
Say that and try to fight against, however many hundreds of thousands of years of human evolution, but people will have sex and people will make babies.
And then they used to get married. The vast majority of people in this country with kids used to be married. The vast majority of people with kids in this country now are not married increasingly.
But a lot of these,
something changed. It wasn't human evolution.
But a lot of those things in terms of resting on whether or not people...
I argue the thing that's changing is like lack of access to money. It's hard. Money's a huge relationship stressor. Like, I've been in a situation where I've had like huge financial problems in a relationship. It makes everybody more toxic. It just sucks. So, less of that would create more stable households.
People get married have to do with financial decisions. Do you have the money?
People are worse off now than they were 50, 60 years ago when the marriage rates were higher.
People are delaying the start of their careers because education is going to be increasingly important.
So, in other words, people are richer now and they have more education now, and yet they're having more babies out of wedlock now because they're richer and have more education.
I'm saying that one of the biggest indicators for whether or not somebody's willing to get married is how much money both people are making if they can move out of their household. People don't tend to want to get married at 22 when they've just...
I would argue that the people having kids out of wedlock are not the ones that are formally educated. I feel like we have a wider gap in poverty than we ever have in this country, proportionally. I think that's, or at least generally, I think that's a huge issue.
Just finished college when they don't have the money to move out and they can't afford a house.
Because we have changed the moral status of marriage in the culture, meaning that everyone...
Well, houses are like 1,000 times, that's an exaggeration. Houses are exponentially more expensive than ever. It's not as, you can't like, it's not because of the culture. It's because for whatever reason, like, housing is the only thing that you can buy that goes up in value, really. Like, only necessity, I guess you would say. I hope I'm speaking correctly. But, you could buy a house for $100,000. You buy a house for $100,000 20 years ago, and now it's worth $1 million. It's like, holy fuck, Meanwhile, you buy a car for $50,000, and now it's worth like 10. It's tough. There's only so many places you can live, and those places have to be around a job. Now, obviously, remote work is helping. It's helping that, we can work remotely. But still, that's a huge stressor as well.
One poor, rich, and in between used to get married. That is, by the way, a huge percentage of marriages in the United States used to be what they would call shotgun marriages, meaning that somebody knocked somebody up.
Yeah, and we also had higher levels of abuse. So,
and because they did not want the baby to be born outside of a two-parent household, they would then get married.
Do we think that shotgun marriages, though, are a way to bring back equilibrium to education?
Yes. Yes. Absolutely.
That's just dumb. That's a way to bring back more abuse to women. I don't know what to tell you.
Yes, 100%.
Do we
a
think
child
that
deserves a mother and a father?
I would say one of the reasons why there are less stable marriages is because women have more rights now, and women can defend themselves against abusive partners.
Father.
Sure.
That is the basis for all of this, including education.
Which is such a pain in the ass, because I can't even be abusive to my fucking wife. It's like, oh my God, because then someone's going to find out. I'm just kidding. They'd never find out. My wife she'll ride or die for me, dude. She'd never tell anybody. That's why I love her so much. That's why I choose not to abuse her for now.
Do we think that shotgun marriages are, well, let's say this. Do we think that that's a reasonable direction that society would ever take? Or is this like...
Yes, it was the reasonable direction for nearly all of modern history.
It was, but history moves in one direction, right?
Why?
Because of time?
May not be.
That's kind of funny. Ben gets a little dumpstered on that one.
People don't think that's in what ways?
And I don't think we've ever regressed social standards back to like, oh, well, let's go 100 years back and do things that, used to exist before.
That's weird. The entire left right now is arguing that we regress social standards by rejecting Roe versus Wade. So that's obviously not true.
What?
The Roe versus Wade is not a social standard; it's a Supreme Court ruling. Number one. Number two, if you read the actual majority opinion on Roe v. Wade, we can see that socially we actually never made huge progress on how society viewed abortion. This has always been an incredibly divisive thing, right? Even that was, I think, part of Alito's writing on it was that things like gay marriage, for instance, we've kind of moved past, and it's not really as debated anymore. But abortion was never.
Well, again, it was debated after Roe v. Wade was overturned. Like conservatives, like Ted Cruz, were trying to push for marriage to be basically banned in conservative states. Like it would be state choice, which is against the Constitution. So I mean, there was, but thankfully Biden codified it. So
never a settled topic.
The notion that the arc of history constantly moves in one direction is belied by nearly all of the 20th century.
What do we mean by that?
I mean,
in
the
terms
first
of
half
like
of
women's rights, civil rights,
barbarism, communism, Nazism, all of that was a regression from what was happening at, for example, the beginning of the 19th century and the 20th century.
In what way?
Nazism and communism weren't a regression from what was going on in 1905.
These are, in terms of like communism being a regression, for instance, I'm not a communist, but like the industrialization of the Soviet Union happened under a communist society. The industrialization,
murder of tens of millions of people.
Yeah,
I consider that a regression. A moral regression, which is what we are talking about now. Moral regression, and you're suggesting that moral regression. I wouldn't term a return to traditional values a moral regression. You would, but your suggestion is that history only moves in one direction, and I'm suggesting that history does not only move in one direction. It tends to move actually back and forth.
Sure.
Yeah, sure, it does. I mean, I get what he's saying. He's not wrong with that.
I don't think that all of history moves in one direction.
I don't see a way to force people to get married or to go back to that place without creating substantial issues. Like I said, women having more rights is one of the reasons why marriage is less popular. Because men, and this is a cultural shift, have to do more, and it's fucking annoying. As a man, it's actually very annoying, and I'm sure some women are annoyed too because you used to get to stay home and just fucking household. Now look at you. No, but men have to come to the table with more. It's not enough to just make some decent money and blah, blah, blah. You have to be emotionally attentive. You have to be, being a good father means like actually taking care of your kids instead of just coming home and, farting and grunting and eating dinner while they're, in the vicinity of you. There's a pretty big shift. So I don't see it being a positive to just tell women and decide that like they can't really have rights because we have to get married. I believe in marriage. I think it's a great thing. I think people should be more responsible about their marriage, but I just don't see a way of like moving in that direction.
There are going to be wars. There are going to be times of peace. I think in general, we're more peaceful now than we have been in the past. But I think when we look at the way that people live their lives, I think that we tend to move in a certain direction socially. So when it comes to things like racism or when it comes to things like slavery or women's rights, I think that there are two huge things that probably aren't changing in the U.S. And one is access to contraception and one is women working jobs. I think that these two things are probably huge things that are moving us off of shotgun marriages or getting married very early on. And I don't see, do you think that those two things are going to change fundamentally?
First of all, what the data tend to show is that actually more highly educated people, as you were saying, tend to get married more. So if the idea is that women getting an education somehow throws them off marriage, it's the opposite.
No, that's not what he was saying. What he was saying is that now that women have the ability to work, they can be more self-sufficient and don't have to settle for a guy that they don't want to be with. But he is right. Women that tend to be more educated and make more money tend to have longer standing marriages. If only we could implement programs that would have more of that happen. Oh, fuck. Oh, shit. We got to make people smarter. How do we do that? Give them school lunch, guys, and air conditioning. I don't really know, but yeah, it kind of goes full circle, huh?
Usually,
but those women aren't getting shotgun marriages. Those women aren't having children.
Yeah, but now you're shifting the topic. My topic was
how to get more people married.
And what I'm suggesting,
education. We didn't shift the topic. We figured it out. We have to focus on education, get people to get married and stay married. We need more of a focus on education.
And then you suggested that higher levels of education are delaying marriage and making it less probable. And what I'm telling you, because this is what the data suggests, is that actually as you raise up the educational ladder, people tend to be married more.
Yes, let's implement better education.
They are lower down on the educational ladder. If you're a high school graduate, you're less likely to be married. Then
it's going to be a circular problem. Oh, the households aren't stable enough. You know, well, how do we get them more stable? Educate people. Oh, I guess we just need to stabilize the households. Oh, we can't do that. Why not? Because, right? You have to figure out a way to make households more stable. Provide better economic opportunity to people. That's why I'm like a UBI, negative income tax kind of guy. I think it's a better idea. I think it's a decent idea. Put people money directly to people's hands, less government micromanagement. Try to get rid of our current welfare system in exchange for non-conditional money. Because listen, there's people who are on welfare who are like, why would I work? I'll lose my benefits and I'll have to work like 5 times harder for like no extra money, if maybe even less money. You know, so
if you're a postdoc.
I agree with you, but that's because one of the biggest precursors to getting married is having like a level of economic stability. So as people get more educated, they obtain this economic stability, and then they're in a more comfortable position to explore more serious relationships.
There's another confound there. I mean, the confound is that people in stable marriages tend to be the children of stable marriages, and there's only one way to break that cycle, which is to create a stable marriage, and that is something that is in everyone's hands.
Yeah, by giving them the tools to be in a stable marriage. Like I am in a stable marriage, and my mother wasn't. My wife's mother, my wife is in a stable marriage. My wife's mother wasn't. Right. So like, how do you break that? Well, my mom did well for herself. My mother-in-law does well for herself. We are both, I would argue, probably over average intelligence. We're kind of smartsies, especially my wife. And we're trying our best. You know, like that's it. Like, what do you know, if my mom and my mother-in-law weren't financially like capable, do I think we'd be in this situation? Probably not. That's how you break the cycle. You know, you try to provide more economic opportunity to people.
This notion that it is somehow an unbreakable, unshatterable barrier to get married and have kids. I don't understand where this is coming from. Why is that such a challenge?
I don't think it's unbreakable.
Who's saying that it's unbreakable?
Or unshatterable. The initial point was for school, if we can provide a minimum level of educational stuff for children, that'd probably be good. But when we retreat back to, well, it has to be the families that are fixed first.
You see how do you see how Ben's sitting? Ben is all conversation aside, Ben is sitting like an absolute Chad right now. He's commanding the room. Now, Destiny is correct about everything he's saying, but Ben doesn't have to be, because he just looks sexier. He just, look at him. He's like, oh, money. Oh, you want to get divorced? Gay. That's what he's doing. He's fucking chatting it up right now. Meanwhile, Destiny's he's hunched forward like he hasn't slept. Looks like a goblin. He's always going to lose. He looks like a little baby. You can't look like that. And he's got a fucking leather jacket on. You listen, Destiny needed to come. He needs to stop dyeing his hair blue, and he needs to start cutting his hair. I don't even know if that'll work. I don't know. What could Destiny do to be cooler? Maybe start working out. I don't know. I don't know if Destiny can ever be cool. I think that's the problem.
Fixing families is a multivariate problem.
I am fine within my local community. We all vote. Again, I've suggested that there's a difference between local community and federal. I'm fine with my local community voting for school lunches or air conditioning or whatever it is that we all agreed to do, because the more local you get, the more homogenous.
Yeah, but of course, you live in a local community that's probably financially viable or sound because you're rich and you move to a rich area. What about the people who don't have access to that?
Homogeneity you get in terms of interest, and the more interest you have in your neighbors. All of that's fine. I'm part of a very, very solid community.
There is an interesting amount of irony, though, that we talk about how like there's a reduction in religious values, and part of religious values is community values. There's a reduction in community values, but then somehow we're not going to worry about the community of the entirety of America. You know, like why not? Why isn't the guy over in Texas or Wyoming? Why can't that be, to an extent, your community? Well,
a community we give to each other. We have minimum standards of helping one another. All that's wonderful. When it comes to the actual problem of education, what I object to in the political sphere, and this happens all the time, is everybody is arguing on top of the iceberg about how we can move the needle 0.5 percentage points, as opposed to the entire iceberg melting beneath them, and we just ignore that and we pretend that that's just.
I mean, I agree with that. Again, that's why I'm a big UBI guy. Blah blah blah. I keep saying it. Maybe one day I'll explain further. I mean, I've talked about it before, but I don't feel like getting into it right now. But like, what is Ben's solution going to be other than to say, "Oh, just stay married, sucker"?
Sort of the natural consequence of thing. The arc of history suggests that people are never going to get married again. Well, I mean, actually, what the arc of history suggests, realistically speaking, is that the people who are not getting married are not going to be having kids. And what it also suggests, the people who are married are going to be having kids. And so the demographic profile, actually, over time, is rather going to shift toward people who are having lots and lots of kids.
I think I feel like there's so many people that aren't in marriages having kids. That doesn't make any sense. I think what he's trying to say is that people who get married tend to have kids, so the people who are not getting married won't have kids, and we won't have to worry about this problem. It'll solve itself. But the people having kids are not married. What the fuck are you talking about?
I'm married. I have 4 kids. Everyone in my community is married. It's like minimum buy-in in my community is 4 kids. Okay, and so what's happening actually in terms of demographics is that
what is that, fucking Epstein's Island? Where the hell do you guys live in? Where you have to have 4 kids?
The people who are more religious and getting married are having more kids. And so if you're talking about the arc of history shifting toward marriage, I would suggest that actually demographically over time, long periods of time, not over one generation, over long periods of time, the only cure for low birth rate is going to be the people who get married and have lots of kids.
Yeah, I don't necessarily disagree with any of that, but I'm just saying that, again, on the, I know you're upset when I bring up the term merry-go-round. I think that there are good conversations to be had about people getting married because stable families.
I would have just kept pushing on like, what's the practical solution? Like, you know,
produce stable children, they're less likely to commit crime, they're more likely to go to school, they're more likely to be productive members of society, et cetera, et cetera. I'm not going to disagree with you on any of that. All of that is true. It's just
yeah, Destiny shouldn't have burned the bridge with Hassan. Then maybe he wouldn't dress like such a fucking clown.
frustrating that sometimes when you bring up any problem, all of it will circle back to other things that makes it seem like we can't make any progress in any area.
What always just circles back to religion, which is just simply not that practical.
Without like fixing it.
Especially when religion is not a big fan of gay people or American religion, because again, the Pope says, "Hey, like the gays," and religious Americans say, "Fuck that." We somehow know more than the Pope, who's the closest person to God. Incredible stuff. You know, I honestly, that's one of the things that bothers me about religion is that it doesn't like gay people. I know a lot of gay people. I like the gay people in my life. Like, why the fuck would I support? It's harder to like religion because of that. It's a sticking point because I want to. You know, my wife and I have had the conversation multiple times about our kids getting, you know, doing religious stuff like communions and blah, 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 blah. And I've talked about my mother maybe orchestrating that because my mother used to be a religion teacher. Like, my mom was very active and all that stuff, you know? So it's like, but there's some parts of it that make me just stay away. So.
I mean, I literally just told you that on the local level, I'm fine for people voting for air conditioning.
Yeah, but so for instance, on the local level, so for school funding is done, I think, generally per district. So what do you do when you have poor districts that can't afford air conditioning for their schools?
I mean, the idea there would be that presumably if the society, meaning the state, and I generally don't mean the federal state, I mean like the state of California, for example, decides that everybody ought to have air conditioning, people will vote for air conditioning, and that's perfectly legal. And I don't think there's anything...
Oh, okay. So, okay, just to be clear. Okay. A little confusing what just happened here. It made my farts explode. What happened is Ben's like, hey, local level. I believe in local level voting. I'm assuming what he meant was district because he keeps referencing district. But then Destiny's like, well, what if your district's poor? Oh, well, then you expand that to like the state level. From like the local level to the state level. It's like, okay, so like what's the problem with expanding from the state level to the national level? Like, it's ideal, like fundamental or potentially, ideally. You know, I understand the concept of only having limited funds, but...
morally objectionable about that per se.
Cool.
I also don't think that that's going to heal anything remotely like the central problem.
Sure,
and I think that what tends to happen in terms of government is people love arguing about problems that can be solved by opening a wallet. And nobody likes to...
Kenobi super chatted $2.53. Papagayi, you are
number.
like really caked today. Kissing face.
Like really caked? It's like you're saying caked up? Okay, thank you. I appreciate that.
solve a problem by, you know, closing their sex life to one person, for example, or having kids.
Yeah, Destiny, you fucking cuck.
Within a stable religious community. Like,
got him! I'm just like half kidding. Like, I'm not actually this judgmental about his relationship. I just think it's funny, just to be clear.
Society. I'm fine with arguing about...
Yeah, why not go national, go global? I think America should take over the whole fucking world, dude. Fuck it at this point. You know, we're the best anyway. God damn it. Who cares?
each of these policies. And whether we apply them...
You want air conditioning Africa? Just be part of America. Boom, we're done.
or not is a matter generally of pragmatism, not morality. It's a matter of incentive structures, not per se morality. Because incentive structures do have a moral underpinnings. There's such a thing as, for example, if you're going to use a welfare program, you have to decide how effective it is, to what crowd it applies, where the cutoffs are. Does it disincentivize work? Does it not? All of these are pragmatic concerns. But on a moral level, the generalized objection that I have to people on the left side of the aisle is that they like to focus in these conversations. Very often it feels as though it's a conversation with people who are drunk searching under the lamp for their keys. The problems they want to look at are the problems that are solvable by government. And then all the problems they don't want to look at, which are the actual giant monsters lurking in the dark and not particularly solvable by government, are the ones they want to ignore and assume are just the natural state of things. And I don't think that's correct at all.
And I 1,000,000,000% agree. And then obviously my criticism for the conservative side is the exact opposite, where there are parts where government could remedy some issues. For instance, children having sex with each other and producing other children out of wedlock. Like, sometimes having after-school programs is nice to prevent that. Like, I didn't have...
Ew, Destiny, you're thinking of kids fucking gross.
Have time for these things. When I was in school, I was doing football practice. I was doing cross-country practice. I went in early for a band, I agree with you that sometimes people only focus on one of the...
That's a reasonable point, That's a reasonable point, man. Maybe if kids had more to do, they wouldn't be so horny.
Problem as I hate to be that guy.
I didn't have sex till I was like 20 years old, dude. I was a loser. And look at me now. Still a loser, but my job's pretty cool. I'm playing fucking Vampire Survivors. I could be doing anything. I could be completely doing nothing. I could just sit here and fucking watch a video.
But as somebody that have you ever watched The Wire?
Sure.
I'm not going to cite The Wire as a real life example, but like obviously there's only so much you can do in a school when the children coming in are so beyond destroyed because of the family life and everything prior to them even getting to school that day. So I agree. Government is not like the solution to broken families. That would never be the case.
And it's actually not the solution to education, depending on the kind of solutions that you're talking about. Some solutions, yeah. Some solutions, no.
Yeah.
So
the only thing I'm looking at is, as I said earlier, just like these minimum threshold things where it's like, where can government make? Because you mentioned marginal, which I think is a really good way to look at things. There's marginal cost and marginal utility to things, where the first $1,000 per student you spend might give you a huge return, but the extra $20,000 after.
Yeah, I think these are all pragmatic discussions.
Sure.
Yeah, that's fair. Like, I know that the diminishing returns of spending too much money. Like, obviously, more money into something is generally going to make it better until you get to like a certain point of diminishing returns where it's like, okay, what are we really doing at this point? I agree.
And actually, this is what we used to hash out in legislatures before they turned into platforms for people grandstanding. But yes.
Sure. Okay. Yeah.
As we decide.
Yeah, which is an interesting conversation in and of itself because, you know, you can now what did I just get? Whatever. You can now. What are you getting at? You can now watch like CNN, whatever. You can watch shit on. You can watch politicians fucking talking to each other in Congress now. C-SPAN, and it kind of feels like, especially with TikTok, now that there are people.
Super chatted $2.53. Sorry, I mean you're looking really cute today.
Thank you.
Kissing face, smiling face with hearts.
Thank you so much. I appreciate it. You can see on TikTok now. There's clips, what it seems like, clip moments that politicians are looking to kind of grandstand and make it seem like they're really morally virtuous and good people for some bullshit clip. Like, it's so weird. You know, I'm not saying we shouldn't be able to watch that stuff. I'm just saying we should be more aware of it. You know, anytime I come across something like that, whether it's a progressive or whatever, I'm always like a little skeptical. I'm just like, what is the meaning of this? You know, what is the meaning of this?
And from the heavens of philosophical discussion of conservatism and liberalism, let's go to the pragmatic muck of politics. Trump versus Biden.
Oh,
Between the two of them, who was in their first term the better president?
Honestly, I like Biden. I think he's doing a good job. Listen, here's the thing. I appreciate Trump saying that he was going to do something. You know, when it was him and Hillary, I remember the conversation was jobs are disappearing, and they're like, "What are you gonna do, Hillary?" She's like, "It's just fucking gone." And Trump said, "I'll bring them back," and he did bring them back. He brought a lot of jobs back, but he also massively inflated the deficit. Right, and very quick, deficit is the amount of money we're spending over the money we're taking in, and a surplus is if we're spending, we're bringing in more money than we're spending. It was going down under Obama. We started at 1.4 trillion under Bush, went down to about 650 billion. Before COVID, Trump brought it back up to $1 trillion. And that was the tax cuts, right? And, then the pandemic hit, which was heavy. And I lost a loved one to that. And I knew people that had passed away because I had to work through it. And I didn't like that Trump didn't take it seriously. I didn't like that he was pushing conspiracy theories on it. And Biden came in like, yeah, it was reasonably managed by then. We were getting into a better spot, but I think Biden did decently. Codified gay marriage. He's being more aggressive on households making over $400,000 money wise. I can appreciate that. He got Mexico to promise to pay for $1.5 billion for the border wall technologies. I appreciated his strength in the wars or the Ukraine situation and Israel and Palestine. I mean, I don't think he's that bad. I kind of like he can't really speak sometimes. But overall, he's decent. He's not as divisive, which sometimes isn't as fun. But I appreciated that. I mean, I honestly did. I don't think that the deficit's going down. But then again, we're recovering from COVID. We're mostly recovered, I'm just saying. So I get that. But I thought he was pretty decent. I honestly think that Biden's doing a decent job. I just don't know if he'll live another term.
And thus, who should win, if the two of them are, in fact, our choices, should win a second term in 2024?
I would still be on the side of Biden. So
Ben?
Sure. So in terms of actual job performance, you have to separate it into a few categories. In terms of actual performance in foreign policy, I think Trump's foreign policy record is significantly better than Biden's. The world being on fire right now being a fairly good example of that.
I don't think that Trump would here's my okay. So the world being on fire. I'm just going to assume we're talking about Israel, Palestine. We'll just say Israel and Ukraine, because those are the people that we support. Those are the sides that we're generally more in support of. When it came to Ukraine, I feel like Trump's response would have been to suck Putin's cock. I don't like Russia. I like Russian people, right? I'm sure I've jacked off to plenty of Russian women, maybe a couple of men, certainly many femboys. But I don't think the response would be to bow down and give in to Russia. Their views on the world are antithetical to ours. Ours are, freedom for people. Is it perfect? No. You can't even vote, really, in Russia. It's not as free. I don't like them taking over Ukraine. I don't like the fact that they genocided people, Ukrainians, to take land through starvation. So I feel like Trump's response on the Ukraine would have been weak. It would have been pathetic. When it comes to Israel-Palestine, he already provoked them, the Middle East, by what did he do? He made like Israel the fucking national whatever. I'm paraphrasing, guys. Fuck. I forgot exactly what it was. What he recognized Jerusalem as Israel's capital. That pissed off Palestinians, people in Gaza. That disrupted that created a lot of tension in the Middle East. Right. So I don't think his responses would have been particularly good. It's one of those things where I feel like I'm happy that these things are happening under Biden, because I think he handled it better than Trump would have.
And we can get into each aspect of the world being on fire and where the incentive structures came from and how all of that happened in a moment. When it comes to the economy, I think that Trump's economic record was better than Biden's.
Again, I mean, yes, he cut taxes, but they just weren't sustainable.
Doesn't mean he didn't overspend. He did. He wildly overspent. But he also had a very solid record of job creation.
So does Biden. I mean, yeah, so does Biden. I mean, part of it's because it's easy to create jobs out of COVID because everybody had to stop working. But still,
a huge percentage of the gains in the economy went to people on the lower end of the economic spectrum. Actually, the gross
I don't think that's true.
Income to the average American was about $6,000 during his term. The unemployment rates were very, very low before COVID. I think that you almost have to separate the Trump administration into sort of before COVID and during COVID, because COVID obviously is a sort of black swan event, the most signal change in politics in our lifetime, and so. Governance during COVID is almost its own category, which we can discuss. But
I agree with not punishing Trump for COVID. Well, I actually disagree with that. The phenomenon of COVID wasn't in Trump's control. I think his response was shit. But yeah, I get what Ben's saying.
Foreign policy, in terms of domestic policy, I think that Trump was significantly better than Biden has been, and that's on the upside for Trump. On the downside for Biden, obviously, you're talking 40-year highs in inflation. You're talking about savings being eaten away. You're talking about everything being 20 to 30% more expensive.
Yeah, again, that's a lot to do with the different wars and the power struggles that are going on. That's not really Biden's fault.
You're talking about massive increases to the deficit, even at a rate that was unknown under Trump. The deficit under Trump raised by about a little under $1 trillion every year up until 2020. Again, 2020 was COVID year, so everybody just
I was right, $1 trillion.
Decided that we're going to fire hose money at things. But then Joe Biden continued to fire hose money at things in 21, 22, and 23. That obviously is, in my opinion, bad.
I mean, Trump fire hosed money at things too, just differently. He cut taxes primarily for rich people and corporations. I mean, it's still fire hosing money. It's just a different way of doing it.
Economic policy. And then you get to the rhetoric, and you get to the stuff that Donald Trump says. And as I've said before,
which is a big deal. Like, I understand I'm a New Yorker too. I don't really care that. Like, I'm not offended by what Trump says because I get it because I'm a New Yorker and so is he. But your ability to communicate with people is very important. If you communicate with people like shit, you're not enough. It makes you a less effective leader. And if you're if you're the president of the entire country, you need to be sensitive of everybody in the entire country. Of course, there's some things that do need to be said. But like that's something I think that does play against Trump. Like you need to be able to speak with decorum, and he simply does not do that.
My view is that on Donald Trump's epitaph, on his gravestone, it will say Donald Trump. He's had a lot of shit. I think that Donald Trump does say a lot of things. I think that is basically baked into the cake, which is why everyone who's bewildered by the polls is ignoring human nature, which is at the beginning, when you see something very shocking, it's very shocking. And then if you see it over and over and over and over for years on end, it is no longer shocking. It is just part of the background noise, like tinnitus. It just becomes something that your brain adjusts for. And so do I like a lot of Donald Trump's rhetoric? No.
I mean, yeah, you could say the same thing about anything, right? Like about annoying fucking liberals on TikTok, but you still platform those and go like, look, this is all liberals because some crazy non-binary 13-year-old,
Oh, and I never have. Do I think that is dispositive as to his presidency? No, I do not. When it comes to Biden, again, I think he's underperforming economically. I think that his foreign policy has been really a problem. Even the things I think he's done right are, I think, band-aids for things that he created by doing wrong. And when it comes to his own rhetoric, you can argue that it's grading on a curve because Trump was coming in with such wild rhetoric that just a maintenance of that wild rhetoric doesn't really change, again, the baseline.
What?
For Biden, he came in the same way that Obama did, on this sort of soaring rhetoric of American unity. I'm the president for all. Like Trump came in, he's like, listen, I'm the president for what I am, and I'm going to say the things I want to say. I'm beyond the toilet, and I'm tweeting. We're like, okay, so that's what it is. With Biden, he came in with, I'm a president for all Americans. I'm trying to unify everybody, and that pretty quickly broke down into a lot of oppositional language.
I don't think so. I think that Biden has been focusing on specifically, if you actually listen to what he's saying, if you can listen, specifically criticizing not Trump voters, but like the insane Trump supporters. He's been kind of otherisming, I guess you would say, those individuals. I don't necessarily think that's a bad idea because, like, it's if you vote for Trump, that's fine. I don't. But if you're a Trump, like, if you're like a hardcore, diehard, a MAGA hat wearing Trump supporter, you're fucking insane, and you're a weird person, and you're kind of a loser because that's psychotic. All right, you're a part of a cult. All right, bizarre.
About his political opponents in particular, and attempt to lump in, for example, huge swaths of the conservative movement with the people who participated, for example, in January 6th or who were fans of January 6th. The sort of lumping in of everybody into MAGA Republicans who wasn't personally signed on to an infrastructure bill with him. That sort of stuff, I think, has been truly terrible. I thought his Philadelphia speech was truly terrible. And again, I think that you do have the problem of he is no longer capable of, certainly rhetorically, unifying the country when every speech from him feels like watching Nick Wallenda walk across a volcano on a tightrope. I mean, it really is like you're just sort of waiting for him to fall. I mean, it's sad to say. I mean, the other day he was speaking for what was, in effect, his campaign kickoff, and this is in Valley Forge. And I mean, Jill rushed up there, like off the as soon as he was done. Jill rushed up there, like she'd been shot out of a cannon to come and try and guide him away so he didn't become the Shane Gillis Roomba. And that's not really,
What? The Shane Gillis Roomba? What?
Let's put it this way. It does not quiet the soul to watch Joe Biden rhetorically. Again, that's a different problem than Trump's problem. But that's my analysis.
This is one of the areas where we get into this. I don't understand if there's like brain breaking happening or what's going on. I don't know what world we can ever live in where we say that Trump is less divisive for the country than Biden. I think it is so patently obvious. Trump is so divisive. Like, not only does Trump make an enemy out of every person in the opposition party, he makes an enemy out of his own party and every single person.
Hey, what is it? Ron DeSanctimonious?
around him. Like, we all watched him.
I heard he retired that, unfortunately.
And bully, Jeff Sessions. We all watched him bully his own party on Twitter. We all watched like all of these people walk away from him. Even recently, I think.
Even bullied his vice president because the vice president wouldn't like fucking. I think he passed the torch on to Biden. Like I forgot the specifics, but he wouldn't like reject the election. He was like, no, these are fair election results.
His the Secretary of Defense Esper and John Kelly, the Chief of Staff, were saying, I think Trump is a threat to democracy. You've got all of his prior people that were around him, some of his closest allies. You've got Bill Barr that won't co-sign a single thing that he says. You've got all these people that he used to work with that all say Trump is a horrible, evil person. He is ineffective as a leader. He doesn't accomplish anything, and he didn't. To say that Biden has failed at bipartisanship when we've gotten the CHIPS Act, we've gotten the IRA, we've gotten the ARP, we've gotten the bipartisan infrastructure bill, when we've gotten like all this major legislation that is working in this historically divided Congress, as opposed to Trump that got us tax cuts and deficit spending. I don't understand where we ever are in this world where Biden is somehow more divisive than Trump. Even the speeches that Ben is bringing up, they always bring up. I remember that one. I think we might have even done it on our episode. The one speech that Biden gave, where at one point that like the background is red, and
that's the Philly speech I referenced.
Yeah, and they're like, "Oh my God, it's over. This is the end." And then meanwhile, you got Donald Trump, coming into office saying things like, "If you burn the flag, you should have your citizenship revoked," or talking
about which is I think that's against freedom. I think that's against the Constitution, guys, you can burn the flag. It's your freedom of speech, which you can. I mean, it is what it is.
But
I love the flag, though, guys. Don't do it. It makes my penis soft. It's very sad.
DNC, that I'm going to investigate every single one of these media organizations for corruptness. I'm going to open the libel and defamation laws. I'm going to take all of these guys to court. You've got this weird Project 2025 stuff where. Is it John Paschal, I think, is talking about, we're gonna investigate all of these people and we're gonna try to throw crimes at all these people. Trump is like the most divisive president I think we've ever had in at least in my lifetime of being an American citizen. And the rhetoric from him is it's on a whole other level in terms of the demonization of political opponents. I mean, this is a guy that's known for giving his political opponents bad nicknames, right? Like, that's what Trump does. It's funny, but even as a resident of Florida.
Which is a little bit based, guys. It's a little bit based, if you're being real.
If Florida had another natural disaster, do you think Trump would withhold aid? Because you had, I think that was one of the few nice things that DeSantis actually said about Biden, was that like, hey.
What is this clip you want me to take a look at? Oh, is this what he's referring to?
My favorite thing about Biden is anytime Biden finishes a speech, he transforms into a Roomba.
Is this what he was referring to before? That's silly. Okay. I like Shane Gillis.
Listen, when the buildings collapsed in, I think that was Miami Beach, that, for the hurricane stuff, that Biden was there. He was saying, if you guys need aid, however many billions, you can have it. Meanwhile, Trump, I think, was threatening to withhold federal funding from blue states that wouldn't, I think it had to do with the National Guard stuff, the deployment of the National Guard, that they weren't like doing enough for the riots. And Trump was threatening to withhold aid from some of these blue states. Trump is literally the most divisive person in the world. I don't see how on any metric he is ever succeeding in the divisive category. In terms of the economy, I do think it's funny that Republicans are very keen to say that, like, well, we can't really grade Trump, post-COVID, because obviously COVID messed everything up, which is fair. But pre-COVID, what did Trump do? Yeah, he did deficit spending, tax cuts. He presided over historic low interest rates and an economy that was already like blazing past the final years of Obama. We were posting all-time highs in all the stock markets in 2013.
That's true. A lot of the positives were because of Obama. You know, another white man stealing a black man's riz.
13 onwards, unemployment rates were falling. Now under Biden, unemployment rates are even lower than they were under Trump. But it sucks.
Yeah, that's what I had thought.
Sucks that for Trump we can say, well, we can't.
I remember Biden said it the other day. He didn't say it. It was just on his Instagram, and I was like, damn, is that true? And then I went back to looking at Instagram titties.
I really hold him accountable for 2020. That was COVID. Well, all we have for Biden is post-COVID. We don't have any pre-COVID Biden, economy. And it was the same thing for Obama too, coming in right after the housing collapse as well. And it sucks that Republicans are able to
destroy the economy, honestly, and then a Democrat comes in and starts getting the ball rolling on fixing it, and then the Republicans will ruin it again. That's not to say that like conservative ideology is all bad. I believe in some of it. I believe in the idea of like generally smaller government. Like I said, I'm a UBI guy, and you'd be like, well, that's bigger government. No, it's not. It's a replacement to welfare, ideally. You know, I agree with like less micromanaging and giving people individual choices and giving them the tools that they need instead of just giving things to them. You know, I'm down with that. I'm down with the concept. I like God. He's cool. I like marriage. I think it's pretty great. But, you know, I don't understand the obsession with being financially irresponsible. Just being like, we're just going to cut taxes. Why? For fucking what? It's insane. It's almost like, and the Democrats aren't perfect, but it's almost like, you know, Republicans just kind of come in and virtue signal. They're like, lower taxes. And then we're like, wow, that's okay. Here's an extra $10. Cool, I guess. I'm a little happier. Everything's perfect. Oh, the Democrat came in and he started actually spending responsibly. Wow, what an asshole. What?
Walk out of office, having burned the entire American society to the ground economically. And now we've got to try to evaluate, okay, well, what did Obama do during his first 2 to 3 to 4 years just trying to recover from where the housing crash left it? And then we look at Biden now, who's trying to recover from COVID. And now we're grading him on a totally different scale than what Trump is being graded on. Yeah, that sucks, I think.
Can you comment on the foreign policy?
On the foreign policy, I'm going to be honest, I am very liberal. I'm very not progressive. I'll probably come off as more hawkish than others because I'm not a big fan of this. Which also, if Ben agrees, like I think people like Trump are going to be the most dovish, isolationist people ever. They don't want to do anything internationally. They just want to, protect America, be at home, protect our economy, don't do anything.
Yeah, I like spreading our influence around the world. Man. I think it's based as hell.
Internationally, which is why he was constantly undermining NATO and constantly, attacking all of the European Union and, cheering on the UK for Brexiting away from the EU. I think that being said, I think that Biden's done a phenomenal job when it comes to foreign policy. I think that the coalition building was so important for Ukraine, Russia, and I'm so happy that he decided to go to our European allies and our NATO allies and try to build a coalition of people to help Ukraine so that wasn't only the United States. Personally, especially after doing a whole bunch of research, I do tend to side with Israel over Palestine in a lot of the Israeli-Palestinian
based
conflicts. I'm glad that Biden, while remaining a staunch defender of Israel, is trying to rein in some of the more aggressive posturing towards the Palestinians in the Gaza Strip.
Yeah, sure. I agree with all that.
I'm proud that Biden said, hey, listen, we're going to delay some of these attacks. Hey, listen, we are going to allow humanitarian aid here. Hey, listen, we are going to try to, not kill as many Palestinian people down there while still,
Hey, listen, you gotta be more humanitarian. We gotta be good guys, okay? The number one indicator of a good society is how friendly we are. I watched a video about this. It was very interesting. You know what I mean? You could look it up. I don't care about sourcing it. Suck my balls. But it talked about how friendliness was like the number one determining factor of whether a society, succeeds or not. And then it talked about this concept of like, let's say you have 100 people in a friendly society versus a non-friendly society. And then you have one person in each society with like a really good skill. I don't know, some skill, fishing, who cares? In the friendly society, you'd probably expect a lot more people to be able to learn and get taught to fish than in the unfriendly society, which means they can pass that skill on to other people. So while maybe that unfriendly society might, on baseline be more effective, they don't pass ideas or teachings or any of those things onto people. If you're not a friendly person, you're probably not going to be able to learn as well. And if you're not a friendly person, you're probably not going to be able to teach as well. Friendliness, empathy, these are very important, beneficial things. And that's what I think that one of the values that we should be pushing. I think it's a very good idea.
Signaling that he would be a staunch supporter of Israel in the conflict, assuming the civilian casualties don't go too high. For foreign policy, blemishes. The biggest one you can give to Biden is Afghanistan and the pullout there. But man, are we going to talk about, the Inspector General report that says that one of the biggest reasons why the Afghanistan pullout was so disastrous was because of the Doha Accords, where Donald Trump headed talks that didn't even include the Afghanistan army. These were disasters. Like when Biden took office, we had 2,500 troops left in Afghanistan. What was the options even afforded to Biden at that point? Obviously, you've got the abandonment.
And once we left, bro, they didn't let women go to school anymore. Pretty fucked up. Or university.
The Kurds in northern Syria, for the Turkish armies to lay waste to. Talking about Iran and North Korea, although I'm not sure where men would land on those. But yeah, that's a broadly.
That's a lot from both. You want to pick at something where you disagree with here?
Well, I mean, there's a lot. So I want to ask a few questions on each one of these.
Yeah, sure.
So let's talk about divisiveness for a second. So there's no one who can make the case that Donald Trump is not divisive.
Yeah.
Of course, he's incredibly divisive. It's a given. Do you treat Biden's rhetoric with the same level of seriousness that you treat Trump's rhetoric? Or I should probably put that the other way around. Should we treat Trump's rhetoric with the same level of seriousness as Joe Biden or, say, Barack Obama's rhetoric?
Well, I don't quite understand the question. Yes.
I'm gonna try to be concise when I say this. Broadly speaking, especially in studying Israel, Palestine, and Ukraine, Russia, I try not to take politicians at their word because sometimes they just say stuff to say stuff. I understand that, but broadly speaking, I'm gonna look at the rhetoric and.
Or is that is that supposed to be a gotcha question? Is he going to bring up when Biden said dumb shit about black people?
The actions, and I am going to grade them the same. So yes, I would hold Biden and Trump to the same standard.
Right. So my feeling is, and this is one area where, for clarification, we're going to have a division, is that I, of course, don't treat Trump's rhetoric in the same way that I treat Biden's or Obama's. He's utterly uncalibrated, and he says whatever he wants to at any given time, and it doesn't even match up with his policy very often.
Okay. Why is that? Why wouldn't you take that seriously? Like, I don't know. Why wouldn't you? Should hold him to an incredibly high. He's a president. He's the most powerful person in the world. So, right? I mean, why wouldn't you?
Can I ask you, like, for our head of state, our chief executive, shouldn't rhetoric be arguably one of the most important things that he does?
I mean, the answer would be yes. And now I've been given a choice between a person who I think in calibrated ways says things that are divisive and a person who in uncalibrated ways says things that are divisive. And so the evidence that Joe Biden is divisive is every poll taken since essentially August of 2021. He is, by all available metrics, incredibly divisive. A huge percentage of Americans are.
Why? What do you mean? What makes him divisive? What is it? What?
Deeply unhappy, not only with his performance, but don't believe he's a uniter. That's just the reality, and that may just be a reflection. I mean, honestly,
is that true? What is he referencing? I feel like this is not true.
We may be putting too much on Trump or Biden personally. It may just be that the American people themselves are rhetorically divided because of social media, and social media can, in fact, be a cesspool.
One thing that I would ask you about that, though, is I agree, especially when you look at the favorability, but sometimes.
Favorability is going to be low. I mean, again, people are upset with that, like gas and milk and eggs are expensive. Totally understandable. Those are the core things that we all engage with, especially gas. I get it. It's not really Biden's fault. We were fighting, we have gas prices are pretty lowish now, right? But for a while, it was frustrating. I understand that because that's a big part of it. But that was because we were fighting a fucking, like, an issue with, not a war, but we were, proximity fighting, I guess you'd say, with Russia.
Look at these polls when you start to disaggregate them by party. I wonder if it's actually, is Biden historically divisive? Or I'm trying to think of a really polite way to say this. The people that like Trump worship Trump. I don't know.
Yeah, they're fucking insane. They're psychopaths. Again, if you voted Trump, I get it. I'm not saying like you're bad for voting on him. It's a difference between voting for him and like fucking being a fanatic for that guy. There's two very different things.
Like, one of the most prescient things that Trump could have probably ever said was that I could kill someone on 5th Street and nobody would hold me accountable. So is it really that Biden is historically divisive, or is it that every single Trump supporter will always say that Trump is great? And
no, the reason I would say that Biden is, in fact, historically divisive is because Republicans felt much more strongly about Barack Obama than Joe Biden, actually.
But they didn't feel as strongly about Trump as they did about, like, Romney or McCain, right?
In what way? I mean,
they didn't fucking suck his balls.
Allegiance to Trump.
Oh, no, there's certainly more allegiance to Trump than there is to Romney or McCain, largely because Trump won in 2016. But
well, no, it's because Trump's insane.
Beyond that, the point that I'm making is that if you're looking at the stats in terms of divisiveness, Republicans always find the Democratic president divisive. The question is where the rest of the country is. And right now, there are a lot of Democrats who either don't agree with Biden or find him divisive. There are a lot of independents who find him divisive. So when we're comparing these things, I don't think they're leagues apart in terms of the divisive effects of what they say. Right, and I'm separating that off from like the inherent content of what they say, because obviously what Trump says is more divisive just on like the raw level. I mean, if he's insulting people as opposed to Joe Biden doing MAGA Republicans, like if I were an alien come down from space and look at these two statements.
Yeah, MAGA Republicans are not all Republicans. They're not even people who would vote Trump. They're just fucking insane people. So.
And I'd say this one's more divisive than this one. But then there's the reality of being a human being in the world, and that is everyone has baked Donald Trump into the cake. And Joe Biden, again, started off with a patina of being non-divisive and now has emerged as divisive. If you don't mind, I actually want to get to the foreign policy questions, because this one is actually slightly less interesting to me.
Sure. Just one quick thing, I guess.
I mean, you started with the fucking divisiveness question.
Because we can say the reality of it, and we can look at opinion polls. What if we look at like legislative accomplishments? Like, Biden is working on a 50-50 divided Senate. Donald Trump had both houses of Congress and the Supreme Court and got like no major legislation passed.
Well, I mean, he did lose Congress in 2018, but
prior to that, because we got the infrastructure bill, I think, in 1 year, which Trump promised for his entire presidency, didn't get anywhere on it.
I mean, yes, his Republican base was not in favor of mass spending on infrastructure, and neither am I. So there's that. I think.
Yeah, but didn't Biden work with Republicans to get that in there? So
that's mostly a state and local.
But they were in favor of mass spending for tax cuts.
That's not spending. I mean,
that is a spending. It's called, I believe that's the fungibility of money. It's still spending. Cutting taxes is spending, just like putting money into things is spending. It's a different type of spending. All right, we have a very large country. It needs money to function. If you don't agree with that, you're an idiot. I don't know what to tell you. Roads are not free. A lot of infrastructure isn't free. Military isn't free. Let's cry about it. Okay, it is what it is. Cutting taxes all willy-nilly is a shitty form of spending. It's stupid. It's a dumb idea. I mean, listen, we should be more efficient with our money. I agree with that. But just cutting taxes just so that people feel happier when it is just a dumb idea and massively inflates our deficit is just stupid.
And I mean, effectively it is, right? Like,
effectively, it's not.
Well, if you're cutting tax receipts, but you're not changing the level of spending, like Biden did with the IRA.
Again, we have a fundamental philosophical difference here. I think that when the government takes my money, that is not.
It doesn't matter. It's still money being spent. It's still less money being collected in a different way. Oh well, they just didn't collect it from you. Okay, like it's still it's financially irresponsible.
It is not the government somehow being more fiscally responsible. And when the government allows me to keep my money, I don't see that as the government spending. I see that as my money, and the government is taking less of it.
That's great, but at the end of the day, the government is still going to be in a deficit spending, and they're going to have to borrow money from the treasury.
Right, we have a spending problem. In other words, not a receipts problem, is the case that I'm making. The problem with Donald Trump is not that he lowered taxes. The United States has one of the most progressive tax systems on the planet. And in fact, if you wish to have a European-style social welfare state, what you actually need is to tax the middle class to death. I mean, the reality is the top 20% of the American population pays literally all net taxes in the United States after state benefits and all of this.
Sure.
So if you actually wanted to have the kind of social welfare state that many liberals seem to want to have, like Northern Europe, for example, you'd actually have to tax people who make $40,000, $50,000, $60,000.
Yeah, but my understanding is that there's a massive, in America, it's a very big American issue, massive disparity in America between like the richest and the poorest. It doesn't exist to the same degree in, UK or other Scandinavian countries. Right? Like there are rich people and there are poor people, but the poor there are richer and the richer people there are poorer. It's a little bit more in line with each other. Whereas here, I think, what is it, like the fucking 1% owned like fucking everything? It's you have to keep those things into consideration as well. We're also paying ridiculous amounts of money. My understanding, more money. We're spending more money on healthcare in America without some kind of universal healthcare than other countries are. So
I don't want that. I agree with that. So how do you explain the lack of legislation? I mean, if he's like such a uniter,
because I think the Republican Party itself is quite divided, and I think that Trump's.
But isn't that his job? He's the head of the
Republicans. How is it that the Republicans are divided and he can't work with them, but Biden can?
Republican Party is the Republican president of the United States.
I mean, again, I don't think that Joe Biden has passed wildly historic legislation.
The infrastructure bill was the largest. Here's
the problem: if you're a Republican, the only
just roll past that one, I guess.
Only bills that you can get consensus on tend to be bills that either that let's be real about this, that are tax cuts, because as you would, I think, agree with, when it comes to polling.
I live in UK and there's areas that have insane class disparity. I'm not talking about areas with class disparity. I'm talking about the overall class disparity. I'm not talking about like those anecdotal situations.
Americans constantly say they want to cut the government, and then the minute you ask them which program, they have no idea what they're right. Exactly, and so it's much harder to come up with a bill to cut things than it is to come up with a bill to add things. Which is why spending was out of control under Trump as well. But there are some Republicans who still don't want to spend on those things, right? So inherently, the task that this goes back to the first question, the task that Republicans think government is there to do,
or UK might also have similar tax disparity. I'm going to look into it.
Is different than the task that Democrats think.
My understanding is like the Scandinavian countries don't deal with that kind of an issue.
Government is there to do. So the way that the very metric of success for a Democratic president versus a Republican president, namely, for example, pieces of legislation passed. As a Republican, one of my goals is to pass nearly no legislation because I don't actually want the government involved in more areas of our life. I want to ask a couple questions on the foreign policy.
Sure. Yeah. Okay. Wait. Real quick. So, for instance, like Donald Trump wanted to.
All right. So here's like a quick graph. This is just a rundown on it. I'm not going to pretend that I can fucking interpret all of it. In Norway, people across the income distribution have high living standards. In the UK and US, the rich fare well, but the poorest rank low versus other countries. So, yeah, sure. Okay.
To punish China, and he wanted to bring
president versus a Republican president, namely, for example, pieces of legislation passed. As a Republican, one of my goals is to pass nearly no legislation because I don't actually want the government involved in more areas of our life.
Okay, so then, like, if your idea of success is a failing country, then okay, cool, like, well, great, we've solved the problem, I guess.
I want to ask a couple questions on the foreign policy.
Sure. Yeah. Okay. Wait. Real quick. So, for instance, like Donald Trump wanted to punish China, and he wanted to bring microprocessor manufacturing to the United States. Biden did that with legislation, with the CHIPS Act. You talk about like spending being out of control, and I mean, I can agree with that. I think anybody that looks at the numbers has to agree with that. But why not pass legislation like the Inflation Reduction Act, which is at least like spending neutral, right? Like, why are there not bills where Donald Trump could take?
Well, I mean, first of all, I think that whenever the government says something is spending neutral, it rarely materializes that way. That is not going to be a spending neutral bill.
Sure, but there's a difference between like at least they say it's spending neutral versus this is a $500 billion bill over like 10 years.
I mean, well, again, I don't see a tax cut as a matter of spending neutrality. The big problem is they keep spending, not that they are allowing me to keep the money that I earned and they did not earn.
Right, but if a household said this exact same thing, he would lampoon them. If you want to cut spending and cut tax. If you want to cut taxes, you have to cut the spending first and then cut the taxes. You don't get to just continuously basically go to the bank and borrow. That's what you're doing. Oh, I want more money, but I don't want to cut my expenses. If conservatives actually want to be fiscally responsible, they would do that. But what do they always isolate? Like Social Security, things like that, which nobody's happy with because old people want to keep their Social Security. So.
But
okay, so then just to understand, so if somebody just did massive like reductions in tax receipts, so tax cut after tax after tax cut, but they didn't change spending at all, you wouldn't consider that like an increase in deficit spending or out of control spending. You would just say
you wouldn't consider that a failure.
They're just tax cuts.
No, the opposite. I would consider it a wild. I would consider it a wild overspending.
Okay.
Meaning
so then was it under Trump then when he did the tax?
I mean, the deficit spending, by the way, under Biden is way worse than it was under.
Of course, but we're in post-COVID, right?
COVID ended effectively. I mean, you live in Florida. COVID effectively ended in the state of Florida by the middle of 2021.
Yeah.
Who cares how it ended in Florida?
Even if you're
in Florida, the country that is like the biggest welfare recipient in the entire fucking United States. And when I say that, I mean as a state. They get more money back from the government than any other country, right? Like there are donor states, like they're all progressive states that give more money to the government than they receive back in grants. So like New York, New Jersey, California, Connecticut, these are like the top 4, right? So like I think it's like every dollar you give in taxes as a New Yorker, you're getting 75 cents back in federal grants. Florida just gets like, I think it was like $30 or $50 billion a year, or I forgot how much it was, but an insane amount, more than any other state. So like, why are we pointing to these states that are not financially independent, that could not exist without other states? Like, why do we care about those states? Like, yeah, well, Florida. Who cares about fucking Florida? Florida sucks dick. Florida's fucking Loserville. They could literally not function without welfare programs, without other states funding their existence. Like Florida is a fucking retirement and Disney state. It's a novelty state. It's shit. Why do we care about Florida?
Vaccine fan by like April, May of 2021. There was
I don't give a fuck about that place. It's literal fucking morons in Florida. Like, what are you talking about?
Wide availability of vaccines, whether or not you like the vaccines.
Yeah.
And at that point, we were done.
I agree, but like we're in a post, like how many trillions of dollars have been dumped in worldwide that are like leading to inflation, right? The inflation is like a worldwide issue right now because of the economy shutting down for a year or two. It's not like those effects are gone in 1 year, right? COVID might be gone, but the after effects of all the stimulus spending and the unemployment and everything
The
else.
definition of inflation is too much money chasing too few goods. So pouring more money on top of that makes for more inflation. That's what it does.
Sure, I agree. But like there's also the definition of when do you deficit spend is when economies are headed for recessions, right? Rather than when economies are doing really well, like they were under Trump and he was deficit spending, whereas Biden can at least make the argument that I ought to be deficit spending because the economy is heading for potential recession. Right?
So here's the thing. I don't think that the economy was actually headed for recession. In fact, if you look at the economic statistics,
economist said it was.
Okay,
they're still saying that there's like a recession coming, right?
Right, but that was largely because of the after effects of inflation. Meaning, if you inflate the economy, what you're going to end up doing is bursting a bubble, and then when that bubble bursts, you'll get a recession. I mean, that was the basic idea, right?
Isn't that what George Bush did, and then left Obama a shitty economy, and then Obama recovered that economy?
The question was whether you're going to get a soft landing. But if you actually look at, for example, the employment statistics or the economic growth statistics in the United States, what they look like under the last year's Obama and then Trump. I mean, this is what the chart looks like. It looks like this, and then it hits March of 2020. It goes like that,
yeah.
Right, and then by like September, it bounces back up. Right, it's a V-shaped recovery, and then it starts to peter out.
Sure,
and
a lot because of the American Recovery Plan, right? That Biden did as well.
I mean,
4 million jobs. Yeah.
No, I'm not going to attribute it to that because the rates of growth in job growth from September, October, November were actually very similar to the rates of job growth after Joe Biden took office. What you see is actually kind of a straight line. I mean, what the chart looks like. In any case,
is he trying to credit Trump for that? I guess. Okay.
So on the foreign policy stuff, this is getting abstruse, but on the foreign policy stuff, so the questions that I have with regard to Biden on foreign policy, very, very simple question. Do you think that the situation in the Middle East is better now than it was under Donald Trump?
It doesn't matter. It's a dumb question. Probably not, but that doesn't mean it's Biden's fault. Like, yeah, things are worse now because things in the Middle East are erupting, in my opinion, worse than in like a little bit of a long time. Or maybe that's just because Americans are tuning in now to realize it. But Trump didn't get faced with or confronted with this problem. Right, I understand every 2 years there's an issue, but this one was considered like as terror, like one of the worst, according to Israel. Right, so Trump just didn't have to deal with as much pressure. He was fucking jerking off Kim Jong-un, like he was making friends with literal idiots.
Probably, that's a hard one. The factors that I'm making right now are. Like, obviously, you've got...
Well, because, like, absolutely, like, yes, from an absolute perspective, things are worse now. But when you take into like consideration like as to why, like it's not Biden's fault that any of these things are happening. His response, I think, is solid. I think Trump would have failed in his response.
The Israel-Palestinian war that's going on right now, which is kind of bad, but like broadly speaking, I'm not sure how much that affects the Middle East as much as like the collapse of Syria. 2013 Syrian civil war sent millions of immigrants throughout all of Europe,
which was under
Obama and continued under Trump. Trump didn't do anything to alleviate any of the Syrian civil war. Why
did Syria end up as a preserve of Russia again?
How did Syria end up as a preserve of Russia?
Yes, why did it end up being essentially a client state of Russia?
I know that Putin enjoys access to the ports down there. I don't know.
I mean, the reason is because Barack Obama suggested that there was a red line that would be drawn in the face of chemical weapons use. Bashar Assad then used chemical weapons in Syria, and Barack Obama was unwilling to then essentially create consequences for Syria in the form of any sort of Western strike. And so instead he outsourced it to Russia. This is 2013, 2014.
Sure. Do you think there might have been some hesitancy after like seeing how Libya ended up that maybe us like intervening?
Who was president during Libya? Yeah, I mean, like,
but what does that have to do with anything? I'm just saying, like, there might have been like a mistake learned.
The point that I'm making is that actually the Middle East, I mean, just historically speaking, was historically good under Donald Trump. I mean, it's very difficult to make the case that either before or after Trump.
Yeah, it was for 4 years. It's okay.
Better than during Donald Trump.
I mean, the Syrian, I don't think that Trump contributed to the Syrian situation in improving much. I think
he did wreck ISIS, which was in the...
I mean, ISIS had been getting wrecked by the Kurds in Iraq, by every single person, by Assad's army, by Putin, by Turkey. Literally everybody was fighting against ISIS at that point.
There's a spike in violence, and then the Trump... I mean, you get credit for when you're president.
Damn, he's getting kind of decimated on that one there, Benjamin.
Presumably,
it is interesting though. I like the strategy. I don't know if you've noticed the strategy. A lot of what Ben is doing is he'll introduce an idea, and then Destiny will give him context on it that doesn't make his position as strong, and then Ben will just kind of move on. He might even make a snarky comment and then move on. It's interesting. It's smart. It's a good debate tactic.
I mean, things got better with ISIS under Trump.
I mean, yeah, they did. I mean,
things got worse with ISIS under Obama.
For sure.
He called them the JV squad.
Sure.
And then they became not the JV squad.
Yeah, but I don't know if ISIS is originating in Syria and Baghdadi, and all of the growth of that is necessarily Obama's fault. I know that we like to say that Obama created ISIS. I don't know if you say that, but I've heard that saying a lot. I think that's a little bit simplistic. I don't think that when I'm looking at like actions that presidents have taken, the biggest criticism I have for like Middle Eastern policy is I think the Doha Accords were a disaster. And I think that's like one of the biggest blemishes that we have right now. I would also argue that moving the embassy to Jerusalem was also kind of silly and arguably contributed to some of the conflict we see right now.
No, exactly. I'll argue precisely the opposite, especially given the fact that after the movement of the...
Well, I mean, it's an antagonistic power move that Trump engaged in. So.
The embassy to Jerusalem, the Abraham Accords continued to sign and actually expand. And that if Donald Trump had been elected, I have no doubt in my mind that Saudi Arabia would now be a part of the Abraham Accords. In fact, it was basically pre-negotiated. And then when Joe Biden took office, Joe Biden took a very anti-Saudi stance on a wide variety of issues. The biggest single effect in the Middle East of Joe Biden's presidency, and again, I agree with you that not every foreign policy issue can be laid at the hands of a president. Joe Biden's main approach to the Middle East was very similar to the Obama approach, which is why the Middle East was chaotic under Obama and chaotic under Biden. And that was to alienate allies like Saudi Arabia and Israel, and instead to try to make common cause or cut deals with Iran. What that did is incentivize terrorism from Iran. What we're watching in the Middle East is Iran attempting to use every one of its terror proxies in the Middle East, and it was specifically launched in an attempt to avoid what Biden actually was trying to do, which was good, which was after 2 years of failure with Saudi Arabia, tried to bring them into the Abraham Accords, right? That was what was burgeoning at the end of last year. And Iran saw that, and Iran decided that they were going to throw a grenade into the middle of those negotiations by essentially activating Hamas. Hamas commits October 7th. Israel, as a sovereign nation state, has to respond to the murder of 1,200 of its citizens and the taking kidnapping of 240. Israel has to do that not only to go after its own hostages and try to restore them, but also to reestablish military deterrence in the most violent region of the world. Hezbollah gets active on Israel's northern border. Hezbollah is an Iranian proxy. They get active on the northern border. The Houthis in Yemen get active. These are all the only reason all this is happening at the same time is because Iran is doing this, right? And not just that, they're threatening global shipping.
Sure.
Interesting. Okay, listen, I'm not super educated on foreign policy, so I'm not. But it sounds like what Ben's saying is that instead of Joe Biden doubling down on our allies in the Middle East, he was a little too supportive of Iran, and that made them feel emboldened to engage in terror attacks. I don't understand how point A goes to point B, how that emboldens them. It sounds more like he's trying to, work potentially with an adversary to try to, I don't know, build some kind of a bridge. We'll have to see what Destiny's response is.
You're talking about the effects of global supply lines, which I totally agree had a major inflationary effect on the economy thanks to COVID. Right now, the cost of shipping is nearly double what it was just a few weeks ago, and that is because a ragtag group of Houthi barbarians are attacking international shipping and forcing everybody to stop using the Bab el-Mandeb Strait instead going around the Cape of Good Hope in Africa. All of that is the result of the fact that Joe Biden reoriented the United States in the very early days in favor of a more pro-Iranian stance. He appointed Robert Malley to negotiate the Iran deal, who, as it turns out,
he might be right about it.
Using proxies. Many of his aides were actually taking money from Iran. The Biden administration, literally one of their first acts was to delist the Houthis as a terror organization and end sanctions against the Houthis. These are all moves that Biden made very early on. They were disastrous moves. But when it comes to domestic policy, I think he hasn't been nearly as damaging on domestic policy as he has been on foreign policy.
Sure. So just on a couple of Middle Eastern things. So one of the big things that threw the Middle East into disaster was what we are all traumatized by it now, is the Iraq invasion, which I'm a Republican president. Sure. You agree with that, right? Sure. Yes. The deposition of Saddam Hussein and everything that followed after probably contributed more to the growth of ISIS and the destabilization of that entire region, probably more than anything else. I think that prior to Bush, for Clinton, even at the beginning of Bush's presidency, we were on some kind of road to normalcy with Iran, which I think has to happen, whether we like them or not, until Bush, for whatever reason, decided.
Why? Is Iran just like incredibly influential? That's a real question. Like, I'm not the most educated on Middle Eastern stuff.
To throw Iran into the
I'm not going to pretend that I am.
axis of evil.
And it needs some evidence that we were on a road to normalcy with Iran in the 1990s.
We do in the, wait, what?
That we were on a road to normalcy with Iran in the 1990s.
My understanding is that, from the late 90s and prior to the axis of evil labeling of Iran, that there was going to be some path forward to where we could start to normalize relationships with them.
I find that very difficult to believe, and I don't see a lot of evidence. I mean, we can just disagree on that.
Sure, okay, sure, we can disagree on that. But
well, why does he not agree with that? Like, I wonder why. What's his reasoning of that?
I know that
the after effects, just a quick note, the after effect of the Iraq War that was the most devastating was the increase in power of Iran.
I agree. Yeah, because of the destabilization of Iraq and Iraq not having a government there that was functional for at least a decade,
and was in fact a Sunni government. Right? Originally, it was a Sunni government. Disbanding the Sunni army was one of the worst things that the Bush administration did.
Banning all the former Ba'ath parties,
sectarian,
all horrible under a Republican president. But
don't disagree.
That that probably contributed more to ISIS, to the growth of power in Iran, maybe even to the destabilization of Syria, probably more than anything that Obama did. Also, when we look at Iran funding people in the region, I don't disagree with that as well. I think Iran is the #1 instigator of bad guy things right now in the Middle East. Iran, the IRGC, I supported.
Yeah, Lex Fridman is the mediator, but these two are like pretty respectful to each other, so I don't think Lex really needs to mediate too much.
When Donald Trump killed Soleimani, I think that was a great thing. I think that Iran is a major problem. However, I don't know if the path forward is constantly being a belligerent to Iran or trying to figure out some road to normalcy. I don't know if the collapse of Iran or the destruction of that country, considering how unpopular the Ayatollah even is there. Like the citizens of Iran, I don't think are big supporters of the government there. I feel like moving on a path where, let's do our nuclear inspections. We had that Iranian nuclear deal that Trump pulled out of. Let's do the nuclear inspections. Make sure you're not on the way to nuclear weapons. Let's unfree some funds. Let's move in some direction where we get on a good term with you. I feel like that's the most important thing that needs to happen in the Middle East. As much as people like to look at the Abraham Accords, who cares if, what was it? Bahrain, I think Oman, I think
UAE,
Sudan,
Morocco.
The UAE and Morocco, are something like all of these people, even Saudi Arabia, already have like de facto normalization with Israel anyway. They're all trading.
No, this is, I mean, to pretend that anybody even 15 years ago would have been talking about normalization in Saudi Arabia and Israel is insane.
They were already on that path. They had already been they're already de facto trading partners with each other. They had already been collaborating.
That's a wild claim that Israel and Saudi Arabia were going to normalize 15 years ago.
15 years ago might have been a wild claim. But after Turkey, after Jordan, and then in the past like 20 years of like economic relations and ties with each other, all of the leadership in the Middle East, and you'll agree with this, look at Israel and they go, okay, well, we got Palestinians who, God bless them, do nothing, and then you've got Israel, which is on a region with no natural resources to somehow become like an economic giant. They're good to trade with. Their population is educated. They have military power. All of the leadership in these Middle Eastern countries are wanting to be friendly with Israel and are engaging in trade de facto.
Is that real? Because my understanding, historically, again, not the most educated on this. Historically, Israel or the Middle East has fucking hated Israel. They're constantly attacking them. Like right when they found it, didn't Egypt go right in there and say fuck you? And then they lost. They took a fat L on that one. Like W Jews, am I right? That's what I'm saying, baby.
With Israel. And the idea that like the UAE and Bahrain were brought in to say like, oh, well, now we're going to officially say this.
Those were the first steps toward obviously the formation of a new Middle East in which economics would predominate over sectarian conflict. The chief obstacle to that is Iran. The notion that negotiations with the Ayatollah were going to be a solution to any of this is absolutely benighted.
But it does make sense. I mean, if Israel is a solid trading partner, I mean, that's going to increase people wanting to trade with them. And there will be at least a level of exchange of even cultural ideas, or at least less toxicity between them, which is probably what America wants. Probably why we're such a big ally, because then we get Western values pushed into the Middle East, which should happen because the values in the Middle East suck balls. Sorry, I think it's pretty insane when women aren't allowed to walk outside without a fucking person guiding them around, and they can't work to nearly the same degree, and then they jail and kill gay people. So yeah, I'm pretty W on the Western values there. And you also spread humanitarian ideas through abundance. It's easier for a country with abundance to be more educated and be less hateful of different people. So cool.
Is it the Abraham Accords that's convincing Saudi Arabia to take a stance against Iran?
No, I mean,
they're already fighting. They're already fighting with each other, right? Like, I don't think the Abraham Accords moved us any closer towards any type of real peace in the region. What has to happen is something has to happen with Iran. There has to be some diplomatic bilateral communication there.
No, what has to happen is the containment of Iran, which was what was taking place with the increased normalization with the Sunni Arab world and Israel, combined with significant economic.
I wish Destiny was writing down on his phone. It's more funny.
Sanctions. The notion that
It's a power play. It makes people get upset when he types things on his phone instead. It's kind of like when he eats pizza in a debate.
This far-fetched notion in foreign policy circles that diplomacy can sort of be wish cast out of thin air. That if you sit around a table, that you can always come to an agreement with somebody. The Ayatollahs do not have common interests with the United States. They do not. And this idea that they are willing to take money in exchange for example, some sort of peaceful acquiescence to Israel's existence is obviously untrue.
Hasn't that been the case, though? That you've had a region with tons of sectarian violence for a long time, and then finally Turkey was like, you know what, this isn't worth it. The United States paid them a lot of money. They had conversations with Israel. You know what, the economy, the economic gains.
Well, I mean,
same thing with Jordan, same thing with
not into Turkish politics,
sure,
but the situation with Turkey was actually quite warm between Israel and Turkey in the 90s when you had the sort of secular Muslim regime
in the 90s, but they signed
Kemal Atatürk in place.
Oh yeah, they should have given him a piano. That would have been a real power play.
And now Erdogan has joined in the fray, and Erdogan is significantly more radical.
Sure,
than what
I'm so sorry. If I said Turkey, I meant Egypt. My bad.
Yeah. Okay. So
Egypt, yeah.
Right. So
like, in terms of like Egypt and Jordan, right, were the first two.
You need
big
practice.
ones.
Here's the thing. You need. Is it possible that you could theoretically come to a deal with Iran only with a new leadership crew? Okay, this is true for every peace agreement in the region. You could not. Israel could not have made peace with.
Well, they made peace with Egypt, and Sadat was the leader for Yom Kippur, right?
They did not make peace with Nasser. Right.
Sure.
The point is that this is a different regime. You need a different regime.
But I'm saying the same regime that did.
It just listen. I'm not the smartest man. What sounds like right now is that they're having a conversation about how people historically that were enemies unite through financially through trade deals, basically. And Destiny's saying you could basically do that with Iran, even if they're an adversary right now, and Ben saying that could never happen, even though it seems like I'm not the most educated. Okay, he's wrong. You know, there does seem to be a financial pathway to being able to get peace.
The part of the Yom Kippur War was the same regime that negotiated peace with Israel.
I mean, that's true. It is also true that that is a relationship that could be cultivated specifically because it was Sadat who made clear he was going to come to the table. Have the Iranians ever made clear that they would come to the table over, for example, the existence of the state of Israel?
No.
I mean, that is not a thing that's going to happen.
But I think people probably felt the same.
Every single one of their proxy groups, every one of them, not only calls for the destruction of the state of Israel, they also call for the destruction of America. I mean, this is literally the Houthi slogan. They're busy hitting ships, and their slogan is literally Allahu Akbar, death to America, death to the Jews, death to Israel. It doesn't fit on a bumper sticker.
But isn't that the same kind of idea? I mean, listen, my understanding is Iran's backed by Russia, and my understanding is that Ben is very lackadaisical when it comes to Ukraine supporting themselves or defending themselves from Russia. So how come there's such like a staunch difference in opinion there? Where it's like you're more willing to work with Russia. I mean, Trump was super willing to work with Russia. Like he was he was globbing on that glizzy, you know. And I think it's fine to work with Russia if it's actually productive. It doesn't seem like it necessarily is. They're a superpower and very, you know, Iran not so much. But it just, I don't know, isn't that like a little bit of a cognitive dissonance? Maybe I'm wrong, but
and it's not all that catchy. But that is in fact their slogan. The notion that the regime that propagates that is going to be approached with diplomacy is not only wrong. The problem is that it's easy to say the stakes of diplomacy are okay. Well, so we try to talk, right? Jaw is better than war. Sure. The only problem,
like Jaw Binks,
is that in the Middle East, weakness is taken as a sign that aggression might be an appropriate response. That is how things work in the Middle East. And the fact that that Joe Biden came into office with an orientation toward continuing the Obama policies in Iran has led to conflagrations, these sort of brush fires breaking out everywhere that Iran has borders with either the West or Israel or both, right? Any place that's happening is leading to brush fires because, again, the logic of violence in the Middle East is not quite the logic of violence in other places in the world. By the way, I think the logic of violence in the Middle East is actually closer to what most international politics looks like than we wish that it were. I mean, I think that's part of what's happening in Ukraine as well.
So you think
which brings me, by the way, here's my question about Ukraine.
Sure. Well, just real quick, and then you can go now. So you think that for Iran, right, a country that's been sanctioned for God knows how many years now, you think that for Iran, just continuing to sanction them and contain them is an effective way, is more effective than trying to engage them in bilateral or multilateral peace talks?
Yes, 100%. Okay. And the proof is in the pudding.
Before we go to Ukraine, can I ask about Israel? So you're both mostly in agreement, but what is
Israel? I don't know if I'd say that.
Okay, but as I'm learning, what is Israel doing?
Why I think Ben's take on Palestine is a little more aggressive, you know?
Right, what is Israel doing wrong in this very specific current war in Gaza?
I mean, frankly, I think that what Israel's doing wrong is if I were Israel, okay, like again,
all right, what are you gonna wipe them off the face of the planet, Ben?
America's interests are not coincident with Israel's interests. If I were an Israeli leader, I would have slipped up and out and knocked the bleep out of Hezbollah early.
What does that mean? What does that mean?
So I would have. Yoav Gallant, who's the defense minister of Israel, was encouraging Netanyahu, who's the prime minister, and the war cabinet, including Benny Gantz. So whenever people talk about the Netanyahu government, that's not what's in place right now. There's a unity war government in place that includes the political opposition.
Basically, this isn't at 2x, just so you know. This isn't even close to 2x speed. It just sounds like, so in order to do that, there would just be significantly more civilian casualties in Gaza, which is probably not a very good thing.
The reason I point that out is because there are a lot of people politically who will suggest that the actions Israel is currently taking are somehow the manifestation of a right-wing government. Israel currently does not have a quote-unquote right-wing government. They have a unity government that includes the opposition. In any case, Yoav Gallant was urging in the very early days of the war that Israel should turn north, and instead of hitting Hamas, they should actually take the opportunity to knock Hezbollah out, because Hezbollah is significantly more dangerous to the existence of the state of Israel than Hamas. I actually agree with that. As far as what Israel has
it's like my mom's pronouncing Spanish.
Been doing wrong in the actual war, I mean, I think that, again, from an American perspective, I think that Israel is doing pretty well. From an Israeli perspective, if I were Israeli, I would actually want Israel to be less loose about sending its soldiers in on the ground level. So Israel's attempting to minimize civilian casualties, and the cost of that has been the highest military death toll that Israel has had since the 1973 Yom Kippur War. I mean,
sure, I get that, but I mean, you have to balance. I understand. I mean, listen, I get what you're saying. Obviously, if you are a country, you're going to care more about your people in that country, and I get that. But also, it's our job as America to try to be a little bit more impartial when it comes to this. I'm not exactly a big fan of a massive death toll in the Gaza Strip. Also, not a fan of Israelis dying. So like, yeah, I'm more on the side of Israel, but I mean, to what degree? Like, how many people do you allow to effectively get, caught in this war and die? Just like how many Palestinians are worth an Israeli to Ben, I mean,
I personally know, through one degree of separation, 3 separate people have been killed in Gaza. And that's because they're going in door to door. It's because they're attempting to minimize civilian casualties, and they're losing a lot of guys in this particular war. The problem that Israel has had, historically speaking, is that Israel got very complacent.
I just don't understand why Ben wants to kill Hezbollah so much. I love this guy. I don't know why he's trying to hurt this guy so much. Fucked up. You gotta stop, dude.
About its own security situation. They believed the technology was going to somehow correct for the hatred on the other side of the wall. So our people have to live underground for 2 weeks at a time while some rockets fall, but at least it's not a war. And that complacence, bred what happened on October 7th. So to me, what Israel did wrong was years and years and years of complacence and belief in an Oslo system that is at root a failure, because you cannot make a peace agreement with people who do not want to make peace with you. So that's what I think Israel is doing wrong. I have a feeling there's a wide divergence on this point.
Maybe. In terms of broadly speaking, I generally oppose settlement expansion. Is a thing that Israel does incorrectly that I think is kind of like provocative to at least all the Palestinians in the West Bank, and it probably energizes hatred in the Gaza Strip for them as well. In terms of conducting warfare, the one thing that I always say to everybody, especially Americans, is you can't evaluate things from an American perspective. It's very stupid. It happened a lot with Ukraine, where people are like, oh, well, didn't they work with the Nazis, and like weren't the Soviets the good guys? And it's like, well, in other parts of the world, it's not quite as simple. And I think the same is true for Israel-Palestine. That a lot of Americans will analyze the conflict as just being one between only Israel and Palestine, which it's not. It's a conflict between Israel and then Palestine, Hezbollah, the Houthis, and Iran. Right now it is. I think that however, one area where I'll break with Ben is I think that minimizing civilian casualties and everything is very, very, very important. I think on the Israeli side, I don't think it's important so that the U.S. will stay with them, because I think the U.S. is probably going to stick with Israel as long as they don't do anything crazy. And I don't even think it matters for the international community. It definitely doesn't matter for the UN, because Jesus Christ. However, I think it's really, really, really important that I think that in the Middle East, broadly speaking, I think that leadership, especially in the Gulf, has gotten over the Palestinian issue. I think that leadership is kind of like, they don't care as much anymore. But the populations still care quite a bit. And I think that the main issue that Israel could run into is if the civilian death toll does climb too high, and if they start to hit this 40, 50, 60,000 number of civilian casualties, they run the risk of the civilian populations in the surrounding Middle Eastern states becoming so antagonistic towards Israel that they start to
Primal super chatted $2.34. Maybe Britain should just take over.
Maybe we should just take over Britain and put fucking Palestinians there. How about that? Fuck Britain. Useless. What do you guys do? Oh, we eat beans, mushy beans and toast for breakfast. Oh, really? Why is that? Oh, we don't have dentists. We have to. Our teeth cannot handle actual hard food. That's the fucking problem. Kind of based.
take steps back towards normalization in the region. So, for instance, I know that Bahrain, I think, already pulled out their ambassador to Israel. My guess is going to be it's temporary. I know that on the public speaking side, you've got a lot of people condemning Israel for the attacks. And on the private side, you've got people telling Israel, please kill all of Hamas because this is untenable and nobody wants to work in the situation. I don't know if this ended up being true
look
or
at this
not.
Chad drinking water.
I'm guessing it didn't, but I saw on a couple of Twitter accounts it was leaked that potentially Saudi Arabia was considering installing a government in the West Bank that they would run.
No, I mean, I think Israel would love nothing better than that, but that is
for
not
sure.
something
Yeah,
Saudi.
okay.
One of the big problems in the Middle East is literally no one wants to preside over the Palestinians.
Yes.
No one.
So
I think
Yeah, I've heard that too. And this might not be true. This is just, take this with a grain of salt. But my understanding is that, like, when these things happen, like some other surrounding countries will take in, Palestinian refugees, and then they'll cause fucking havoc over there. And so now a lot of surrounding countries don't really want to bring them in. So
States, Israel, no one.
Yeah. So I think the issue is, and I think, and I'm largely actually, I'm very sympathetic towards the Palestinians, because I think that for since 48 and onwards, I think that all of the Arab states super gassed them up on that. They wanted the Palestinians to fight because they wanted to fight with Israel. However, as time has gone on and they realized that it's kind of a lost cause, states have started to drop out. So you're getting these bilateral peace treaties with Egypt and with Jordan. You're getting multilateral agreements like the Abraham Accords. And now the Palestinians are looking around and like, okay, well, you guys told us to fight all this time, and now the only people that we have supporting us are Iranian proxies. So the Palestinians are in a very weird spot where they've like lost all their support. I think that Israel, what I would say to be quote unquote critical of Israel is Israel needs to take strong steps towards peace that probably involves them enduring some undue hardship. So not the October 7th attacks, because Jesus, that's way too much, but other types of attacks that they might have to deal with that might cause some civilians to die that they don't come out over the top with and retaliate with, if there's ever going to be peace in that region. However, another thing that I've always said is a huge problem between Israel and Palestine is I think that both sides think that if they continue to fight, it will be good for them. But the problem is one side is delusional.
Well, yeah, I mean, Palestine takes L's constantly. They're never going to win against Israel. And if all these other surrounding countries are reducing their support, especially since they like Israel more, especially if they're trading partners. Listen, my understanding is at this point, it's really just a cultural war, almost. Kind of. It's a little bit more than that, but a lot of it's a cultural war where, Russia backs Iran and then Iran backs terrorists. So
I think Israel wants to continue to fight because they get justifications for the annexation of the Golan Heights. They get justifications for expansions, especially in Area C, that I think they're probably going to try to annex soon. They get justifications for the increased military posturing towards the Gaza Strip and the embargoes. And Israel is right that if the conflict continues, really the situation only improves for Israel over time. But the Palestinians also all believe that if they keep fighting, they've thought this since 2000 under Arafat, that if they just keep fighting, they'll get better gains too. But that's not the case.
Is there a difference between Palestinian citizens and the leadership when you say that?
I love all people. I love all people around the
He's dropping the base alert down.
world. And I think that when we analyze issues,
Ben is just confused. He doesn't even know what's happening. I don't think Ben realizes that Destiny's a fucking goblin.
I think that we have to be very honest with what the people on the ground think. And the idea that Hamas is just this one-off thing in the Gaza Strip is not only incorrect with the situation on the ground, it's also incredibly ahistorical. And the idea that like the Palestinians in the West Bank, of which I believe the most recent polling shows, I want to say 75 to 80% support the October 7th attacks. Palestinians in general want to fight in violent conflict with Israel. That's not just the position of the government.
Damn, that's fucking unfortunate. Sorry, Palestinians, take the L then, baby.
Not just people. There's a reason.
If 80% of them are in favor of it, I mean, it makes me even less empathetic to them. Sorry.
Why Abbas doesn't want to do elections in the West Bank. And it's because the Palestinian people really do want to fight with Israel. But to combat that problem is like, you have to get the UN on board. We've got to do an actual addressing of the Palestinian refugee problem, which is handled like a joke right now. Iran has to be brought to the table in terms of negotiations. There has to be huge efforts made to economically revitalize these like Palestinian areas, even though they're one of the highest recipients of aid in the world. You have to do something about the embargo and the blockade in the Gaza Strip, which isn't just maintained by Israel. It's also maintained by Egypt. You should ask why. There's a lot of things that have to happen to fix that problem. But the reality is I don't think Israel really wants to, because they get to continue their expansion into the West Bank. And I don't think anybody around the world really cares that much.
So
in a month, we won't be talking.
I will argue with that. The idea that Israel does not want to end the conflict is belied by the history of what just happened with the Gaza Strip. So when we talk about settlements, for example, Israel did have settlements inside the Gaza Strip. There were 8,000 Jews who were living inside the Gaza Strip in Gush Katif up until 2005. They withdrew all of those people. I mean, took them literally out of their homes. And the result was not the burgeoning of a better attitude toward the state of Israel with regard to, for example, the Palestinian population in Gaza. In fact, it was more radical in Gaza than it was in the West Bank. The result was obviously the election of Hamas, the October 7th attacks, in which unfortunately many civilians took part in the October 7th attacks. There's video of people rushing, who are civilians and dressed in civilian clothing, into Israeli villages.
Not always the same thing.
Well, no, that is 100% true, obviously. And when it comes to Area C and Israel's supposed
hold on a second,
of people rushing, who are civilians and dressed in civilian clothing, into Israeli villages.
Not always the same thing.
Well, no, that is
wait, what did he say?
rushing, who are civilians and dressed in civilian clothing, into Israeli villages.
Not always the same thing.
Well, no,
That's it's just funny because he said civilian. I believe what he's saying is that civilians and people in civilian clothing aren't always the same thing. And I'm sure we're going to touch on that in a conversation about January 6th that comes in a little bit. I'm going to take a quick piss, though.
No, that is 100% true, obviously. And when it comes to, Area C and Israel's, supposed deep and abiding desire for territorial expansion in Area C. So for those who are not familiar with the Oslo Accords, and again, this is getting very abstruse, but the Oslo Accords are broken down into 3 areas of the West Bank. Area A is under full Palestinian control. That'd be like Jenin and Nablus, the major cities, for example. There's Area B, which is mixed Israeli-Palestinian control, where Israel provides some level of military security and control. And then there's Area C. And Area C was like to be decided.
Interesting. Okay. I've never really engaged with this before. Okay.
Later, it was left up for possible concessions to the Palestinian Authority if the Oslo Accords had moved forward. Those are disputed territories. There is building taking place in areas by both, actually, no one talks about this, but by Palestinians as well as Israelis. And the question as to whether if Israel stopped building, there have been many settlement freezes in the past, including some undertaken by Netanyahu. And it actually has not done one iota of good in moving the ball forward in terms of actual negotiations. Again, the biggest problem is that the leadership for Palestinians has spent every day since really 67. It's not even 48, because between 48 and 67, Jordan was in charge of the West Bank and Egypt was in charge of the Gaza Strip. And at no point did either of those powers say, hey, maybe we ought to hand this over to an independent Palestinian state, which was originally the division that was promoted by the UN Partition Plan in 47. Because of that, the leadership post 67 and really starting in 64, the Palestine Liberation Organization was founded in 64, and it called for the liberation of the land. In 64, they had the West Bank and they had the Gaza Strip. So they're talking about Tel Aviv. When it was founded in 64, the basic idea, as kind of indicated by that, was Israel will not exist. And that was a promise that's been made by pretty much every Palestinian leader in Arabic to the people that they are talking to. Yasser Arafat famously would do this sort of thing. He'd speak in English and talk about how he wanted a two-state solution, and then he'd go back to his own people and say, this is a Trojan horse. And if Israel could, if you think that Israeli parents want to send their kids at the age of 18 to go and monitor Jenin and Nablus and be in Khan Yunis, you're out of your mind. You're out of your mind. Israelis do not want that. In fact, Israelis didn't want that so much that they allowed rockets to fall in their cities for full-on 18 years in order to avoid sending soldiers en masse back into the Gaza Strip.
True, but I think Israel does want to continue to expand settlements into the West Bank, right? They want to continue to build. They want to have Jerusalem, East Jerusalem as well.
Well, I mean, East Jerusalem has already been annexed. So East Jerusalem is, according to Israel, a part of Israel. That's not.
All right. So what I'm hearing here is it sounds like Ben's pushing this idea that the Israelis want nothing to do with any kind of conflict. And the Desi's like, well, they are still kind of pushing into contested territory, which is being seen as like some kind of an act of aggression, maybe even provocateurism in some capacity. Okay.
On a settlement. Sure. Okay, so there's that. With regard to, does Israel have an interest in expanding?
Oh, our store is number 2 in the district. All right, very good. Congratulations. I'm happy that you're doing well at work.
Ending settlements in the West Bank. Why would they not until there's a peace partner?
Sure, that's what I mean. But I'm saying as long as the conflict continues, like, because even when you talk about
but your suggestion is that they're incentivizing the conflict to continue so they can grab more land.
Well, no, let me be very clear. I don't think there's like a plan. Like, so some people say, for instance, they'll take that one quote from Netanyahu and they'll try to say that like he was funding the people in the Gaza Strip by allowing Qatari money to come in, even though he was actually speaking in opposition to Abbas, allowing the Gaza Strip to fall for Netanyahu to clear it out for him, they give it back, et cetera, et cetera. I'm not claiming those theories. I'm just saying that I think that Israel will take a relatively neutral stance towards conflict enduring, because as long as the conflict endures and as long as the settlements can expand, I think that ultimately benefits Israel.
I think there'd be let's put it this way. If suddenly there arose among the Palestinians a deep and abiding desire for peace, approved by a vast majority of the population with serious security guarantees, I think you'd be very hard-pressed to find Israelis who would not be willing to at least consider that in return for not expanding bathrooms in Efrat.
I would have agreed with you on October 6th. I think we're probably a year or two away from that right now.
But the point I'm making is that Israelis now realize that the entire peace process was a sham, meaning the people who are on the other side of the table were using it as a Trojan horse in the first place. The death of Oslo is not the death of Israeli hopefulness. It's the death of the illusion that on the other side of the table was anyone worth bargaining with. That's what's happening. And that's why you have this sort of insane disconnect right now between the United States and the Israeli government. Again, it's a unity government. No one in Israel is talking about making concessions to the Palestinian Authority for a wide variety of reasons, including the fact that Mahmoud Abbas's Fatah continues to pay actual families of terrorists who kill Jews.
Sure, the Mark Fund, yeah.
Right, and
which is from the moderate West Bank.
Right, exactly. Yeah. So, again, like the taste in Israel for this is even the people who are the Chilonim, right? Those are the most secular people in Israel, which was, by the way, the place that was attacked on October 7th. I mean, what people should understand is that October 7th was not an attack against settlements in the West Bank. It was an attack on peace villages that were essentially disarmed. And many of these people who were killed were peace activists who were literally trying to work with people in Gaza to get them jobs. I mean, it's just, it's mind-boggling. That's why you've had this ground shift in it.
Is that real? What? Fuck, hold on. I'm coming.
It was an attack on peace pact on even the people who are the Chilonim, right? Those are the most secular people in Israel, which was, by the way, the place that was attacked on October 7th. I mean, what people should understand is that October 7th was not an attack against settlements in the West Bank. It was an attack on peace villages that were essentially disarmed. And many of these people...
What is a peace village? Like a village that they established there to try to engage in some kind of olive branch?
People who were killed were peace activists who were literally trying to work with people in Gaza to get them jobs. I mean, it's just... It's
interesting. That's pretty fucked up.
Mind-boggling. That's why you've had this ground shift in Israel. The next 20 years in Israel is going to be about security and economic development, period, end of story. Everything else goes second, third place.
And I will say, I agree essentially with everything you're saying. Not to loop back on another topic, but this is one of the reasons then why I was so critical. I don't want to say critical, but like kind of nonchalant about the Abraham Accords, because they didn't address anything with the Palestinians whatsoever. They brought in countries that weren't super relevant to the conflict. They didn't bring in Qatar, which is where a lot of the money and support for the Gaza Strip comes from. They didn't involve Iran at all. They involved bilateral.
No, but it totally changed the mentality. And this is why, what I'm seeing right now, this is why, listen, I think that Biden has done better than I certainly expected him to do in terms of support for Israel. Like Obama was way less supportive of Israel than Biden by every metric. with that said, the rhetoric that he's been using recently and that Blinken have been using recently about Israel needs to make painful concessions for peace, Israel recentering this issue at the center of relations in the Middle East is doomed to failure. The magic is a strong word. The benefit of the Abraham Accords was proof of what you're saying, which is true, which is that all of these surrounding countries in reality have abandoned the idea that there is a centrality to the Palestinian-Israeli conflict. That is not the central conflict in the Middle East. And by the way, one of the reasons it's not the central conflict in the Middle East is because actually, ironically, because of the rise of Iran, right? It's Sunni states that are largely signing up with Israel because they're realizing they need some sort of counterweight to a burgeoning nuclear power in Iran.
Can we talk about Ukraine?
Sure.
You have a disagreement with you.
Oh, this fucking Russian guy always trying to talk about Ukraine, dude. Come on, dude.
What Destiny said.
Destiny, I can cancel you if I wanted to. I'm being serious right now. Talk about the allegations of Camden Gerard Davis. It's more important than all the lives taken in the Israel-Palestine conflict. You've been warned, motherfucker. How about that?
My main problem with Biden's policy with regard to Ukraine is that he outsourced the end goal of the war to Zelensky early on. Now, that might make sense if that goal were something that he was willing to fund to the point of achievement, or if Zelensky could have achieved it on his own. But right now, and this has been true since pretty early on in the war, this point Henry Kissinger made, that pretty early on in the war, it was very clear that, for example, Crimea was going nowhere. The Russians had control of Crimea, barring the United States giving permission to fly F-16s over Crimea. Nothing was going to change over there. The same thing was true in most of the Donbass, right, in Luhansk and Donetsk. That was not going to change. Zelensky's stated goal, and you understand it, he's a leader of Ukraine.
Kind of said Zelensky like a little bit cringe.
Right, is that there was a predation on his territory in 2014, and that the Russians sent their little green men across the border, and then they took all of these areas. And so he, as the leader of Ukraine, is saying, okay, I want all of that back. Now, the reality is that the U.S.'s interest had largely been achieved in the first few months of the war, meaning the revocation of the ability of Russia to take Ukraine and just ingest it. And
well, it's not just about American interests. I also think that there is a interest in defending our allies. I do. I mean, like you're just, you really do want to just show that you're a dependable ally. I think it's just a strong thing to do.
To the devastation of Russia's military capability. I mean, Russia has just been wrecked. I mean, their military is in serious straits because of the war in Ukraine. From an American perspective, I'm very much pro all of that. I think that we have an interest in Ukraine maintaining a buffer status against a territorially aggressive Russia. I think that the United States does have an interest in degrading the Russian military to the extent that it can threaten the Baltic states or threaten Kazakhstan or other countries in the region. The problem I have with Biden's strategy is, as always, I think that it's a muddle, and I think muddles tend to end with misperceptions. War tends to break out and maintain because of misperception. Misperception of the other side's strength, the other side's intentions, and all of the rest. People misperceive what's going to happen. They say, I'll cross that line and nothing will happen, right? This is what Putin thought. He thought, I'll cross that line, they will greet me as a liberator, and because the United States just surrendered in Afghanistan, essentially, they won't do anything, and the West is fragmenting because NATO's fragmenting and all the rest of this, and obviously he was wrong on all of those scores. The problem for Biden is that, as with virtually every war, no end line was set, and so it became out recently, it was widely reported, that actually there was a peace deal that was on the table in the first few months that Putin was on board with that basically would have ceded Luhansk and Donetsk and Crimea to Russia in return for solidification of those lines, American and Western security guarantees to Ukraine, right? Ukraine wouldn't...
Well, why would they want to take that? Wouldn't that mean that they're going to lose land if they secede Crimea? No?
...formally join NATO, but there would be security guarantees...
Oh, I'm just misinterpreting words. ...to
Ukraine. We're ending up there anyway. It's just taking a lot more money and a lot more time to get there.
And do you think Trump would have helped push that peace?
Yes. And
well, yeah, probably. He's a pussy.
I think that Biden actually did Zelensky a bit of a disservice because Zelensky knows where this war is going to end. And it's not going to end with Luhansk and Donetsk and Crimea in Ukrainian hands. It's just not going to, and he knows that. What actually, in my opinion, Zelensky needed was for Joe Biden to be the person who foisted that deal upon him so that he could then go back to his own people and say, listen, guys, I wanted all those things, but the Americans weren't willing to allow me to have all those things. And so we did an amazing job. We did a heroic job in defending our own land. We devastated the Russian military, even though no one expected us to, but we can't get back those things because it's unrealistic to get back those things because America basically, they're a big funder and they're the ones who want the deal. Instead, what Biden said, and this was reported in the Washington Post last year, the Biden administration said, we're going to fight for as long as it takes with as much as it takes. And when they were asked until when, they said, whatever Zelensky says. And that's not a policy. That's just a recipe for a...
I mean, it is a policy. It's saying we're going to defend we're going to go fucking balls to the wall. All right, whatever, you know.
Was in conflict with endless funding.
You hope that Ben and Steve have more conversations like this? It's so weird.
Now, maybe the...
just call him Steve. Oh, he sounds like such a dork. I have a family member named Steve, but he doesn't look like a doofus. You know what I mean? He's looking like some beta man. No, I'm just fucking around. But it's just weird to reference Destiny as Steve. You know,
just walked away from the.
It's too like formal.
Table and that deal is no longer available.
Steven.
If that deal is available right now, I certainly hope this.
I think Steven's. I should not even say this. I wonder if Destiny gets triggered when people call him Steven instead of Steve. And I'm going to say something that's going to be so fucking dumb right now, but I hate it when people call me Danny instead of Dan. It's okay when some of my family does it. I'm like, all right, or whatever. But like, it twists my goddamn tits off. And now I know I said that, and some stupid ass motherfuckers are going to say in the chat. I don't know why I even told you guys this.
That's being pursued behind closed doors. My main critique again of Biden is that when you outsource the end goal to another country without stating what America's interest is, that's a problem. I also think that Biden did really quite a poor job of sort of explaining what America's realistic interests are.
What do you need me to do, babe?
I don't like it when American leaders, it's weird for me to say this, but I'm not a huge fan of the we're in it to protect democracy kind of rhetoric. Because, frankly, we are allied with many, many countries that are not democracies, and that's not actually how foreign policy works. We should, as an overall, 30,000-foot goal, advance democracy and rights where we can. But the reason that we were fighting in favor of Ukraine, and when I say fighting, I mean giving them money and giving them weaponry. The reason
well, yeah, that's fighting, giving money and weaponry. Like, yes, how else would we? How else do you fight?
we were doing that in favor of Ukraine is not because of Ukraine's long history of clean voting and non-corruption. The reason that we were doing that is to counter Russian interests in the region. I mean, it was
sure, and it gives us another ally.
It's a pure realpolitik play, and that realpolitik play is hard to deny no matter what side of the aisle you're on. I think that what many Americans are reverting to is we have no interest there. Why are we spending money there and not spending money here, and that kind of stuff. And that argument can always be applied unless you actually articulate the reason why it is good for Americans beyond simply the ideological for the United States to be involved in a thing. So, for example,
I don't see anything wrong with the ideological aspect of it. That's so, like I don't see an issue with like being like, well, ideally they line up with us. What happens if something really fucked up happens one day? You know what I mean? And we need their help. I don't think it's bad to show people that we will fight for them in other countries. I think it's a smart idea.
Well, I think right now, when Biden is talking, I think that what Biden just did, the United States, as we speak, is striking the Houthis. I think that that's a really, really good thing. I think that's a necessary thing. I think American people should understand why that is happening. It's not because of quote-unquote ideology. It is, I mean, on a very root level. But really, it's because you're screwing up the straits. I mean, you can't do that. You can't screw up free trade. And Americans have an interest in not seeing all of our prices at the grocery store double and triple because a bunch of ragtag pirates, akin to the Barbary pirates from 1800, are bothering everyone, right?
So Ben said a lot there. Do you disagree with any aspect on the Ukraine side?
A little bit, yeah. I think on the macro, I agree. Maybe we get into the weasel.
Listen, Ukraine is boring now, dude. It's not relevant. Let's talk about the most relevant thing. Camden Gerard Davis. Destiny. Talk about Camden Gerard Davis. How I will cancel you. I have the power to do so. I will come after you. You've been warned. Right? Am I fucking crazy?
A little bit of some things. On the final thing that he said, though, I wish that Americans could have honest conversations about foreign policy. I think that it would just be better for everybody. I don't know if it's, Red Scare after the Cold War, where it was like literally, the behemoths, we're fighting against communism. And we felt like after 91, every single foreign policy.
Yeah, Ukraine's so 2023. It's fucking boring, dude.
Decision needs to be able to be explained in like 7 words, like he's the bad guy and that's it. I wish we had more honest conversations about what our foreign policy interest is in a particular region, because I don't think most Americans honestly could even articulate why Israel would be an important ally or why it's important to defend Ukraine against Russia.
Yeah, listen, Israel's an important ally because I like Jews. That's it. No, I'm just kidding. My understanding is Israel's an important ally because they are in the Middle East. And that gives us a foothold in the Middle East. That's pretty much it. As far as Ukraine is a good ally, I don't know. Maybe it's because they're gay. No, I'm assuming that Ukraine's a good ally because they're within. They're close to Russia, and we have an interest in not letting Russia push their interests because they're generally against our interests, and they're bad. I don't know. Am I wrong about that? Maybe there's some water over there where they can ship goods. I don't fucking know. Am I right? Somebody let me know if I'm right. But don't let me know if I'm wrong. Ignorance is bliss.
Or why should we care about Taiwan at all? I don't know if most Americans could articulate anything there.
The Leviathans are coming. I don't know anything about Taiwan. I think the reason that we have an interest in them is because of the food.
Even though they might have very strong opinions about why we ought to be involved in certain conflicts. So I do agree with that. I wish we had more honest conversations about foreign policy. In terms of how Biden has handled Ukraine, the things that I liked the most were, one, that he was very clear in the beginning about what we wouldn't do. So Biden saying that we're not going to do, not a red line, no-fly zones over Ukraine. We're not going to be deploying troops on the ground in Ukraine. We're not going to be doing anything that would have, U.S. soldiers and Russian soldiers crossing swords with each other. That's not going to happen. I like that he made that very clear at the beginning. And I like that he coalition built between NATO and the EU to get people to send funds, training, soldiers, airplanes, and everything to Ukraine. I thought those two things were really good. In terms of basically writing Zelensky a blank check, I would like to hope that Biden and the entire United States learned a lesson from Iraq and Afghanistan that open-ended missions with unlimited budgets and no clear goal are like the worst foreign policy decisions you can ever do. They've like defined U.S. foreign policy for the past 2 or 3 decades. Which,
well, I mean, is that what Biden's actually doing, or is he just saying that's what he'll do as some kind of a scare tactic to Russia? They'll be like, we'll just keep going forever, motherfucker. And then Russia's like, all right, I guess we should stop first. Kind of like, playing chicken. No?
Is unfortunate, but seems to be the case.
Taiwan has a huge semiconductor industry. Our electronics rely on Taiwan. Oh, okay. Gotcha. So all the ladyboys over there. I gotcha.
My feeling would be, and this is just a feeling, I don't know if internal cables have leaked that say otherwise, is the Biden administration has probably always had a quiet position of at some point there's going to be an off-ramp here. And I think even a month or two ago, I think those talks were being leaked, that discussion had begun with Zelensky looking for an off-ramp. But publicly, of course, the United States is never going to come out and say, we're going to support you guys to fight as much as you want for 3 months. And then after that, it's no more.
Yeah, right. That's what I was just saying, dude. I'm fucking smart.
Obviously, that can't be the statement. It's always going to be that we're going to support you in your fight against Russia.
Final super
okay. I see. Destiny was making that point the whole time.
Have you tried Cult of the Lamb? Great game.
All right, dude. Fuck you, man.
Bomb with Afghanistan.
I haven't. Is it actually good?
It was terrible.
Sure. Yeah, you can't.
We'll escalate the troop levels to X, but only for 6 months, and then we're
you just can't do that. It's always going to come off as we're going to support you forever, and as long as it takes, and as long as you need, whatever we have to do to defend freedom and democracy in your country. And any other statement would be absurd. So
yeah, that's true. I agree with that.
I can understand why it feels like on a public level.
I said it first. Doesn't matter. It doesn't matter that I'm watching a video that's already. He already said it. I said
a blank check and an indefinite time period was granted to Zelensky, but I don't think that's going to be the case. I think I hope we've learned our lessons in the Middle East about the forever wars. That this isn't going to be a forever funding to Ukraine to fight.
Well, what about the forever stamps now available at Costco? Pretty good deal. I don't know what the deal is, but it's probably good.
For as long as they want. I do disagree. I feel like we're playing a little bit retrospectively, saying that, like, well, it's obvious that they're not going to capture the Donbass. It's obvious that they're not going to capture Crimea. I agree for Crimea. That was incredibly obvious. But it was also really obvious that in 2 weeks, Russia would own Kiev and Ukraine was going to be Belarus 2.0.
I love chicken Kievs.
I think that even for a lot of military people, and analysts around the world, that was an expectation, or at least a significant probability. Nobody knew, the phrase that's thrown around now is paper tiger, that Russia's military was as ill-equipped as they were. So I can understand why, especially if you're Ukraine and if you've repelled an invasion from one of the world's largest armies, why you might feel like, well, fuck it, let's fight for a few months, let's fight for a year, let's see what happens. And I can understand the United States supporting them, but I agree that there has to be some reasonable off-ramp, but we're not going to fight forever. I think the U.S. State Department has already begun those conversations with Zelensky to look at what that off-ramp looks like. But yeah, I'm not.
I think Zelensky's sad because of what's going on in Israel and Palestine, and so now they're not getting as much support.
Too sure, other than like explicitly stating publicly, like you can only fight until this date. I don't really know what else I would change. I don't think the Biden administration should have done that. I don't know what else.
Do you think Biden should cut this deal on the funding? Meaning there's this $105 billion deal that's been held up by debate between Republicans and Democrats over border, right? So basically it contains $60 billion for Ukraine, $14 billion for Israel, another several $billion for Taiwanese defense against China, and then includes some border funding and some border provisions. Republicans want the border funding and the border provisions because we can get into the illegal immigration issue, but that's a pretty serious issue. And Biden and Democrats have been unwilling.
It is. I was watching Fox News at the gym yesterday, and apparently Americans, I think it's the number one thing Americans are concerned about is the fucking border. It's actually interesting. I don't care about the border. I live in New York. Fuck you, pussy. That's your problem. No, I'm just kidding. I care. I care enough. I care about people, just not the brown. No, I'm just kidding. I care about all people. I understand it's a big issue. It'd probably be more effective. This is all idealist, but to I don't know. Could we even give money to those countries to help them be more financially sound so that people wouldn't want to leave anymore? Could we do that? That'd be a great idea. Why can't we just march the army down south and be like, hey, bye all gangs. You're fucked, bitch. Like who wants to, anytime an American goes to a Central or a South American country, Why can we only stay in the tourist zones without getting hurt? You know what I mean? Like, let's just say let's march let's march the army down there. Boom, boom, take those motherfrickers out, the gangs, and then establish beautiful peace. That's of course what would happen. Duh.
Willing to hold that up, and that seems to me like just from put aside Republicans, Democrats, it seems like political malpractice. Meaning there's a widespread perception in the United States that the border is a disaster area. Joe Biden wants these things. Many Republicans don't want these things.
Why would Biden want the border to be a disaster?
if he caves on the border stuff, he gets all the things that he wants, and he's going to be able to go back to the moderates in
What is it that they even want? What do Republicans want on the border?
the country and say, I did something about the border. It seems like such an obvious win.
If he caves on the border stuff, you mean on the Ukraine stuff?
Yes, because then he gets the whole package.
Sure,
Meaning
yeah.
he can go back to his own base and he can say, listen, guys, I wanted to be easy on the border. The Republicans forced me to it, but we needed the Ukraine aid. We needed the Taiwan aid. Right?
Yeah.
Like that's
You're honestly,
Well, he wouldn't do very well with that because I feel like even Democrats are going to be like, oh, so you took more money for Ukraine at the expense of defending the border or whatever, or I don't know. Does that sound weird? What is happening? That doesn't matter. What is happening? What is it that they want for the border?
you're going to be more educated than me on this. I don't like, or maybe I just don't know enough. I don't like the principle that when we negotiate things in the United States, there's like 50 million hostages at all points in time for every single thing. Like, oh boy, here comes the debt ceiling. What do the Republicans want? What do the Democrats want? Oh boy, like here, we can't fund our government. But I mean, obviously, the argument is going to be that if the Ukraine funding doesn't come in this bill, and if Biden and his administration feel like it's really important, that not unilaterally, but as a single issue, it's not going to pass. So I would say that at this point, and I don't know what the conversations look like between the Biden administration and Zelensky, I would say at this point that it's probably fair to start making contingencies on the money that we give to Ukraine. That listen, like this conflict has waged on now. Like now
Well, if we put contingencies on the money, wouldn't that embolden Russia to say, oh, let's just keep holding out longer?
need to start looking for potential peace. We can't just write you an
Texas is definitely feeling it. Oh, it's unfortunate.
unlimited check.
Sorry, Texas, you're cringe.
So
Maybe it's because of all the California people moving to Texas. You ever think about that? Maybe we're worried about the wrong migrants, okay?
I mean, if those strings are attached, I'd be okay with it. But the broader question of like, is it okay to make this particular piece of legislation with all this funding contingent on Ukrainian funding? I mean, that just seems to be the way the government works now, unfortunately.
Quick pause.
Did he just did Destiny not know what's going on with the border, so he just kind of like fluffed up an answer? That's really what it seems like, and also smart based.
Bathroom break. One of the big
Oh, I could have waited and we could have all pissed together. I could have went in the bathroom. I could have held my wiener. I could have pretended that we're all in the urinals next to each other, and I would have like, oh wow, your piss smells like almost like mine, but mine's a little bit more earthy because I take a medication called metformin. It smells like pussy if anybody takes it, and it makes my urine smell weird. So, just saying.
big issues in this presidential election is going to be January 6th.
Oh,
So then
the conversation around January 6th is so cringe, honestly.
News now, and I think it's going to become bigger and bigger and bigger. So, question for Destiny first: did Donald Trump incite an insurrection on January 6th, 2021?
I mean, on purpose? I don't know. But yeah, kind of. Like all the rhetoric he was using was a little insane, dude. He was talking about we have to fight now, we have to fight now. He didn't take the polls for an answer. He kept getting told that he was wrong by other Republicans after they investigated, and he still continuously pushed over and over again. I don't think it's unreasonable to say that he was a heavily contributing factor.
Absolutely. This is probably ignoring every other issue we've talked about, of which I think there are plenty that I would say disqualify Trump from holding office. I think that the conduct and the behavior leading up to and including January 6th, I think is wildly indefensible. I am excited to see Ben try to, the 3 to 4 stages are the taking what I think any reasonable person would say knowingly false information about elections being rigged or ballot boxes being stuffed or Ruby Freeman, running ballots 3 times in Georgia, taking that knowingly false information and trying to call state secretaries and stuff to have them flip their electoral vote. That was horrible. The plot that Eastman hatched in order to have these like false slates of electors where all 7 states had citizens go in and falsely say that they were the duly elected electors that could submit votes to Congress. That was insane. That happened.
I didn't know that happened. It's fucking crazy.
Asking or begging Pence to accept these false states of electors initially, and then just say you should just throw it out completely and throw it to the House delegation, which was majority Republican. That was absolutely unbelievable. And then on the day of January 6th, trying to capitalize on the violence by him, Giuliani, and Eastman making phone calls to senators and congressmen saying, well, don't you think maybe you guys should delay the vote a little bit? Don't you think they're just really mad about the election? I think he said to McCarthy, they're more upset than you. And his utter dereliction of duty in not doing anything to stop the rioting that happened on January 6th because he was too busy taking advantage of it. I think all of these things are horrible. I look forward to seeing the Jack Smith indictments play out in court, maybe even the Georgia RICO case. But I think all of these things are unfathomable. And I think when you look at the plot from start to finish, clearly the goal the entire time was to circumvent the peaceful transfer of power. That was the goal from start to finish, whether it was through false claims, whether it was through illegal schemes, or whether it was through violence at the Capitol to delay the certification of the vote.
Ben?
So I'm glad you're excited. It's always fun. So there are 2 elements to incitement of insurrection. One is incitement, the other is insurrection. So incitement has a legal standard. So does insurrection. Neither of those standards are met. So if you're asking me, morally speaking, did Donald Trump do the right thing between November 4th and January 6th? I said, I will continue to say, no, he did not. I think he was saying things that are false, with just factually false about his theories with regard to the election, about the election.
Right, but I guess Ben just is of the opinion that Trump really believes it.
Being stolen, about fraud. This was all adjudicated in court. He did not even bring many of the claims that he's brought publicly and all the rest of that. If we're talking about incitement of insurrection as a legal standard, it doesn't meet any of those standards. When it comes to incitement, it has to be incitement to immediate lawless action. That's the standard for incitement. And I'm very meticulous in how I use this because I happen to speak publicly a lot, and that means there are lots of people who listen to me, which means some of those people are probably crazy. And some of them may go and do a crazy thing. Did I incite them? The media tend to use the word incitement very loosely with regard to this sort of stuff, in the same way that Bernie Sanders, quote unquote, incited the Congress.
Well, I think it's a little different from Ben saying a thing, and then people are like, oh, I don't like these people because he said this, versus anything that Trump has said about January 6th. But okay.
Professional baseball shooting. He did not. Bernie Sanders has a lot of things I disagree with. I think Bernie's a schmuck. Doesn't matter. He did not incite that. So saying bad things is not the same thing as inciting violence. Inciting violence, the legal standard in the United States is, I want you to go punch that guy in the face. That's inciting.
Oh, Ben told me to do it. I'm going to go punch Destiny. Because he saw he did like a little nod to Destiny. I'm going to get you, buddy.
With regard to insurrection, typically in insurrection, and there are some descriptions in case law, though none in statutory law, as far as I'm aware, the typical description in case law is the replacement of one legitimate government of the United States with another by violent means. The notion that Donald Trump coordinated any such insurrection is belied by the FBI itself. The FBI put out a report in, I believe it was August of 2021, suggesting that there was no well-coordinated insurrectionist attempt coordinated by the White House. In fact, what you had was Donald Trump thrashing around.
Yeah, maybe it wasn't well-coordinated, but Trump can't do anything well.
Like that weird alien in the movie Life. I don't know if you ever saw it with Jake Gyllenhaal, where he's like kind of thrashing up against this glass box, just an alien just thrashing up against the glass box. That I think is more what you were seeing from November 4th to January 6th. And then again, the claim that January 6th itself was an insurrection. So virtually, I'm not aware that anyone was charged with actual insurrection. There were some people who were charged with seditious conspiracy. There are insurrection statutes that do exist. No one was charged under those particular statutes. There were some people who you could say informally had insurrectionist ideas. Those would be the people who wanted to hang Nancy Pelosi or kill Mike Pence. Damn. And those people are in jail right now. And the election went forward. The election was certified. Mike Pence presided over the certification.
What if the January 6th people won, though? Like, what if they were actually be able to effectively take over the government? And Trump was like, hell yeah, this is what I wanted you to do. Let's find, if we could, what if we invented a technology to get to an alternate timeline where we could figure those things out? And then if we could hear him say that, then, you know what I'm saying? If we could hear him say that, we'd be like, well, we hop to this other timeline, and it looks like you actually did want this, Trump. You know, it'd be kind of crazy.
Mitch McConnell presided.
Or maybe Trump's like, no, I never wanted this, and then he's innocent.
Over the certification, Joe Biden has been the president for the last 3 years. So Donald Trump, by the way, was still president at that point. If he had actively wanted to do what other people who have actually launched coups have done, he would have theoretically called the National Guard not to put down the riot, but to actually depose the sitting government of the United States. I
doubted that he would be able to pull that off, though, right? I mean,
name of a specious legal theory. He did not do that. He did not attempt that. Nobody working for him did that. The most you can say, I think, about what everybody was doing is...
Well, I mean, would anybody have actually gone along with that? Because Pence didn't seem to be too on play with Trump's dumb fucking ideas either, so...
That, and I want to say everybody. We can talk about Trump. This is really about Trump.
Everybody.
He used a phrase that Trump was disseminating knowingly false information. The word that's carrying a lot of weight there is the word knowingly. So knowingly implies a knower.
I appreciate Lex putting that on the board for us so we could see what the word knowingly meant.
Do I think the information he was disseminating was false? Yes. Do I think that Donald Trump has a unique capacity to convince himself of nearly anything that is to his own benefit? Absolutely. And I think that that's actually what Donald Trump was doing there. And the evidence of that is Donald Trump being a human and all of us watching him for the last several years. So, the idea that he...
I mean, listen, you can craft a decent argument that Trump is so fucking dumb he didn't know. But isn't that scary? You could be like, yeah, you know what? I don't think he did it. He knowingly did it because he's so dumb. It's like, oh, fuck, you're right. Shit. He is fucking insane. Maybe he didn't know. You know what I know, though, is that 7-Eleven pizzas are kind of good. Just saying.
Knew it to be false?
I had one yesterday.
I'm not even sure.
And then another one today. Not a whole one. My wife and I shared one yesterday. And then today we had leftovers. We bought two, but we only ate one. And then today I ate most of the other one, and I left her a couple pieces, and I don't know if it's going to last till she gets home. So that's her fucking problem.
The standards apply in any, and just assessing him as a human, which is really what we're being asked to do because there's an intent element to this crime. Do you think that today Donald Trump knows that he lost the election?
Absolutely.
So
he has to know it. Like, how would he not know? He was told multiple times that all of his claims were invalid.
I don't.
If he's that conspiracy brained, then he's just not fit to be a president. If your argument is like, yeah, well, he doesn't really know because you know what? No, then he's a fucking psychopath. Like, I mean, he's not fit to be president if you're that conspiracy brained. I don't think you can be you shouldn't be able to be president because what? You're just insane.
actually. I think
so I'm glad that you have the attorney background. When we are assessing mens rea, when we're looking at certain criminal statutes where intent is required, it's a reasonable person standard, right? Like, would a reasonable person have known that they were?
No, it depends on the mens rea standard. So it's not the same in every case. If you have to establish individual intent, then it's not enough to say a reasonable person should have known. That would be enough for a negligent statute. Usually when you're talking about reasonable person statutes, just legally speaking, a reasonable person statute is, should a reasonable person have known? That's when you get to like manslaughter. You can't do a reasonable person standard on like first-degree murder. So you have to establish actual motive in first-degree murder.
But for first-degree murder, you don't need the statement of "I plan to kill this person" or "I intend to kill this person." We can prove that state of mind.
You need
circumstantial evidence.
Correct. Yes, sure. You could prove.
So I feel like my feeling for Donald Trump was there were all these people around him that he trusted to investigate election fraud. He trusted Barr and the DOJ. He asked Pence, his vice president, to look into it. He asked his chief of staff. He asked his legal counsel. So many people that ostensibly he trusts them if he's asking them to look into it. And when all of them looked into it and reported back to him, no, we found nothing. Unless we're going to literally make the concession that Trump might actually be a delusional psycho man, at that point should he not have realized, like, well, okay, maybe
that's not. I think he should have realized the day of the election that he lost the election. But that's not. But that's
sure. But I'm saying that.
Oh yeah, but now we're having a conversation of if your argument is that he doesn't know because he's that fucking dumb, I guess, then he's not even fit to be president anymore. So I mean.
Like at that point, should he not have known that for him to go and propagate those claims that he'd asked all of the people he trusted to research, and then for him to take those claims to...
If you distrust your government that bad, why would you want to run again? To change it from the inside, guys. Trump is he's just trying to change it from the inside.
Michigan into Georgia, and then publicly, and to try to convince people to throw out the election. You don't think that...
But you're doing the same thing. You're reverting to, should a reasonable person have known? Yes, a reasonable person should have known. Did Donald Trump know? That's a different question. And so conflating those two questions is going to...
Why does he treat Trump like a baby? It's so weird. It's like childish.
Get you into domestic terror. By the way, this is why Jack Smith charged the way Jack Smith charged.
Yeah, which was...
Jack Smith did not charge conspiracy. Jack Smith did not charge...
Jack's films? What?
Insurrection. He did not charge seditious conspiracy, right? The reason is because Jack Smith is a good lawyer. What he's doing is he's actually broadly, I would say pretty obviously, expanding statutory coverage in weird areas in order to cover a thing that doesn't quite fit into any of these legal categories. But the point that I'm making is that Jack Smith is on my side of this. He doesn't think that he can actually establish the intent necessary to convict under a seditious conspiracy or an insurrection.
I agree with that, but I think a lot of the underlying facts, though, because he does bring up those calls to Raffensperger in Georgia, he does bring up in the indictments that they were knowingly false information. So it seems like that's going to be part of the case, maybe not to convict on any of the four particular charges that he mentioned, but it seems like that's probably going to be part of what he's going to have to establish in court to convict Trump.
So I want to look at the actual text of the charges. So I'm sorry that I don't have them memorized, but I believe one's a fraud charge that generally does not apply to cases like this. Generally, the fraud charge is like you're trying to steal money from the government.
Sure, fraud has been used pretty broadly in the past, though. It doesn't have to just be, because Smith has done oral arguments in response to a lot of the claims by Trump's lawyers. This was one of them. The infinite civil and criminal immunity was another one of them, where he cites past cases where these types of things, because I think it was to defraud of civil rights, I think was the fourth charge.
Right, so the defraud of civil rights is usually somebody standing in the actual like voting house door and preventing you from voting, not you have a specious legal theory that you espouse in court about whether those votes should be thrown out.
Sure. Although I don't like when we say specious legal theory and novel application, which I do agree some of these in some ways is novel, I don't think we've ever also had a president try to do this before. It is a novel situation where somebody has resisted the peaceful transfer of power this clearly in some different ways.
Well, if you're talking about the legal cases, that's not true. But Gore sued in 2000. I mean, if we're talking about the legal,
he's doing legal talk. This is where I would rather a qualified lawyer debate Ben than Destiny. Well, I mean, like, oh well, I guess that's ideal, but it is what it is. What.
Right. To Gore.
All Destiny does all day is sit on stream and fucking research like a loser. He's probably pretty educated on being a lawyer at this point.
Comparable to Gore. I'm not saying it's comparable to Gore. I'm saying that if the idea is that espousing a legal theory in court amounts to de facto some form of election denial or interference in some way, that can't. That's not, as a general principle, it's over-inclusive.
Sure. Gore wasn't trying to decertify the vote, though, for states, right? They challenged their thing to the Supreme Court. They lost their case in the Supreme Court, and then power transfer happened.
Right, and Donald Trump had a bunch of legal challenges, and then he had a rally, and then there was a riot, and then he left power.
Yeah, but the Eastman theory of what Pence could do in Congress is a far cry away.
A truly shitty theory. I mean, make no mistake.
But not just shitty. I think that if any Democrat had done this, I feel like we'd be looking at it in a far different lens. As in, we would...
Yeah, I mean, Ben has effectively admitted that he holds them to different standards. So
would be using terms like attempted coup, subversion of peaceful transfer of power. If a Democrat vice president had tried to essentially say that in Congress they could throw away the vote.
So I think what I want to get to here, actually, so we can be more specific, is why are these terms important? We agree on, largely speaking, what happened. I think the characterization of the term, are we...
I imagine the Ben's next argument is like, well, why do you find the term so important? We kind of agree. And then Destiny would respond with, well, because maybe he would respond with something along the lines of like, oh, I think it speaks negatively to Trump's character. Potentially shouldn't be president.
We keep kind of bouncing around between two different...
I think really what you need to do, Ben, is pick a side. Pick a side, Ben. Pick a side, Ben. I need you to pick a side, Ben. Are you in defense of Trump and the pedophiles? Or are you in defense of Biden and Spencer, a.k.a. Spooper?
Categories, and I want to make sure we chat.
Are we the legal stuff?
Okay,
actually.
okay. So we're just
not looking at incite because, like you said, Jack Smith, nobody's charging with incitement, and I don't believe insurrection is a part of it. So we're talking legal. Just in terms of like a president that is trying to prevent the peaceful transfer of power. So what do you call that? A bloodless coup or whatever contemporaneous term you want to use.
Right. So prevent the peaceful transfer of power with all means, or using means that are inappropriate. Not quite the same thing.
Using means that are inappropriate or illegal.
Okay. Inappropriate. Okay. So illegal. I don't think so. I don't think that these charges actually meet the criteria for the various charges, and we can discuss each case if you want.
Sure.
As far as inappropriate, sure. I think tons of inappropriate stuff. I mean,
grab that girl by the pussy, baby.
Appropriate.
The reason I don't like the word inappropriate, though, is because then conservatives are very quick to say, well, sure, he was inappropriate, but everybody was inappropriate.
I mean, I'll concede that he's more inappropriate than others. I just don't see
most inappropriate.
Sure.
Okay.
I mean,
the most, yeah, sure.
That's important to me, though. Does it not bother you that, like, Donald Trump sought through legal and extra legal and Trump magical ways of trying to entrench his power as president past when he should have been able to? Is that not something that was incredibly troublesome?
I mean,
or some would say troublesome.
The question to me is the bigger question that I think the Democrats are trying to promote in this election cycle, which is this means he is a threat to democracy sufficient that if he were to win the election, there would not be another.
Is that not? But he tried to do that last time. Could he not try to next time?
And I mean, he could try to do whatever he wants, presumably, and he would fail the same way that he did last time.
Why do we think that?
Because he failed.
Because
there was a riot and within 3 hours. Yes.
Like, let's say hypothetically.
Wow, Ben, you're kind of so you think somebody fails once, they'll never succeed? Ben, that's not the right spirit, brother. What are you doing?
Lord, save me. Let's say hypothetically, Giuliani was the next head of the Department of Justice. Giuliani was the next Attorney General.
How would he be confirmed?
I'm not entirely sure if because so much of the Republican Party, despite feeling like they don't support Trump when it comes time to actually back him in Congress.
Also, I'd have to check whether he would be barred by criminal conviction from holding. I don't know the answer to that.
Sure, yeah.
I think it's just a person that is very sympathetic to Trump. Gets elected in a position where he could help Trump, and then Trump is able to be successful. I think that's what they're saying.
Well, yeah, especially the 14th Amendment, we're figuring out a lot of this right now. Yeah. But I mean, like, say if not Giuliani, say if there are any other number of insane people that Trump could theoretically put on his side of the government that wouldn't tell him no next time, because there were a lot of people that rebuked him. There were Republicans in a lot of the states, right? Raffensperger is one of them. There were Republicans in his own administration. You've got Rosen, you've got Barr. There was his own vice president. But like theoretically next time, and I feel like last time going in, I'm going to do a little bit of mind reading back.
Let's say, hypothetically.
Maybe you agree, maybe disagree. I think that Trump kind of thought, one, I don't think Trump knows much at all about how the government works.
Exactly. If first you don't succeed, give up immediately and never try again. You'd think that he... that's probably why he doesn't believe in putting more money into impoverished areas, because he thinks that since they gave up, they'll never succeed. Which at least he's consistent.
Probably with that. I think Trump probably thought that if he had people that were like at least in his party and kind of camp, that they'll basically do whatever needs to be done.
Like camp, like Laszlo?
To give him what he wants, and with no respect for process. But now that he sees that, well, it's not enough to just have allies. I need people that are fiercely allegiant to me. Would we not be worried that a guy that tried to essentially steal the election for real wouldn't try to pick people that would be more amenable to his plans in the next administration?
I believe in the checks and balances of American government. I believe they worked on January 6th. So if you're asking me, do I think that Trump has bad intent or could have bad intent with that sort of stuff? Sure. Do I believe that the guardrails held and will continue to?
I mean, obviously you don't. Like, checks and balances are okay, but they're not perfect. Trump was able to get 3 Supreme Court justices. They delayed Obama for like over a year when he should have gotten one of the picks. Like, there's no way. It's not really a check and balance. It's an abuse of, I would argue, to some degree, an abuse of power. No, so
to hold also sure.
So if somebody was running and they blatantly said, like, I don't want to use the fascist word, but if they said, like, I want to be an authoritarian, I'm going to abolish all elections, you would say, sure, he's saying that, but like, I don't think he can actually do it. So it's okay if he runs for president. You don't care at all as long as you feel like the guardrails.
I mean, I might prefer other candidates, but I think that also one of the things that you do is that politicians, again, this would be an exceptional circumstance, but politicians constantly make promises about the things that they are going to do and then don't fulfill. And we tend to take those out in the wash, meaning that, you know, if I promise that day one, as Donald Trump has pledged to do, that he's going to deport literally every illegal immigrant into the country, do I think he's actually going to do that? I mean, I really highly doubt it.
Maybe he might do it.
But he didn't do it last time he was in office. That's just, there are many examples of this.
I agree.
Do I think, here's my question. Do you think the guardrails are going to fail to hold?
I'm not sure.
Really?
Yeah, because I think the issue is...
Yeah, I mean, like, I think it's a little ignorant to just assume that we're just kind of perfect. We're like impervious to some kind of like deception. I think that's a little bit of an ignorance take to have there.
Is one.
And it's worrisome because like things can always, like I said, I felt the same way about Roe v. Wade. I never thought that we were going to have to deal with like an abortion issue, and it was overturned. That's like, you know, you have to keep in mind that anything's possible with the power of Jesus Christ on your side. Ben, maybe that's why you don't know that. Because you don't have Jesus on your side.
When it's election time, Republicans are spineless in office. And I don't know how many congressmen would support what he wants just because they want to win re-election or because they think it's inevitable anyway.
Well, I mean, I think that one of the things that happened in 2022 is Democrats ran directly on this platform, and a bunch of Republicans lost who were running on this platform. Literally every Secretary of State who ran on the Donald Trump "we should deny elections" platform lost in every state.
Sure, but other Republicans that have been
office is this.
Sure, but I mean, like, look at what happened with like Kinzinger and Cheney, right? Who were very like staunchly anti-Trump after J6 for that select committee, right? Kinzinger didn't even run again, and Cheney lost her election by I think the widest margin that anybody has ever lost an election ever in like all of U.S. politics.
People who were not born voted against.
Yeah, I guess it's a surprising position to me if we're looking at like principled stances of government. The idea that a man who has, and I think we both agree on this, that Donald Trump's only allegiance is to Donald Trump, right? We agree on that. The only thing he cares about is Donald Trump.
I don't think it's the only thing he cares about. I think it's certainly the largest thing.
It's the largest thing he cares about, right? So you've got a man who only cares about himself.
Welcome to politics. I mean, it may be more,
but that's not even.
It may be more with Trump, but it's certainly not unique to Trump.
I think that the issue with Trump too, though, is I think he's even a threat to the Republican Party, in which I think you would mostly agree with me. Maybe not overall, but on every individual point, Trump picks bad candidates. He has no concern for the future of the Republican Party. Like, for instance, I think there is a chance. I don't think it'll happen because of how the polling looks now. But if Trump didn't get the nomination, I think Trump would say screw it and run as an independent because he thinks he can win or whatever, right?
I doubt that he would do that, but theoretically,
it's possible.
But,
yeah.
I mean, again,
Trump he was really.
Let's see it, dude. Pull an Andrew Yang. Why did Yang do that? You know,
Content to.
I could see Trump potentially winning as an independent. Imagine he's so fucked up. Imagine he was like the first president to wait on an independent vote. I don't know if that's true, but you understand, at least in modern history, that'd be fucking crazy.
Throw Georgia, the two runoff elections under the bus because Raffensperger didn't support him for the election.
So,
stuff.
what is all this in service of? What's the generalized argument that you're making? Do you believe? I'll go back to my question. Do you think that if Trump wins, there will be no more elections? Is that like what percentage on it? What percentage do you think that's a reality?
I think that we should look at the behavior of people and go, that's not good. And say, yeah, maybe we shouldn't vote this guy in again. It should speak negatively to his character. Excuse me. One of the, one of the aspects of this checks and balance system is us voting, right? So, like, I don't know. You should be able to go, wow, this guy's fucking insane. Let's not vote for him again. Instead of just going like, yeah, there's a huge red flag, but you know what? Who cares?
If Donald Trump wins, I think there is a 100% chance that he will try to prevent the peaceful transfer of power. In terms of would he succeed?
I can guarantee you he will not do that.
Why is that?
Because he's in his second term and he's no longer eligible, and he will believe he won and he will leave.
Yeah, but hasn't Donald Trump himself joked about running for a third term? I think that having a third term.
What has Donald Trump not joked about? I mean, for God's sake.
Okay.
Imagine he really tried to overturn the aspect where you can run multiple times or you can't run after 2 terms. That'd be fucking insane. That'd be wild.
Hold on.
If you want to prevent him from creating a revolution, you probably should actually just appoint him president and then he can't run again.
Here's another broad argument that I don't like in favor of Trump. And this was brought up earlier in terms of like we talk about like not grading presidents on a curve, but then earlier we said we take Biden's rhetoric.
Oh no, I totally grade Trump. No, I 100% grade presidents on a curve. Are you kidding?
Oh, okay.
I grade pretty much everybody on a curve.
Then I feel like
I don't treat my 7-year-old the same way that I treat my 9-year-old.
Okay, but Trump is not a fucking 7 or a 9-year-old. He was the president of the United States.
Sure, but I don't like that it feels like we're treating Donald Trump like a 7-year-old or a 9-year-old. I think we should treat him like the president of the United States. I don't think having a president that has taken like concrete steps to prevent the transfer of power, which he did with the electorate sham, which he did with Pence, and which he did with trying to capitalize on the J6 violence, a president that's taken concrete steps towards cooing the government, essentially. I don't know why that guy, we'd say, well, it's Trump, he does Trump things. The guardrails held, we'll probably hold next.
So, I mean, when we say we shouldn't, do you mean that he should be actually barred from office?
I'm just talking about support for him. I don't even think Republicans should support Trump. You lose your incumbent advantage. The guy's obviously self-destructive. He's destructive to the political party itself. Like,
do you think he should be on the ballot?
Oh shit, Lex.
You think there's a case to be made to remove him from the ballot?
I think there's a case to be made, but man, the phrasing, for as much as our governmental founding fathers and everybody else, wrote nice amendments and wrote nice in the Constitution, some of the phrasing is very, very, very bleh. And the Section 3, the not requiring any type of actual conviction, I don't have a strong feeling on it. I will say I'm very interested in reading the majority opinion from the Supreme Court. I seriously doubt the Supreme Court is going to uphold that states should be able to decide if they leave them off the ballot or not. I think for the political future of the United States, it's probably not healthy that the leading opposition candidate is now going to be barred from the ballot. It's probably not healthy for us. Because then what?
You want to talk about threats to democracy? That would be a pretty serious one. Applied across the board, by the way.
It would be. However, like that threat to democracy was earned by Donald Trump and the conservatives that supported him. I think conservatives made a dangerous gamble when they threw Trump into office, and now like all of the fallout from that is something that we all as Americans have.
How come Michelle Obama doesn't run? I like her
to deal with.
I mean,
and she used to be a man, so Perfect. I'm just kidding.
I think that the unprecedented legal theory that a state can simply bar somebody from the ballot on.
I think the problem is that Republicans still like Trump, which is why Ben keeps being lenient on Trump. Yeah, of course, doesn't want to piss his fan base off. 1,000%. I think that's really all it is. I think he knows that he has a decently, probably like a little bit of a further right audience. You know, crazy Facebook moms and dads that know that they can't say everything that they want to their kids because they'll disown them. I agree with that. Sure, but which is unfortunate. It's a little bit grifty,
On the basis of, in an informal way, believing that he is "quote unquote" an insurrectionist is pretty wild. I mean, that
we can say it's pretty wild, but there is an amendment in the Constitution, the 14th Amendment, that says that if they have engaged in this, they shall not be, or you shall. I don't remember the phrasing because it doesn't require conviction, but it's a self-executing, arguably thing.
If we're getting into constitutional law, I mean, there are a number of provisions that suggest that this is, number one, not self-executing. I mean, minority opinions in the Colorado Supreme Court case are pretty thorough. The number one contention, which is that this is not self-executing because other elements are not self-executing, that ignores subsequent actual law that happened. I mean, the Congress passed a law, for example, in 1872 defining who was an insurrectionist, who was not an insurrectionist for purposes of elections. In 1994, Congress passed a law that specifically defined insurrection as a criminal activity so that somebody could theoretically be convicted of insurrection and therefore ineligible to run for office. It is unlike, say, the analogs that are used by the majority opinion, like age. Obviously, this is not the same thing. We can all tell what somebody's age is by looking at their birth certificate. I can't tell whether somebody's an insurrectionist without any reference to a legal statute or definition of the term.
I would also be careful with that because remember, one of Trump's first big political actions was challenging Obama's birth certificate.
Well, and I thought that was dumb at the time. But
sure.
I like
at the time, Ben. What do you mean? You don't think it's dumb now, you little goose?
that you both said 100% chance that Trump will try to go for third term and 0% chance, which statistically.
Third term, he's done, man. Are you kidding?
I would want to.
Trump's going to walk around, hands up high, and be like, "I'm a two-term president. I'm the only president since Grover Cleveland who but since Grover Cleveland who served 2 non-consecutive terms. I kicked Joe Biden out of office, and I kicked Hillary Clinton out of office." Dude would be like, he'd be living large. Are you kidding? He doesn't want the presidency anymore after that.
I don't know if I believe that, but okay.
I just think that
I mean, listen. Here's the thing: Trump is the only president who didn't age through his presidency. Then I know that sounds like a little weird, but if you look at all the before and after pictures of presidents, you know, Trump he handled it weirdly well. The stress of the job, surprising.
I think it's scary that, like, Donald Trump, it feels like for all of the accusations that are made sometimes against Democrats, like Biden is ordering Garland to investigate Donald Trump and blah, blah, blah. It seems like Donald Trump would actually do that with his DOJ, would give them orders.
He didn't. He didn't.
Well,
he
kind of did, though, right? So, for instance, with Jeffrey Clark went to Rosen and Donahue and said, hey, listen, I need you guys to sign off on a letter that we're going to use essentially to bully states into overturning their elections by saying we found significant election fraud. And part of that threat was Jeffrey Clark saying, listen, if you're not going to do it, Rosen, Trump's going to fire you and just make me the acting attorney general. That was the threat that he carried. And I think Trump repeated that threat in a meeting later on that was, I only rebuked when I think like half the White House staff said, if you do this, we're resigning.
Okay, so that's a slightly different topic because now you're getting into all the election shenanigans and all this, but...
Trump saying he threatened to fire his acting attorney general if he wouldn't carry the same platform, essentially. Like, if Trump could order his DOJ to do something, would he? It's not beyond the pale for him, right?
It's not beyond the pale for him to order them to do it, and then it's not beyond the pale for them to reject him doing that, which is the story of his entire administration. Whereas Joe Biden orders his DOJ to do things, and then they just do them.
Well, I'm not. We can get into specifics there. This
is one of the big problems that I have with, I mean, for example, all the talk about Trump tyrant, Trump executive power. I mean, Joe Biden has used executive power in ways that far outstrip
every president has been stretching executive power.
Joe Biden is going like, Joe Biden has gone well beyond.
What is Joe Biden doing that goes beyond like executive power or stretching of executive power?
Yeah, on anything Trump even remotely attempted to maintain via just pure executive power. And actually, Trump's use of executive power is nowhere near even what Obama's was.
I mean, Trump's inability to get border policy passed literally had him using executive power to march the military down to the border to do border policy. I mean,
Joe Biden literally used the Occupational Safety and Hazard Administration to try to cram down vax mandates on 80 million Americans. That's insane.
Sure,
he literally said, I cannot relieve student loan debt, and then tried to relieve hundreds of billions of dollars in student
but what
loan
happened
debt.
to that?
It got struck down by the Supreme Court, and then they still did it. Biden bragged about it.
For what he was able to relieve, which I think were related to particular types of student loan debt. But I'm saying that, like, well, the guardrails are holding with Biden as much as they're holding with Trump. The only difference is that once Biden, exhausts his executive power, he's not running around like lying to people or trying to extort people or trying to and concoct insane schemes.
Well, I mean, so here's the way I would think of this. Think of the guardrails holding as the filter. Sure. Okay, meaning like the coffee is in the filter. Some of it's, what you want is going to get through, and all the stuff. The guardrails prevent the other stuff from getting through.
Okay, thank you.
Now the question becomes, what liquid are you pouring into the filter?
Piss.
Okay, meaning, so if a filter exists, if the guardrails hold, and if Donald Trump can't steal elections, what's the policy that comes through the other end of the filter? The policy I get from Donald Trump on the other end of the filter is a bunch of stuff that I like. The policy that I get from Joe Biden on the other end of the filter is a bunch of bullshit I don't.
Correct me if I'm wrong. Isn't this just Ben admitting that he's not as harsh onto Trump because he likes Trump's policies? Isn't that like weird, incredibly biased? Isn't what?
So that's the basic calculation.
Okay, so then the idea is essentially that Donald Trump's rhetoric is insane, but we don't care. Donald Trump would probably try to steal an election if he could, but he probably won't be able to.
He's not going to do it again. I told you. He's not.
You don't think he has any? Why not?
Because he won't be eligible to be on the ballot. I mean, by the way, you want to talk about 14th Amendment?
Mm-hmm.
That's where the 14th Amendment applies. Okay, that's where it actually applies. Meaning he is not qualified to be on the ballot in 2028 if he is the president of the United States. States can literally, in self-executing fashion, take him off the ballot. Just like he's past the age of 35. Once you have been president 2 times, you're no longer eligible to be president of the United States. Then you actually have a strong little case to keep him off the ballot.
Why would the 14th Amendment stop him if he thought Vice President Pence could unilaterally decide the outcome of the election?
When he's not on the ballot? So now your theory is that he's going to get reelected, and then in 2028 he's not even going to be on the ballot, and he's going to direct his new vice president Kerry Lake to simply declare him president of the United States when he has not been on a ballot.
I don't know what the scheme would be. I think we can kind of like laugh and say there's no scheme we could even concoct. But I think
I just don't understand. Like, I wouldn't doubt Trump does it, and I know every MAGA supporter listening to this right now is like, yeah, I hope he does. I fucking hope he does. They hope he's that bold. What do you? I mean, I would. If it's anybody, if anybody tries to run for a 3rd term, it'll be Trump.
Camacho, like with the machine gun, he's going to walk in.
I think the issue though is that like
I wonder if Ben just doesn't take Trump seriously enough. Like if he doesn't think he's enough of like I don't know, kind of a threat, I would say in some capacity.
The idea of electing another president that has tried to circumvent the peaceful transfer of power using extra legal means, and then pretending like we can't concoct a single scheme that he could try to circumvent other legal processes to have a 3rd term or to have a longer term or to install who he wants as the next president. When a person has already shown you who they are, and when every single person around him agrees with,
and Destiny knows because every person that he's ever become friends with shows them who they are, and then they end up fucking him over. So Ben, you gotta take it. Destiny knows what he's talking about, dude.
That when every single person that's worked with him, save for Sidney Powell, Eastman, and Giuliani, which I don't think anybody would want to throw their lot in with those 3. It just seems wild to me that we would say like, yeah, we're just gonna go ahead and trust this guy with another term of president, but like he can't run for a 3rd term, so it's fine. When there's like 50 million other things.
And I'll make you the case that if you want him not to make election trouble, you should elect him president in the next election cycle, and then he will be ineligible.
Okay, well, I find that to be a wholly unconvincing argument. But okay.
Well, recently in the news,
it wasn't much of an argument at all. It was more of a just like, okay, let's stop talking about this.
The presidents of Harvard, Penn, and MIT failed to fully denounce calls for genocide, and that
that shit was fucked up, right? There were people being incredibly anti-Semitic on their the school premises, and they wouldn't be explicit about how like that's bad. Yeah, I remember watching some clips on TikTok, guys. That's how I consume my media now, apparently. So hey. Interesting world we live in, huh?
That rose questions about the influence of DEI programs at universities. And so maybe either looking at this or zooming out more broadly at identity politics at universities or identity politics, wokeism in our culture. How big of a threat is it to our culture, to Western civilization? Ben?
I mean, I don't know what wokeism is. What exactly are we talking about? I think anything insane is a threat. That makes sense. How exactly would we define as wokeism? Like people being too woke? Like, yeah, it's bad, I guess.
So obviously I'm going to say it's a huge threat. The reason that I think there's a huge threat, I want to give a definition of wokeism because people are very often accused of
that would be good. Okay, thank you, Ben.
Not using wokeism
I just want to know what I'm bouncing off of here.
Properly or believing that it's sort of a catch-all phrase. I don't think it's a catch-all term. I think that wokeism has its...
It is unfortunate because conservatives call like everything woke now, just to be clear. Like now if you support gay people or trans people, it's too woke. And so it's kind of lost its thrill.
Roots in postmodernism, which essentially suggests that every principle is a reflection of underlying...
Oh, shit, I got to answer the phone. Give me like 2 seconds.
...structures of power, and that therefore any inequality roots in... believing that it's sort of a catch-all phrase. I don't think it's a catch-all term. I think that wokeism has its roots in postmodernism, which essentially suggests that every principle is a reflection of underlying structures of power, and that therefore any inequality that emerges under such a system is a reflection, again, of that structure of power. That used to be applied in sort of Marxist ways, the suggestion being that economic inequality was the result of misallocation of power in the structure preserved by...
Well, there probably is a level of truth to that, but there's only so much you can do. Again, I think that we just need to do better empowering lower middle class people financially. So
crust of people who wanted to cram down exploitation on people. That was sort of the Marxist version of postmodernism. And that got transmuted into sort of a racial version of postmodernism, in which the systems of the United States are white supremacist in orientation and are perpetuated by a group of people who are, in fact, in favor of the preservation of white power and white supremacy. That is the generalized theory of critical race theory, as proposed by, for example, Gene Stefanchik and Richard Delgado.
Yeah, listen, I think that it's good to acknowledge our racist past and have conversations about race and, not focusing too much on it. But I will say that it does sometimes feel like we focus too much on education about race to a default, or to our detriment, rather. It feels like nowadays on any identity, people will look at that as the primary reason for any type of issue they're having. It doesn't matter if it's a fat person, black person, LGBTQ. There's a lot of people who will just blame, like, oh, somebody was rude to me today. It's because I was black, or it's because I was fat, and they hate fat. It's like, I feel like the obsession about identity has gone a little too far here.
Can we please see you sit on the couch?
No.
Pretty PLS.
No. Why? Why? For what reason? Then I gotta stand up. Get that freak out of here.
In their book on critical race theory, that has taken a softer form that we refer to as DEI. The key in DEI.
Because I remember there's people even like, I'll say something like, hey, I don't think we should do reparations because we're at a point now where it's probably not necessary. Or rather, instead, we should focus on poor people instead of like just black people, right? Because you have rich black people, you have poor white people. I would argue, generally speaking, if you're somebody who is poor, there's probably a level of some kind of issue holding you back, right? Like if you're poor, you probably were born into a poor family that didn't make a lot of money. They might have had some kind of substance abuse issue, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. You can't control where you're born, so it's hard to get out of that. So you're better off helping poor people in general. Than just one group of people. Like, yeah, you can be oppressed because of your race. You can be oppressed because both your parents aren't together. You can be oppressed because your parents were drug addicts. You could be oppressed because they're any type of addict. There's like 1,000 different things, right? So, yeah, I think might be like a good idea not to exclusively focus on that. Get that instead.
EI is the E, meaning equity. So equity is a term that does not mean equality. People mix it up. Equality is the idea that we all ought to have equal rights, that we all ought to be treated equally by the law. Sure. Equity is the idea that if there is an inequality that emerges from any system, it is therefore due to discrimination. And the best
is that what equity is? Well, that's true.
way to tell whether somebody has been victimized is by dint of their race. And we can tell whether you're a member of an oppressed group or an oppressor group.
Yeah, it's just bad because we only focus on like race. We don't focus on other potential oppressors like class as much as we should be. Equity, the quality of being fair and impartial. Okay.
By the intersectional identity that you carry and by the nature of your group's success or failure predominantly along economic and power lines.
I'm not saying that CRT is bad, by the way. I don't know enough about it. Like the conversations around it seem kind of uninteresting. Teach about race. It's like, that's fine. As long as you don't teach people to be victims, I don't really care. I think it's a good thing to have an understanding.
American life. This means that if one group is predominantly successful economically, they must be a member of the victimizing class. And the only corrective for that would be, as Ibram X. Kendi likes to suggest, effectively anti-racist policies, racism in the service of destroying racism. That you're going to have to.
What does that policy look like? I'm just curious. Because like affirmative action, you could argue like it's somewhat racist to white people, right? Like generally, if there's two people, one white and one black, and they need to meet a particular quota, the black person's going to get it. Like, yeah, that's the system not working perfectly. But historically, you just wouldn't give a black person any opportunity. So that's why that exists. Now, if you wanted to argue that maybe we used to need it and now not anymore, that might be true. I don't know. Possibly. But again, I would focus on trying to empower poor people.
That you're going to have to, discriminate on the basis of race in order to correct for discrimination that's baked into the system. That's incredibly dangerous. It leads to a victim-victimizer narrative that is unhealthy for individuals and
I agree with that.
Terrible for societies. It relieves people of individual.
I agree with the narrative existing, not necessarily how it exists.
Responsibility, and it destroys the very notion of an objective metric by which we can decide meritocracy. And meritocracy is the only system human beings have ever devised that has positive externalities in literally any area of life. Every other distribution of wealth, power, done along other lines that is not having to do with merit has negative externalities. Every system having to do with merit has positive externalities because presumably the most effective and useful people are going to succeed under those systems. That's the very basis of a meritocracy. And the externalities of that mean that other people benefit from the meritorious and excellent performance of those people.
Maybe it would be good to get your comments.
That's a very long-winded answer.
Old stomping ground, Harvard. Do you think the president of Harvard should have been fired?
I mean, I think she should have
I think that she should be punched.
been fired out over the plagiarism allegations. I think she should have been fired based on her performance just at that congressional hearing. If the word black had been substituted for Jew in that statement by Elise Stefanik that she was asking about, or trans, or literally any other minority in America, maybe with the exception of Asian, then the answer would have been very different coming from Cloudy and Gay. With that said, I don't think the firing of Cloudy and Gay really accomplishes very much.
I wish you would show the clip because I don't remember where it is, but the clip was very interesting. They were asked something along the lines of, I forget the specifics of what they were asked, but it was along the lines of justifying anti-Semitism. But if it was the same rhetoric being used against any other group, they wouldn't have. They didn't ask the question because they wouldn't have tolerated it.
Did she get what she deserved? Sure. Does that mean that the underlying DEI equity-based system has been in any way severely damaged? No. I think that this is a way for universities, it's true for Liz McGill at Penn also, to basically throw somebody overboard as the sacrifice to maintain the underlying system that continues to predominate at American universities, where they spend literally billions of dollars every year on DEI initiatives and diversity hires and diversity administrators and all of this. I mean, one of the costs of education escalating is in the massive administrative.
I wonder how many black people are potentially feel like they've achieved less because of affirmative action. Does that make sense? That's not me making like a hard claim. I'm just curious if that's something that some black people struggle with, of being in like a solid position and doing like, damn, it was one of the only reasons why, because I happen to be black and educated, you know,
function that is now undertaken by universities, as opposed to teaching and you know, cost of dorms and such.
You guys probably agree on a lot of this, right?
Kind of, maybe, yeah. I don't know. I don't know what makes things do this, but it feels like we can never like have a good thing and then have it end as a good thing. Things always get taken to their extreme, and then we have to fight on those.
That's true. You know, it's like I would argue like most activism groups start really well intentioned, they do really well, and they go a little too far. It's like fat acceptance, man. Fat acceptance is a good thing. You know, it's supposed to be about not shaming fat people and then fat people trying to be healthier. Now some of it goes a little too far, where it gets a little too kooky. I'm not talking about like, I think it's perfectly fine to have fat models. That's not an issue at all. I like fat models. They're hot. But yeah, I mean, sometimes it's like, oh, well, you know, you're fat. It doesn't matter if you're fat, blah, blah, blah. I don't know. It's a little unhealthy, you know? I would say that like, obviously focusing on exercising is more important than losing weight necessarily. You should lose weight if you're too fat. I'm just saying that, you know, a health focus. You know, like I started to walk a lot and work out and stuff. So I've been walking like 3 or 4 hours a week, and then doing 3 workout days. Hopefully I keep it up. And my blood sugar has dropped significantly, which is a good thing because I'm very obese and I need to get my blood sugar down, you know, but I'm still just as fat. I'm just a lot more active and my blood sugar is going down. You know what I mean? So like, obviously I should still continue trying to lose weight, but it's more of the exercise is increasing my health than anything else, if that makes sense. But yeah.
Those extreme.
Like the health at any size thing. Like I could argue health at any size, kind of. Not really though. Like I would say that it's more important, like I just said, to exercise than it is to necessarily lose weight. Like a 300-pound person, you know, walking 3 hours a week is healthier than a 300-pound person not walking 3 hours a week. And the goal for a fat person is to do better, not perfect, or anybody really. And if that's your argument, like, hey, listen, I'm doing better. I'm not perfect, but I'm doing better. I'd be like, oh, okay, that's good. Like, that's good. But you shouldn't, like, actively try to be overweight. But
like, I would argue that back in my day, we called it SJW, social justice warriors, before it became woke, I think like 2013 onwards, whatever. Like, there are aspects to wokeism that I think are good. Like, I like the additional representation that we have in media now. I like how, as much as people complain about the internet and how it's regulated, that there are way more groups that are represented on the internet, whether we're talking X, the platform formerly known as Twitter or Facebook or whatever. I think in some ways, or whether we're pushing, you know, like women's achievements in school and in the wider workforce, I think that these are all good things.
The wider workforce.
The issue that you run into is people don't ever have a stopping point, and I think people kind of get lost in this woke for woke's sake thing, where we start to see these very weird warpings of these like academic, I guess, arguments that are used for really horrible things. So, for instance, I think that you can talk about in the United States things like white supremacy or things like oppression of certain demographics, especially with like Jim Crow laws and pre-Jim Crow. And you can even talk about effects from that. But then when you run into this weird world where we've kind of warped these things so that like not only is white supremacy still as present today as it ever has been, well, actually, black people and other minorities can't even be racist. They don't have the power to because we're
yeah, it's fucking ridiculous.
Going to use a different definition of racism, and we can only talk about punching up as opposed to punching down. And we're actually
but black people are so tall. It's like they're always punching down. You know what I mean?
I'm going to say it's totally okay for these people to say or do whatever they want, and it's never bad. But like white people who have always been the oppressors, even if you're like a trailer park guy whose family's addicted to meth, you know, you have all this privilege, et cetera, et cetera. I think that you run into these issues where wokeism, it starts off as like a really good idea, and I would argue has achieved really good things, especially in regards to like women's education and everything. And then it just gets so academia-ized, so there's a word there, academic, whatever, where you take something and you put it into school too much, and then it comes out as some Frankenstein, you know, cancer baby of like horrible things, such that today when I'm reading stuff, and I know Ben is the same way, like if I even hear somebody say the word like anti-racism, I'm probably ignoring every other thing you have to say.
Kind of.
If you utter the word like colonial anything, I'm probably going to say you probably don't have anything good to say. Yeah, a lot of it is just taken way too far. But you know what I will blame on some of this is I will blame conservatives for some of this. Because I think one issue that happens, and I think Ben might even agree with me here too, is I think there's 2 huge problems that have happened in the United States, I think broadly speaking, is that 1, we become more different than we ever have been, and 2, we become
we gotta reverse that. Just kidding.
more similar than we ever have been. And when I say this, what I mean is that like we're splitting off into these groups, and then these groups are enforcing this insane homogeneity between these two separate groups. And I think one of these schisms has been conservatives' reluctancy to participate in things related to higher education. So for a long time, conservatives are saying like, oh, the educational institutions are against us. Rush Limbaugh talks about how evil the colleges are and blah, blah, blah. And then what?
Yeah, I mean, conservatives don't have a particular high value for school at the same level, I would argue. Especially like Southern conservatives.
Happens is conservatives are less and less willing to engage in them. So then you get this scenario or this environment where everybody that's engaged in academia on the administrative side are...
No, it's only 25% increase speed. I can't do Destiny too fast.
Are fucking insane. They're like even more so too. And I also want to draw a distinction between like the administrators and the faculty, because oftentimes when you're reading story after story after story of like all of these insane admins that are pushing further and further left, usually the faculty is fighting against it. A lot of the tenured professors, a lot of people in their departments are saying like, hold on, well, we actually don't agree with this. But I feel like because conservatives for so long have demonized these institutions rather than like critically evaluated them and tried to like have like honest critique and engagement, that they've just like completely broken off. And when you only have a bunch of lefties or righties together, all they'll do is they'll veer off like even more into their insane directions.
That's why you got to switch up your hands when you're jacking off, guys. Can't have too much lefties or righties.
I feel like that's a big problem that we run into in the country, to where conservatives have totally broken off some conversations, broken away from, where they won't participate in them anymore. And then the people that you have left just run as far to the left as possible.
Well, certainly when you look at certain institutions, I think that one of the things that people on both sides of the aisle are constantly looking at is, has the institution suffered such capture that there is just no capacity to fix it? And when you talk about the universities, I'm not going to blame conservatives for the failure of the universities, because they haven't been present in major positions at universities since effectively the late 1960s. And you can go read Shelby Steele's work on this, where he talks about how, he's now a conservative black person. He was a liberal black person at the time. He was actually quite a radical black activist at the time in the 60s. And he talks about walking into the office of liberal administrators who were largely on his side with regard to civil rights, and being a radical, him claiming that the systems of the university were inherently broken, were inherently wrong, unfixable. And he talks about this, it's a very evocative episode, where he's talking about how he's smoking. And as he's smoking, the ash is growing more and more, and the ash falls down on this very expensive carpet. And the president of the university, who's listening to him rant and rave, Shelby Steele says, I thought he was going to say something about this. I mean, I was wrecking like $1,000 carpet in his office, being a jackass. And instead, I could see him wilt inside. I could see him collapse. He didn't have the institutional credibility or the intellect or sort of the spiritual strength to just say, listen, I agree with you on some of these things, but you're acting like a jackass. And what you see in the late 1960s and early 1970s is, in fact, the collapse of these institutions, to the point where by the time I was going to college, there was this radical disproportion between conservatives and liberals. And the problem is that when it comes to a system like the universities, basically you have to separate the universities off into two separate categories. One is STEM, where the universities are still pretty damn good. American universities, when it comes to STEM, are still leading universities in the world. Harvard's main creations these days are coming from actual hard science fields. Then you have the liberal arts field, in which you basically have a self-perpetuating elite, because that's actually how dissertations work. If you have somebody who's very far to the left and you decide that you're going to write a dissertation on the history of American gun rights, the chances that that is going to be approved by your dissertation advisor are much lower than if you happen to write something that tends to agree with the political positions of your dissertation advisor. Now, listen, I think there are open and tolerant professors, even in the liberal arts at these universities. I went to these universities, right? I went to UCLA, went to Harvard Law School. When I was at Harvard Law School, one of my favorite professors was Lani Guinier. Lani Guinier, they tried to appoint her, I believe, Secretary of Labor under Clinton, and she was too liberal, and she got rejected. So she was like a full-on communist. By the time I went there, she was great. We had debates every day. It was wonderful. She used to write me recommendations for my legal jobs after we left. Randall Kennedy, I don't agree with him very much. Randall Kennedy was a terrific professor. There are some professors who are like this. Unfortunately, there tends to be, in these echo chambers, more and more ideological conformity that is rigorously enforced, and it is by left on left. So, for example, when I was at Harvard Law School, the president of the university was another president who ended up being ousted, Larry Summers. Larry Summers had been the Secretary of Treasury under Bill Clinton, and he made the critical error of suggesting that perhaps the dearth of women in hard sciences and prestigious positions was due to possibly two factors that people were refusing to talk about. One was the possibility that women actually didn't want to be in hard sciences at nearly the rates that men do, which
That's probably is a factor. I mean, there's probably also a historic factor of women not really being accepted into those things and possibly being turned away from them. But there also might just be a biological thing that makes women not want to do science and math as much. Maybe there isn't. I don't really care, but it could be true.
Happens to be true. And two was the distribution of STEM IQ, right? Which is something that you certainly were not allowed to talk about. The idea that the men's bell curve when it comes to IQ, particularly on STEM subjects, tends to be shallower than the women's bell curve. So when you get to the very end of the bell curve, what you tend to see is a lot of really dumb guys and a lot of really smart guys. And so when you're talking about the top universities, maybe that has something to do with the disproportion. And he's trying to explain.
Maybe that has to do with the fact that schooling isn't really constructed in a way that's as good for men as women. I mean, I feel like as a guy, I always did very well in school. But I have ADHD. It's hard to just sit still and listen for fucking 8 hours without being able to really engage with any other stimulation other than like what the teacher is talking about. And I feel like the young boys are a little bit more, they're a little bit more energetic. They want to do a little bit more stuff. They want to go a little kookier, a little crazier. Whereas girls, I feel like, are a little more stable. They're not as rambunctious. They are more polite, especially when they're younger. And I feel like that might have something to do with the wide range of IQ. I don't know, but it's I think it could be a factor. It's probably easier for girls in school because they're just wired a little differently. They have an easier time just paying attention. If we had better class structures, you might see like a better curve for men. But
explain that to say that our systems are not discriminating. If we end up with more men than women, maybe more men are applying, more men are qualified. That's why he was ousted for that by a left-wing faculty and general alum network at Harvard University. So there's a lot to blame conservatives for surrendering the playing field. I totally agree that conservatives should not have surrendered the playing field in some institutions. Colleges were surrendered a lot earlier than 20 years ago. They were surrendered in the late 1960s, early 1970s.
Yeah, so I think that a couple things. So one of the big issues that I have with kind of like this, I don't know if we call it era of Trumpism or...
Ben, what do you think of Kai Cenat, level 7 yacht, Rizzler, skibbity toilet? Among us balls.
Populism is this total disregard for institutions and this disconnect from participation in the system. So it's one of the big things that I fight with progressives about, who cares because they're all 20 years old, they don't vote anyway. But it's another thing that I notice with a lot of people that are Trump voters, Trump fans or whatever, is this idea where we say this institution is irrevocably destroyed. It's irredeemable. It can't be saved. Nothing that we do can fix it. And I think that what that leads people to doing is, one, they disconnect further, and then two, there's a general hopelessness when it comes to how society is like ran or structured, such that you fall into that populist brain rot of the only person that can save me is Donald Trump. I can't trust literally anything. And I think that when you start driving people into that direction, all it does is it further amplifies all the problems that you were complaining about. So that's one of the reasons why when we talk about like conservative participation, I want there to be more conservatives that are trying to participate in academia, but I feel like the leading thought or the leading speaking out against it is basically saying it's a waste of time. It's completely lost.
So I think that the alternative to that is that you're seeing on the right a growth of, for example, alternative universities.
Yeah, but this is the worst thing.
No, I don't think so at all. I think competition is a great way of incentivizing some change on behalf of universities that may have forgotten that there's an entire other side of the aisle in the United States.
No shot. I don't think even you think that.
So first of all, let me make it clear. I think the entire educational system at the upper levels, if you're not in STEM, is a complete scam. I think it's a complete waste of money. I think it's a complete waste of time. And I think that it's all it is a formalized, very expensive sorting mechanism for people of IQ. That's all it is. People take an SAT, you go to a good school, you take 4 years of bullshit. I know, I did it at UCLA. And then we analyze based on your degree where you should go to law school. I could have gone directly from high school to law school with maybe 1 year of training and then done 1 year of law school and been done. Okay, the reality is that this is a giant scam. And this, again, it's a bipartisan problem, but it's just a generalized problem. We have, you want to talk about things that hurt the lower classes in the United States? The bleeding of degrees up is so wild and crazy. There's so many jobs in the United States that should not require a college degree that we now require a college degree to do because there was...
Well, yeah, I mean, because more people are able to go to college and then they have the ability to ask for more. And obviously, jobs are going to want... jobs are going to want more, better trained people. I get that. I also think that the degrees are very encumbered, if that makes any sense. It kind of feels like we shouldn't have to do as much. Oh, now I know why this isn't working well. Okay. It feels like there could be a little bit more of a streamline in the way that you engage in school for some things. I understand being well-rounded, but sometimes maybe you don't need like a super high math degree if you're trying to be a nurse or something. You know what I mean? Like, you can probably streamline things a little bit better, make things a little bit cheaper.
This weird idea that came over Americans where they mistook correlation for causation. They would say, oh, look, people who go to college are making more money than people who don't go to college. Therefore, everyone should go to college. Well, maybe the reason is because people who are going to college were better qualified for particular jobs because on average, not all the time, but on average, a lot of those people were smarter and making more money because of that. And so all you've done is you've now created these additional layers of stratification. So a person who used to be able to get a job with a college degree now has to have a postdoc degree in order to go get that degree. A person who used to be able to just graduate high school, now it's de facto you got to go to JUCO.
Yeah, well, I mean, here's the thing. Like, I get it, but also if that job... If that job doesn't need more people, then it's working as intended for them, right? Because like, yeah, I require a higher, level of education, but they're probably getting better outcomes from those people in higher levels of education because you being able to get through an associate's or a bachelor's degree or a master's degree, et cetera, it shows that you're able to commit well enough, that you can deal with a structure, that you can listen to rules, that you have you're a little more intelligent. So
and then you got to go to college, or nobody's even going to look at your resume. It's really, really terrible for people who can't afford all of that. It's led to this massive increase in educational cost that is inexplicable.
Well, I think a lot of the increase in educational costs, from my understanding, has to do with administrative costs that aren't necessarily increasing the student or even teacher experience. So, I mean, you could probably, I mean, this is an Andrew Yang thing, but I think it makes sense to potentially have the government say like, hey, listen, you're going to have to charge less, or we're not going to give you subsidies for your schooling. And I think that could get down costs pretty significantly as well.
Other than this particular sort of bleed up, and by the way, federal subsidies for higher education. Again, when my problem with federal subsidies for higher education, I'd love for everyone to be able to go to college if qualified to do so and if it is productive. But one of the things I did when I went to law school is I took loans because a bank said I was going to get my money back if I got a law degree from Harvard. But when you're not going to get your money back? If you're a bank, you're not going to lend to some dude who wants to major in, art theory, because is that a good bet? There's no collateral, right? If I give a loan for a house, I can go repossess the house. How do I repossess your garbage college degree from UCLA? There's no way to do that. So, this is a broader conversation about education in general. I think the educational system is cruising for a bruising, and I think all that's necessary for it to completely collapse on the non-STEM side where you actually learn things is for people who employ to simply say, give me your SAT score and I will hire you for an apprenticeship directly out of high school. That it would cut out so much of the middleman. But as far as the general point that you're making about institutions, I may disagree on the education and how far it's gone. In general, I agree with you. So in general, I agree. And I get to use my favorite, longest word in the English language here. I would consider myself, in many cases, an anti-disestablishmentarianist.
Nice. Whoa! I just come.
If you're an establishmentarian, that means you like disestablishmentarianism. Right. So I'm an anti. So
can you say that word, Dustin?
That's the one we all learned growing up. Anti-disestablishmentarianism.
There
The
you
longest
go.
word in the dictionary.
So he's also.
Is that really the longest word in the dictionary? Cringe. So they only know it because they're nerds? Ugh.
Some Canadian group say, what about supercalifragilistic? And then you're
what about pneumoultramicroscopic?
or the science terms.
Yeah, exactly.
Or what about the 7,000 letter thing that's from part of biochem?
I got my education in the Soviet Union, so we just did math.
That's why you're a useful person.
Soviet Union math was at 1 + 1, how to make that equal 3?
We know long words, and he streams on the internet, and I talk for a living. So anyway,
I think that's okay.
Point is that I don't disagree. That
I feel like Ben and Destiny's jobs are like almost the same. Like, yeah, Destiny streams on the internet. So does Ben. Ben has a show on the internet where he streams it. They're actually very similar in that regard. So I don't think he was trying to take a shot at him, but they basically do the same job.
There is a general populist.
Ben's video. Fuck me in the balls. Ben's stuff is just a little bit more curated. I didn't have to lose that. I'm so ugly.
Tendency on all sides of the aisle to look at the institutions and then throw them overboard. I think that some of that is earned by people who are in positions of power at institutions who have completely undermined the faith and credibility of those institutions. I think you have to examine institution by institutions which ones are salvageable and which ones are not. So I'm not a full anti-disestablishmentarianism. I'd be partially in that camp. There are certain institutions like higher education in the liberal arts that I think we may be better off without. And then there are certain institutions like, say, participation in American government, where when people talk about we need a revolution, like, no, we don't. That's not a thing. We need an evolution.
Revolt these nuts in your mouth. You know what I'm
saying? We need change. We can use the system. But I think you have to look at it industry by industry,
just
institution by institution.
On that position on institutions, do you think Biden or Trump would side you more?
As far as the institutions?
Yeah.
I think the institutions in the United States at the governmental level are robust. I think the social institutions are failing.
Yeah, but I'm just curious on your general view of institutions. Do you think Biden or Trump would side with you more on how you view them?
I think that in rhetoric, Biden would, and then I think that he would tear out the face of the institution and wear it around like a mask like Hannibal Lecter. I mean, that's my actual...
He resisted some people's calls to pack the court and...
Yes, because I think that his use of executive power was greater than that of Donald Trump. The power that he had, he used to greater effect than Donald Trump. Donald Trump, again, thrashed up against the sides of the box, but could not get out of it.
Okay. For just on a real quick, because on that answer went a lot farther than the initial question.
Yeah.
But, just on the real quick thing, the reason why my main problem that I feel like we have today in society is people are getting into their own bubbles. The idea of having like conservative schools and liberal schools seems like the saddest thing in the world to me. Like I would.
Yeah, that does seem. I mean, then you're not getting an exchange of idea. There should be more tolerance to conservative perspective, even if it's wrong. I mean, listen, liberals are more right than conservatives on their ideologies and view of the world, but I'd argue that they don't know why. A lot of listen, you're kind of being more progressive is generally like the safer bet. It's not why I'm a progressive. It's because I'm right. I'm always correct. And so a lot of people, they might even mean well, but they're like, hey, this thing is this. They don't really know why that thing is that, though. They don't really know what the fuck they're talking about. Just in general is something that I've noticed. So, be a little bit more empathetic, because if you can, I think that's one of the things why, teach people to understand why they believe a certain thing instead of just having the belief in general. Then they can explain it to other people in an effective way and change people's minds.
Want conservatives and liberals going to school together, because I think these people need to interact with each other more, if for no other reason than to see that the other person is not like an actual monstrous, horrible entity that wants to destroy the country.
I think a classically liberal idea for many schools would not be a bad thing. I think it would be a good thing.
Yeah.
I just wonder if that's salvageable. And if it's not salvageable, then the answer to that is...
Well, I think Ben, it's salvageable. Don't worry about it.
I feel like
Ben salvageable. Like Ben Savage, that's the joke.
I feel like the biggest issue that we have is people they sort into these different like phantom worlds, to where even if you live in the same city, City, there are totally different
phantom tax
worlds that exist between liberals and conservatives. And I feel like one of the big barriers to people understanding the other side sometimes it's just a little bit of information or a little bit of like firsthand experience. So in terms of information, I'm sure you saw.
True, nothing displays like nothing really gets you to be empathetic to somebody without like meeting them, just getting to know the person. That's why I like people with Down syndrome now, because I met them. I know it sounds ridiculous. Well, my wife's a behavior, blah 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 blah. Her job, and it's like, wow, what a beautiful thing.
I don't know if this is a full-on study, but they were talking about how some huge percentage of students would change their mind on From the River to the Sea when you told them what From the River to the Sea
what the river was and what the sea was.
Yeah, that's an anti-Semitic dog whistle saying kill Jews. Like, yes, it's very bad. People will say, no, it's not, blah, 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 because you're stupid. It is. That's what they think. A lot of people in Gaza and in Palestine, they don't believe that Israel should be in existence. So they say From the River to the Sea, the Palestinians shall be free, as a way to say we should get rid of all Israeli people. And where they're going to go? Nowhere. They would get genocided. Hamas was founded on the death of Jews. So, yeah, you shouldn't say that. You could say, like, you want free Palestine. That's fine. But,
or when you said, like, what does a one-state solution mean? A lot of them, like, such that the numbers are from like 70% to like 30% in terms of like support.
Yeah, one-state solution probably is not going to work because, like, both groups of people do not particularly care for each other. Dude, come on. I accidentally minimized and I lost again.
And it wasn't because you were doing a radical redefining of ideology. You were just giving it a little bit more information. And then something that I've seen on a first-hand level is when I go and speak or do debates at university, sometimes I'm in very, very, very conservative areas. Some of my fans are trans. Having like a trans person conservative for a little bit, not like in a speech, but just like in like a bar or setting, like a lot of them walk away thinking like, oh, not every trans person is like this insane that is an actual crazy person. And then for some of my fans, when they hang out with conservatives, like, oh, these guys are actually pretty friendly. I thought they would have all been homophobic, racist, transphobic people.
They're
they're just like normal people. Nice. I feel like we need more of that.
I totally agree with that, certainly.
Yeah, and I feel like on our social media platforms, on our algorithms, in our schools, I feel like we're sorting harder and harder and harder, and any type of rhetoric that encourages the sorting is really bad and damaging. We need to like continue to mix up. And there's other things I want to talk about, but Max is opening his mouth.
Destiny the uniter.
They're gonna move on. No.
All right,
like Biden. Not like Trump.
As we approach the end, let us descend into the meme further and further. Ben, you're in a monopoly.
Yes, this is the real question we've been waiting for. They're gonna fucking grill Destiny on being polyamorous.
Monogamous marriage. Destiny, you've been mostly in an open marriage until recently.
What does that mean? Give me a little context.
How foundational is
Ben? Have you watched the 15 hours of the coverage Destiny did on his divorce?
Marriage, monogamous marriage to the United States of America? Can open marriages work? Are they harmful to society?
Listen, I think they can work just fine. I've just never really seen an attractive person in a polyamorous relationship. It's just it seems to be a particular type of person, and that's life, man. And I don't think Destiny's an ugly guy. I don't think it's really him. He's kind of the exception. Kind of. His wife was somewhat attractive. I mean, I'm just not my type, but she was fine. My point is it's usually weird looking people, dude. It's something to be. I'm just saying. That's all I'm saying. Is all I'm saying.
Ben.
Marriages are the single most important thing that people can do in the United States because the things within your control are easier to control than the things outside your control. People tend to think about big political
What? Are you serious?
change, obviously, about things they can do to change the entire system. But the reality is the thing that you can do that best changes society is to get married and have kids and raise your kids responsibly. That is the single best thing that you can do. Can an open marriage work? I mean,
what about drinking responsibly? Or do you think I should hit another family with my car?
I think that it depends on your definition of work. So in my version of work, the answer is no, because what you actually need in order to facilitate the healthy growing of a child is a father and mother who are committed to each other.
What about two moms or two dads? Who gives a fuck,
All ideas about there being no emotional component to sexual activity are completely specious.
I agree with that. Like, there's always an emotional component. Even if men don't engage as emotionally in sex than women, there's still like an emotional component. I don't think you can fully give yourself to, you can't if you're sleeping with another person, the fuck is this? Okay. You can't. That was weird. Yeah. If you're sleeping with another person, you're taking away love from like your primary partner or your wife or your this or that. I agree with that.
That it's truer for men than it is for women, but it's not true for either. The idea of a full commitment to a human being with whom you genetically create children, which is typically how we've done it throughout human existence, is in fact the fundamental basis for any functional civilization. It allows.
It's so weird because Ben is such a dork about this. It's like, yeah, I agree with you, but like, there's something very powerful and magical about being in love and being committed to one person. You know what I mean? Fuck all this nerd shit. Historically, in 1952. Shut the fuck up. You know what I mean, dude? It's cool. Finding somebody that you love is fucking cool. Like, it's a really nice experience to be able to find somebody that you could build a really big trusting relationship with and just not feel like you're constantly under scrutiny. Every time I leave the house, every time I do anything with anybody but my wife, I feel like I have to, act a certain way or be a certain way or live up to an expectation. And with my wife, I can kind of put that down a little bit, and I could just relax. I don't have to be so on guard all the time. That's just something nice about that.
As for the transmission of culture and values, it allows for the transmission of beliefs and responsibility, and it gives the great lie to both the communitarian lie and the atomistic individualist lie. The communitarian lie is that you belong to the giant community of man, which is not true because you have a family, and your allegiance should be and is naturally to the members of your family first. That's how we learn, and then we expound that out. And it also is a lie to the notion that we are all atomistic individuals with no responsibilities. We are born into a world of responsibilities. Everyone is born into a world of responsibilities and rules.
Yes, Nico, you got that, bitch.
And roles, and those are good. And if we do not actually socialize our children that way, there will be, number one, no children. Number one, there will be no healthy children. Number two, there will be no healthy children. Number three, there will be not the foundation for either social fabric, which is the real glue that holds together society, or for a functional government. Yes.
Oh, dude, they just got pushed into.
I'm a fan.
Jesus
15 years
Christ.
married, 4 kids. Yes.
Destiny, what do you think?
Ew,
I think that when we talk about like relationships and marriage, I think something that's really important is we have to talk about whether or not children are being discussed or not. Because I think once you introduce the child aspect, I think the style or the type of relationship that you do is going to become way more important than whatever exists prior to that. Like I would agree, for instance, in terms of what Ben is saying, that there's probably going to be some structure that is ideal for the care and the raising of a child. I think that having a child gives you a much bigger buy-in to society, because now all of a sudden you care about a lot of things that you might not have before, because not only do you exist in society, you can't just run. Now you've got a child that exists there, and you've got to ensure that everything functions smoothly, not just for you, but for that child as well. And arguably, although we're getting into weird places, I guess, in the world now, like children are the primary conduit for like where you transmit like cultural values and everything. The one kind of weird thing that we're coming up against, that we have been coming up against now for some number of decades and will continue to, is as societies progress, it seems like people are having less children. And I actually don't know 100% what the answer is to that question. I'm sure you do. Yeah. I
guess it would have more children. Yeah, I don't know. I mean, you'd have to just create incentives for people to be able to have kids. Well, one, we need a more healthy society, because it is harder to have kids when you're overweight, especially for women. So that's definitely a factor. Better nutrition education, things like that. People having more kids. But listen, women work now. And what? Oh my god! I didn't even see this fucking thing kill me. I'm gonna shit my pants. And sometimes they're more focused on that work than potentially wanting to raise a family, which is fine. But it would be good to implement structures that would help them have kids. Right. It would be good to implement some structures to help them be like, maybe universal childcare or some kind of childcare, just more money in general, better support for if they are out on leave, tax incentives, things of that nature, just whatever else you can think of. I
mean, an implementable answer that works, that we know we can get everybody on board with. It seems like, for a large part of human history, having children, and it still is, having children is awesome, and children are cool, and children are magical and miraculous, and all of this. But
Destiny, do you actually believe that?
You didn't really have much competing for your attention to have a child, right? When you hit a certain age and you started working, especially if you were a woman, I mean, childbirth is kind of the next step, and then having a family, raising your children, and then doing that is kind of the next step. Nowadays, especially with women being able to work, especially with women having access to birth control, there's a lot available in the world.
Boo, women working. Ew.
Competing for the interest of people that could otherwise be having children, such that we've almost flipped it, such that, as been brought up earlier.
Yeah, less stress would probably help too. Yeah, sure.
Like wealthy people tend to have less children than not wealthy people, or unless you're part of a particular.
How about what if kids were just not as annoying? Maybe then I'd have more.
Religious communities that push childbirth a lot. I don't know if I would say there exists a moral imperative on an individual to have children. I think that there's a lot of interesting arguments down that path. I don't know if we're quite at the point yet where we need to say like, oh my God, we're running out of people, we need to have more kids. I don't think we're quite there yet, but we are seeing, weird demographic trends that are having big impacts on how countries are playing out. For instance, the fact that we have a disproportionately huge aging population that needs to be taken care of with medical expenses and everything, that vote in different ways than our younger population, and that when they die off, like the way that society is going to look is going to be a lot different. I don't.
Yeah, I think that we should, if we're going to have a limit to how young you have to be to vote, or how old you have to be. We have to be 18. We need to set an upper limit too of like 65 or something. I think that's fair. Something like that. Because why not? You're going to be dead soon. You know what I mean? What the hell are you doing?
I don't actually have I'm not
like,
entirely sure.
Are you really voting in the best interest of the country, or are you just old as fuck? And you're just trying to vote in the best interest of yourself.
Going to look like in terms of pushing people to have kids when every single industrialized country, as they become more industrialized, have fewer and fewer and fewer children.
Rapid fire questions.
And AI, make more AI stuff. There you go. They'll take care of us.
And the answer, my answer was go to church.
Religion, yeah. I figured.
Yeah.
Well, we could talk about religion, but that's not rapid fire at all. Let me ask, this is from the internet. Does body count matter?
Jesus Christ.
Oh. maybe, I don't know.
We're really bringing up the red pill stuff.
Are you avoiding answering?
I mean, it's totally, it depends on who you are.
Oh,
if you're somebody that
depends.
doesn't care about it, it doesn't. If you're somebody that does care about it, yeah, it does, of course. Depends on the...
The answer is yes.
Okay. Should porn be banned?
No.
Probably not, but people should have a more healthy relationship with porn and try not to get into it when you're young.
If you could do it, yes. There's no benefit to pornography.
Shut up, then. Dude, that's actually an objective lie. I'm a very sexual person, and I like to jack off, and porn helps me jack off. Guys like porn more. Guys are more visual creatures. Take away porn, guys are going to start raping women. Not me. I'm not even a joke or anything, but like guys are going to be more sexually frustrated. It's an outlet for people's sexual aggression and sexual frustration. You know, my wife doesn't always want to have sex. That's fine. I fucking jerk off. I come in here, I goon for a couple hours. You know, I know that might have been provocative. I'm not trying to be provocative, but like, you know, porn is good for people to be able to regulate themselves. So, you know, cringe, Ben. I thought you were a big fan of Trump. Have you never seen Tiana Trump before? What the fuck?
It's a waste of time and destructive to the human soul.
Dude, I'm gonna fucking die.
Asking this question:
my God.
Is OnlyFans empowering or destructive for women?
I don't think OnlyFans is empowering for women. I think OnlyFans is empowering for porn stars. Historically, like, porn stars didn't get as much agency over themselves. And OnlyFans gives them the ability to kind of moderate themselves, moderate their own, you know, business. Oh, dude, I'm like not paying attention.
Jesus. These are rapid fire?
Yeah, just you can't.
I mean, it's probably empowering for the ones that are making a lot
That's
of...
a slippery slope. No porn equals. Yes. No porn will equal like higher levels of sexual aggression between men. How is that a slippery slope? Like, what are you talking about? Guys not being able, it's like, guys are very aggressive and they're very sexual. A lot of guys not being able to get out their sexual aggression by jerking off, by having like material that will actually get them off, is going to cause more sexual violence. Yes, it's not a slippery slope. It's not even close to inconceivable. It's one of the most like normal lukewarm takes I've ever had in my entire life. People need to jerk off. I'm just letting you know.
money off it. It probably feels disempowering for others that feel...
It doesn't have to be like an active like a rape scenario. You know, we already know that in society there's a huge problem with you know, issues of like understanding boundaries and whatnot. So like, yeah, absolutely, it'll cause an issue. I agree with that 100%. Of course, it's myself saying it.
affected by the cultural norm set by women that do OnlyFans. There's my rapid fire answer.
It's destructive to even the ones who are making a lot of money, because when you degrade yourself to being just a set of human body characteristics that other people jack off to, it's bad for you and it's bad for them.
Is rap music?
Absolutely.
Have you evolved on this? Or?
Have I evolved on this? So
why wouldn't rap be music? I don't get it. I remember Ben having like going crazy about how rap wasn't music, but that's funny.
Again, I'm going to go to what's the definition of music. My original argument about rap was that music involves the following three elements: rhythm, melody, harmony. Rap typically involves maybe one of those.
What? Oh, maybe. What?
Or maybe a melody, maybe sometimes. So it
There's no rhythm in rap?
depends on the kind of rap.
Maybe Ben just listens to UK rap. That's the problem.
With that said, I could be convinced on this issue, but listen, I'm a classical violinist. I mean, that's how I was raised. I listen to Beethoven and Brahms and Mozart, like in the car with my kids. So is it comparable? Is it in the same category as Beethoven, Brahms, and Mozart? I have a very hard time sticking it in the same category as that.
Do you have a hard time sticking out your gat for the Rizzler?
All right, you're both world-class debaters.
World class. Oh, they're definitely good. But world class? Where the fuck was that evaluated? Yeah.
Even public intellectuals, if I can say that.
Jesus.
Exactly. If you're gooning, dude, you have no time to be a predator.
Yeah, I
I'm
know.
going real hard here.
I know. You both care about the truth. What is your process of arriving at the truth?
I think it's really important to... Everybody will say that they're objective and that they are nonpartisan. I think it's really important to have mental safeguards for bad opinions. So, for instance, like a couple things that I'll ask myself is, for a particular debate that I'm having, like, can I argue convincingly both sides of the debate? If I can't, I won't bother having the debate, because I realize that I'm probably too partisanly dug in if I can't even represent like an opposite argument here. Another question that you might ask yourself is like, well, what would it take to convince you out of a certain position? If you feel very strongly that Medicare for all is a good system by which to run the United States healthcare, and somebody says, well, what would it take to convince you otherwise? If you can't even fathom, like, well, what would it take to convince me otherwise? You're probably too dug into a position. So I think if you go through life saying like, well, I try my best to be unbiased, rather than saying I try to best my...
What can you do to convince me Medicare for all is bad? Letting women have access to it? Fuck. I'm no longer for that.
best be aware of my biases.
What if we just gave men healthcare access and we just didn't give women healthcare? We had made the women pay and we made the men do okay. That's not a bad idea, actually. That's pretty smart. Okay, there you go. But the women can get it if they marry a man. Would you be okay with that, Ben? The women just have to marry a man. You could force marriage then. Free healthcare for men and their wives. And their kids, of course, until a certain age of 4. 13, according to the Bible, because then you can marry them off to a man. So once the girl's 4, 13, I meant, you can marry them off to a weird older guy that bought them, like in other countries, which is terrible. A lot of those countries, some of them, are Middle Eastern. So, I don't know why. I was trying to harken back to my conversation earlier about some of the worst, shitty values in the Middle East and how I didn't like all their values. I feel like I missed the mark on that though. But it's okay. We're gonna move on.
Because the latter is more realistic and the former is literally impossible unless you're a computer. So I think having like actual mental practices that you engage in to try to counter some of the biases that you have is more important than trying to pretend that you're free of all biases and then consuming all your media from one source. Yeah.
Ben?
I mean, I agree with a lot of that. I think that the easiest practical guide is read a bunch of different things from a bunch of different sources, and where they cross is probably the set of facts, and then everything else is extrapolated opinion from different premises. That's sort of the short story. So read the New York Times and Breitbart, and they're going to disagree on a lot, but if the core of the story...
And the Daily Wire.
Certainly read the Daily Wire. If you read the Daily Wire and you read the...
Ben forgetting to plug his own thing.
Washington Post, and there's a nexus of the same thing, then you can pretty well guarantee that at least, if we're all blind men feeling the elephant...
Is this an actual debate, or is Lex just asking questions? What are you talking about? We've been here for like 3 hours. Did you just join? It's been a legitimate debate.
At least if we're all feeling the trunk, we know that there's a trunk there.
What is a debate? Is asking questions. What?
All right. You may not know what the elephant is.
And if you're feeling frisky, then watch Destiny as well.
Thanks.
You've talked about, having a conversation, debating Ben for a long time. What is your favorite thing about Ben Shapiro?
My favorite thing about Ben Shapiro is, at least when we're in election season, he's very critical of his own party. I appreciate that. I feel like Ben generally tries to adhere more to the fact-based arguments than other conservatives that I listen to, which is something that I appreciate because it's more fun to fight on kind of like the factual grounds of discussing things like foreign policy or whatever, rather than...
Bro, facts are cringe as fuck. What are you talking about? It's more fun to just go crazy and go wild and go kooky bananas.
People that only inhabit the idealistic or philosophical grounds because they don't want to learn about any of the facts, so I appreciate that.
Ben, you've gotten a chance to talk to Destiny now. What do you like about the guy?
A lot of the same sorts of things, but it's really fun to see.
Well, I mean, do you actually watch Destiny? I don't think that you do, so how would you say that?
How you do your process. That is a cool thing. That is a cool thing. It's a gift to the audience.
Maybe he started watching it one day, sat down with his wife. Let's watch Destiny tonight.
Because
then Ben's wife fell in love with Destiny. Now he might become a polyamorous relationship with Destiny. But don't worry, Destiny can't be satisfied with just one woman. So you'll be okay. Eventually she'll go back to Ben because he'll settle down with one girl. But Ben wouldn't take advantage of the polyamorous aspect because I just don't think he has it in him. You know what I mean? I don't think he has it in him.
Because honestly, doing what we do, so much of what we do is sitting and reading and being behind closed doors and educating yourself and talking with people. But getting to watch you is a really cool window into how people think and how people learn. So that's a really neat thing.
Well, gentlemen, this was incredible. It's an honor. Thank you for doing this today.
Hey, thanks a lot. Thanks for having me.
All right, we did it. We survived the Ben Shapiro debate. It was actually interesting. Some of it was over me. Politics is all right. Well, I'm probably more educated than most, but not even close to the most educated. But hey, it was fun.